The main character began to talk about himself. He had been an orphan since childhood who had to deal with monsters for money. Later, he learned that in the kingdom he was called the #1 adventurer, who has an A rank. The main character and several other people rode on the platform. In front of them rode the severed head of a toothy monster, and from all sides they were surrounded by jubilant people. There was a large arch behind the platform. The main character waved and smiled. People of different ages greeted him and shouted his name. The hero's name was Aldred. Aldred began to lower her hand and think that he no longer had problems in life and was no longer hungry. Aldred found himself in a spacious room, smiling sweetly at the people around him. There were several round tables in the room. After a while, Aldred stopped smiling. He exhaled heavily and looked at the floor. There was a group of people not far from Aldred. They looked at him in embarrassment. Aldred walked down the street and thought that he was 27 years old. How much longer could he be an adventurer? Lately, he has been living in the capital and strange personalities have begun to reach out to him. Aldred imagined the faces of the women and the man. Aldred found himself on the field, sitting on the ground and looking up. A large mansion was visible behind Aldred. Flowers grew around Aldred, and the tailwind lifted the petals of these flowers into the air. It was completely dark outside. The light in the mansion stopped burning, and in city buildings, on the contrary, light began to appear. Aldred was sitting at a round table in the room, with a candle and wooden mugs with a drink on the table. Besides Aldred, there were 3 other people at the table. One man shouted that Aldred really wanted to disband the team. The dark-haired man closed his eyes and said that he knew about this outcome of events. The blonde man was surprised by such news. The girl blushed and said that this news could really be true. The dark-haired man leaned on the table and said that the leader had made this decision himself. Maybe the guys were still young, but he was almost 30. Aldred looked away and said that maybe the guys had already figured out what they would do next. The blonde guy said with a smile that he had been invited to join the Royal Knights. The guys were surprised by his words. The dark-haired guy said he was planning to go on a trip. The girl blushed and said that she had been invited to the Royal School of Magic. She intended to study there. The guys asked what Aldred wanted to do next. Aldred smiled and replied that he was thinking about peaceful life in Norland. The guys looked at their leader in surprise. The guys continued to discuss Aldred's plans. Aldred regretted telling the guys about his plan. The blonde guy supported Aldred. Aldred closed his eyes and said that he had long dreamed of seeing one flower field again. The guys were very surprised, as they had not seen such a trait of Aldred before. Aldred took a sip from his mug. The dark-haired man asked again about his plans. Aldred put the mug on the table, then he lowered his head and said that he was no longer hungry. From now on he intended to live carefree. The guys looked at Aldred and supported his decision. The guys picked up wooden mugs and put them together. Aldred was riding in a cart. Aldred looked out the window and thought that he had disbanded the team so that there would be no unnecessary noise. He believes that he did the right thing. He has a long way to go. A month passed. Aldred was riding on the roof of the wagon. The wagon stopped, and someone said that they had arrived at their destination. Aldred opened his eyes, then he stood up and began to look around. Aldred had a view of a small settlement. Grape plantations were located around the crowbars. Aldred said the name of the settlement aloud. It was Norland. Aldred stared in surprise and touched the grapes. A girl in a hat came up to Aldred. The guys were discussing where Aldred came from. The girl in the hat was called Aisha. The guys were walking through a rural settlement. There were many flowering plants on the street. Aldred looked at everything around with a smile. The guys met local residents along the way. They were harvesting crops. Aisha said they were at the elder's house. Aldred was smiling at the flowers in front of the house. Aldred said with a smile that he had been here 9 years ago, but the flowers were still very beautiful. Aisha began to enter the house, and a girl met them in the house. A blonde woman met the guys and said that Aisha had really brought someone with her. Aisha put her hands on her belt and said that this guy is from Avalon and wants to live here. The woman raised her hand and said that the guys could turn to her husband. Aisha put on her hat and got ready to leave. Aldred thanked her for her help. The woman began to warn the head that they had a guest from Avalon. The men held books in their hands and began to say that he was an elder, Albus. He was interested in the purpose of Aldred's arrival to them. Aldred blushed and said that he fell in love with the beauty of this place the last time he was here. Albus smiled and said that there were other villagers who had come to the village for the same reason. The blonde woman was having a conversation. Aldred blushed as he smelled the aroma of tea. There was a cup of apple mint tea on the table. Aldred took a sip of tea from a mug and said that this drink is very relaxing. The man and the woman began to smile and said that Aldred had finally relaxed, otherwise he was very gloomy. Aldred blushed with embarrassment. Albus said that Aldred should not be shy from now on and be himself. Aldred joyfully raised his hand. The man and the woman looked at each other and laughed. Albus said that while Aldred could stay with them, they would find a place for him later. Aldred was sitting on a chair, then he abruptly lowered his head. The woman started laughing. Albus kept his hands on the table, then he said that the further Aldred intended to do, it was still far from lunch. Aldred blushed and thought about it. Aldred found himself on the street. He looked in front of him and said that at last he was in this place again. Flower petals were flying in the air around Aldred. Aldred stared at the vast field of flowers. Tears appeared on Aldred's face. Aldred was very surprised and nervously began to wipe his tears with his sleeve. Petals swirled around him and plants bloomed. Aldred's face was red. He looked at his hand. There was a flower petal lying there. Aldred started walking across the field and thinking that the flowers here change color with the season. He no longer remembers who told him about it. Aldred looked in front of him in surprise. He saw the girl. The girl had long and blonde hair and had a braided flower ornament on her head. The girl felt someone behind her and turned around. Aldred was standing there. The girl was sitting surrounded by flowers, and she had a small bouquet in her hands. Aldred wondered who this girl was surrounded by all these flowers. A drop of sweat appeared on Aldred's face, and he stared at the girl with his mouth slightly open. The girl's face was red with embarrassment. Aldred did not take his eyes off the girl. He greeted her timidly. The girl blushed even more and looked at Aldred in embarrassment and held a bouquet of flowers in her hands. Then the girl started fussing and making strange noises. The girl abruptly bent down and wished good morning to Aldred. Then she took off and ran away. Aldred said in surprise that he really looked so scary. Evening came, it became dark outside, and the stars appeared in the sky. Aldred went into Albus's house saying that he was back. Aldred blushed. A blonde woman stood in front of him and smiled. Aldred thought that it was acceptable when someone was waiting at home. Albus was putting plates on the table, and he and Aldred began to discuss the beauty of the flower field. Aldred was sitting down at the table. He blushed after Albus said that this is really a magical place. It feels great when you lie down on the cool grass. He and other residents go there to relax. Albus blushed when his wife said that it was under that tree that they met, and Albus proposed to her the same way. Albus asked Fiona not to embarrass him. Albus told Aldred that he needed to meet their daughter. Aldred blushed when he saw the blonde girl who was standing next to Albus. Albus said that her name was Flora, and Aldred would now live in their village. The girl was standing with a handkerchief in her hands. Her face was red with embarrassment. Flora stared in front of her and said Aldred's name aloud. Albus said that the guys had already met. Aldred said that he and Flora saw each other under a tree in the field. Fiona stood off to the side and chuckled. Aldred looked confused. Albus said that Aldred would spend the night with them and Flora would have to take care of him. Flora thought about it for a while, then she took off and ran away. Albus apologized for his daughter's behavior. Aldred scratched his neck and thought that Flora was shy. He was a little uncomfortable when she ran away like that. Everyone was sitting at the table. There was a lot of food on the table. Albus said they were having a feast today. Fiona replied that they had a new guest in the village, and this could be noted. Albus held the bottle in his hands and said with a smile that he had taken out a 10-year-old drink. These grapes were grown from Aisha's garden. Albus started pouring the drink. Flora looked confusedly at the filling glass. The guys raised their glasses and began to drink to the new resident of the village. Aldred took a sip and said that the drink was really delicious. Albus was glad, so there was a piece of cheese on the table. Flora started to eat the food with a fork. She looked up and looked at Aldred. Aldred opened his mouth in delight. He thought that the cheese and bread were very tasty. There were plates of food on the table in front of Aldred. He took the boat and began to fill it with food. There was less and less food on the plate. The girls looked at Aldred in surprise when he said that the food was really amazing. They could earn money from it. Fiona began to praise Flora for the dishes she had prepared. Flora blushed and thanked the guys for the praise. Aldred continued to eat with a spoon. Then there was an incomprehensible sound, and all at once began to look at Flora in surprise. Tears of embarrassment appeared in Flora's eyes, and she said that maybe Aldred wanted more. Aldred took the plate and handed it to Flora. Flora blushed, then she closed her eyes and said she was going to put on a supplement. Flora began to hand a full plate of food to Aldred. Aldred looked at Flora and thought that after a while Flora stopped being shy and she became friends. He hoped that at their next meeting they would not run away. It got dark outside, and stars began to appear in the sky. The next day the guys visited Aldred. There were things next to him. The girls were holding baskets in their hands. Albus said that Aldred could come to them at any time. Aldred thanked him for his hospitality. Albus looked at Aldred and thought that maybe Aldred had some skills or wanted to work somewhere. Aldred looked thoughtfully at the flowers and thought that he would like to complete quests. Aldred replied that he would like to hunt. Albus replied that Aldred would be very useful. There were few hunters in their village. Flora came up to Aldred and said that she had cooked dinner for Aldred. He thanked her for the generous gesture. Flora looked at her hands in embarrassment and did not say that Aldred should not thank her. Aldred thought Flora was very nice. Aldred and Albus walked through the village and discussed that Aldred's future home, which should be located in the west, closer to the flower field. The sun was shining on the vine. Albus said that Aldred could choose one of the vacant houses in the west. The guys ended up by the river. Then at one of the proposed houses, Aldred shyly refused every house they approached. The guys found themselves at another house. It was surrounded by trees on all sides. Aldred scratched his chin thoughtfully. Then they continued on their way. The guys were walking over a wooden bridge. Aldred looked at the fish in the river with a smile. Albus went ahead to the last house. The guys went into the house. It was very dusty and gloomy for the ladies. Aldred put his things at the entrance. Aldred saw the box and smiled. The guys found themselves on the street in front of the house. They were sitting on the ground and eating sandwiches. Aldred said he wanted to live in this house if there was a person in the village who could make furniture. Albus replied that the man lived across the street from Aldred. Albus pointed his finger at the house. Then he looked at Aldred and said that the master's name was Toke. It would be possible to visit him tomorrow. Aldred thanked him for his help and the men said goodbye. Aldred armed himself with a dustpan and a broom and began cleaning the house. He washed and swept the floors, and as a result, Aldred was all dirty himself. Aldred looked at the room. It sparkled with cleanliness. Aldred thought that he would have to go to Toke's tomorrow, and now he was going to take a bath. Aldred poured water from a bucket into a wooden box. Aldred put 2 bracelets on his arm, then he put his hand in front of him and began to conjure. Water began to appear from the magic sign. Then a flame began to appear from the magic icon to heat the water. Steam began to appear from the water. Aldred looked out in fright and said that everything should have gone smoothly. Aldred was in the water. Aldred got out of the tub and put a towel on his shoulders. Then he started looking for his clothes. Suddenly someone from the street started coming into the house. It was Flora. She said she had brought dinner. Aldred dropped his towel and found himself naked in front of Flora. She raised her hands and tears began to flow from her eyes. Flora ran out of Aldred's house. He thought that the distance between them had shortened a little, 1 step forward and 3 steps back. A small village was surrounded on all sides by vineyard fields, and a forest area spread beyond the fields. The sun was high in the sky. Aldred was lying on the floor, the sunbeams shining on him. Aldred stood up and said that it was really morning. Aldred's house was small and 1 story, with a chimney sticking out of the roof. The sun's rays fell on the tiles of the house. Aldred said he had his own house now. Aldred got dressed and decided to go to Toke. Aldred remembered yesterday's incident with Flora. He was walking and thought that he wanted to get along with her, but it turns out the opposite. Aldred found himself at Toki's house. He went onto the veranda and began to climb the stairs. There was a table and chairs on the veranda. Aldred sat down on a chair and howled in delight at its beauty. Toku looked out of the window and said that he was surprised to see a man who was so amazed by an ordinary chair. Toku smiled and continued to say that he was grateful to Aldred for the praise. Aldred looked at him in surprise. Toku invited Aldred into the house. Toku was holding vegetables in his hands and said if Aldred would like to join the breakfast. Aldred went into the house and agreed to the offer. Aldred came to the table and was looking forward to breakfast. Then he lay down on the table and thought that the table was pleasant to the touch. There were plates of food on the table. The guys started the meal. Aldred was enjoying a delicious meal. Toku began to tell the recipe for their breakfast. Aldred continued to eat greedily. There was a sink and a stove in the room. Toku began to worry about Aldred as he hadn't eaten since last night. Aldred calmed Toku down. There were plates and boats on the table. Aldred wanted to tell the story of yesterday with Flora but changed his mind. Toku began to persuade Aldred. Toku insisted on telling yesterday's story. Aldred thought that Toku had hooligan tendencies. Then Toku shouted that Aldred was having an affair with Flora. Aldred began to tell the story of yesterday. Toku put his hands together, then he started laughing and said that Flora had really seen him naked. Aldred blushed and pursed his lips. Toku couldn't stop laughing. Aldred said that Toku should stop laughing. He was very uncomfortable in front of Flora. Now they will become even more distant. Toku said that he and Flora almost never talked. Aldred thoughtfully said that it wasn't because Toku's face looked too scary. Toku frowned and frowned. The guys stayed at Toku's house. They came to the workshop. Aldred said he needed all the basic household items. There were wooden planks next to Aldred. Toku straightened his hair and said that Aldred would have to live without furniture for a while since he had a lot of orders, but he would make him a bed. Toku pointed to the sofa and said that Aldred could buy this sofa. Aldred decided to sit down on a nearby chair. Toku shouted that he hadn't finished fixing it yet. Aldred nevertheless sat down on a chair and said with a smile that this chair was suitable for him in the bedroom. Toku stood aside. Toku pointed to the side and said that he would bring another chair from the warehouse, in case Aldred had visitors. Aldred wondered if he was too used to being alone. The guys ended up at Aldred's house. Toku sat down on the sofa and said that he was tired but still needed to measure the place under the bed. Aldred handed the drink to Toku. Toku took the glass and remembered yesterday's story with Flora. Aldred said Toku was acting like a child. Toku continued to laugh merrily. Aldred took the glasses and carried them to the wooden table. Aldred, with a smile on his face, said that the furniture in the house had become more comfortable. A closet, a table, and several chairs appeared in the room. The guys started discussing the details of the comfort. Toku was sitting on the couch. Toku smiled and said that he would definitely show you places where you can find cozy things for home. Aldred thanked Toka for his help. The next day, Aldred and Aisha met on the street. Aldred told me that he lives next to Toku. Aisha was wiping her face with a towel. The guys started discussing the move. Then someone started approaching the guys. Flora was behind Aisha. Flora and Aldred stared at each other in horror. Aldred wondered why Flora was here. Aldred blushed and stood silently with his head down. Flora hid behind Aisha. Aisha closed her eyes and sighed heavily. Aisha pushed Flora aside. Flora awkwardly backed away, and the guys awkwardly greeted each other. Aldred and Flora stood facing each other and were silent. Aldred looked at Aisha. Her face was very gloomy. Aldred closed his eyes and thought that Aisha looked like she knew everything. Then Aldred abruptly bends down in front of Flora. Aldred started apologizing for yesterday's incident. Flora replied that it wasn't his fault. In turn, Flora bent down and asked for forgiveness. Flora put her hand to her red face. Aldred thought that she didn't blame him and was even apologizing to him herself. Aisha coughed and drew the guys' attention to her. Then she said that she went to do her job and the guys could go home together. Aldred and Flora were red-faced, looking at Aisha in embarrassment. The guys were surprised by Aisha's suggestion. The guys were walking along the grape plantation. A man was walking in the opposite direction from the guys, followed by a small loaded horse. Flora was wondering what Aldred was planning to do today. Aldred walked forward and said that he would like to meet the village hunter. Flora replied that Aldred had only been in the village for 4 days, wasn't he in too much of a hurry. Aldred and Flora caught up, and the guy said that he wanted to be useful to the villagers. Aldred laughed and said they would have plenty of meat soon. Several girls were walking towards the guys, laughing loudly. The girls walked past the guys. Aldred turned around and looked at them. Then he said that why do people here dress so brightly? Flora introduced the flowers and replied with a smile that the plants in this place bloom all year round. So people try to match this. The guys ended up at Flora's house. They met Flora's father on the street. Aldred said that his house has become more comfortable with the advent of furniture, and he would also like to meet the village hunter. Aldred looked at Flora and smiled. Aldred said he couldn't wait to start working. Flora's father replied that in that case he would introduce him to the village hunter. Aldred changed into a different suit, gloves appeared on his hands, and a bow and arrows appeared on his back. Aldred thought he wouldn't need his sword. Now was the time to move out. In front of Aldred stood a man with a short girl. The man said his name was Lawrence and he was a village hunter. Aldred asked that the guys are father and daughter. The man and the girl turned away from each other in displeasure, and the girl said that Aldred was wrong. These words sound outrageous. Lawrence replied that the girl next to him was named Karina and she was his student. Then the girl introduced herself. She was 12 years old. Karina was outraged that Aldred would not even say anything about the fact that she was a hunter. Aldred smiled and replied that it didn't matter if you were a woman or a man. The main thing was that you had excellent hunting skills, and the rest didn't matter. Karina smiled and replied that she agreed with Aldred's words and wanted to help the village. Lawrence looked at Karina and said that she still needed to study, and only after a while would she become a hunter. Karina replied that she would do it in the shortest possible time. 2 girls appeared not far from the guys. Karina pointed her finger at the mountain and that's where they're going. Lawrence thanked Aldred for her support. Aldred smiled and said that Lawrence looked like his father. Lawrence blushed and slapped Aldred on the shoulder. The guys were walking along a narrow path. They were surrounded by trees. Mushrooms grew at the roots of the trees. At this time, the guys were discussing in what a good place the village is located. Aldred stopped and asked what kind of fruits could be grown here. Karina thoughtfully named different types of fruits. Lawrence asked if Aldred had ever heard of such fruits before. In the forest, you could hear the guys talking. Aldred said he had heard of some. Lawrence stood up and showed the fruit that was mentioned earlier. Aldred put his hand to his lips in surprise and examined the fruit. Lawrence started eating fruits and treated Aldred to them. Aldred chewed and thought that when he was little, he often ate everything in a row, which caused him problems. Karina seemed to be on a tree strewn with fruits. Karina picked a fruit and gave it to Aldred, then she said that this fruit is called alu, its peel is tough but the flesh is delicious. Karina raised her hand and said that there was a very bitter taste near the peel of this fruit. Lawrence said through laughter that this was actually the most delicious part. The guys continued walking through the forest, then they found themselves in a mountainous area. The guys stopped at a bush, and then they saw the tracks of some kind of animal. Lawrence sat down next to the animal tracks and said that these were deer tracks and they were fresh. The other guys were nearby and listened attentively to Lawrence. The guys started discussing that they should hunt down this deer, while they should be on the alert. Karina and Aldred walked next to the bushes and examined them. Aldred stepped on a branch and crushed it, and Lawrence stood behind him and looked at Aldred. An unusual radiance began to emanate from Aldred. The guys were standing next to each other in the bushes, then they noticed a deer. He was standing not far from them and eating grass. The guys started discussing the plan of attack on this deer. Aldred took the bow and arrow in his hands and started aiming at the deer. Lawrence and Chris stood nearby and watched what was happening. After a while, Aldred fired an arrow straight at the target. The arrow shot straight into the deer's head. He made a heart-rending sound and drooled from his mouth. A loud sound rang out throughout the neighborhood. The guys approached the deer lying on the ground. Lawrence said that Aldred is very good at shooting, probably even better than himself. Aldred was embarrassed. Karina said that Aldred really shoots better than her teacher. Lawrence looked at Karina with tears in his eyes and shouted that Karina should not say such things about him. Karina replied that she would then be Aldred's student. Lawrence took Karina by the head and started shaking her. The guys ended up in the village. They brought a deer carcass with them. Residents began to admire the size of the defeated deer. Lawrence said that thanks to Aldred's abilities, the villagers can get enough of deer meat. Aldred smiled and introduced himself to the rest of the villagers who were standing next to him. The villagers greeted Aldred joyfully. Aldred smiled and thanked the villagers for their hospitality. Aldred and the other villagers began butchering the meat. Aldred thought that some of the meat would be divided among the residents, the other part would go on sale, the rest of the parts would also be useful in the household. Aldred came to Flora's house. She opened the door for him. Flora's face was red and she greeted Aldred. Aldred scratched his head in embarrassment and handed the bundle to Flora, then he said it was a gift for their kindness. Flora thanked Aldred and asked him to stay for a while. Flora said that Aldred could come over for dinner tonight. Aldred's face turned red and he asked if everything was going to be all right. Flora answered positively to his question. Aldred found himself at Toke's wooden house. There were several wooden barrels next to the house. Aldred was at the door and said that he had to open the door. He brought some meat. Aldred started to open the door. Aisha stood in front of him. She made a displeased face and greeted Aldred. Aisha put her hands together and said that she had given Tauka a chair to fix. Aldred held nuts in his hand and began to treat the children with them. Toku was holding a stool in his hands. Toku glared at the girl when she said that his bad chair almost caused a disaster. Toku held the bar in his hands and replied that things should be handled well and not like Aisha. Aldred closed his eyes and thought that it was only Aisha's fault. Toku pointed at the warehouse and said he would not give her any more discount. The door to the workshop slammed shut, and Toku continued to grumble, which made Aldred laugh. Aldred unwrapped a piece of meat and said he was paying back Toku's debt. Then the guys started discussing ways to cook delicious meat. At the next moment, Aisha appeared in the room. She hovered over a piece of meat and said that such meat goes well with a grape drink. The guys looked at her in surprise. A wooden stool stood next to the guys. They started discussing the future design of Aisha's chair. Then Aisha said that maybe Aldred has a reward for her too. Aisha put her hand to her face and thought about it. There was a dense forest around Toku's house. Aisha said they should go to Aldo's houses and eat venison. A girl in a dress and with her hair down stood in the doorway. Aldred blushed and asked confusedly who this girl was. Aisha handed the basket of food to Aldred and said that actually she doesn't always wear the same thing. Aldred was very surprised as he did not recognize Aisha. Toku started laughing and making fun of Aisha. She ordered him to shut up. Aisha was holding Toka by the ear, and Flora appeared in front of the guys with a basket in her hands. The guys greeted Flora, and Toku introduced himself to her with a frightening smile. Toku blushed when the guys started to justify his frightening expression. Flora blushed and introduced herself to the guys through laughter. The guys laid out the groceries on the table. The guys started discussing what they wanted to cook stew and who would do what stage of cooking. There were 2 pieces of meat on the table. Toku held the spice boxes in his hands, then he said that he had prepared well for cooking. The guys took turns agreeing with Toku. He distributed the roles in cooking. Aldred was doing the roasting, Aisha was doing the meat, Flora was supposed to saddle Sake with a wine drink, and Toku himself decided to do the vegetables. There was a basket on one table and several elongated looms on the other. Aldred held vegetables in his hands and said that toku soup was amazing. Toku replied that he had a few secrets. Aldred and Aisha were cutting meat. Aisha started threatening Toku, who was holding mushrooms in his hands. Then Aldred started chopping vegetables and frying them. Everyone else was busy with their work. Aisha closed her eyes, drooling from her mouth, and she said that some smells were very good. Toku held the cabbage and said that Aisha should control herself and cut the meat. Aldred was stirring vegetables in a frying pan, and Flora was standing next to him and smiling. Flora said that Aldred looked like he was having fun. Aldred agreed with Flora's words. Toku wondered who Aldred used to be. The girls looked at Aldred in surprise when he told them about his past. Aldred took the meat with tongs. Then he began to smile awkwardly when the girls said that they could feel safe since Aldred was with them, who could fight monsters. Aldred put the meat in the pan and said that he had retired from the case, so the guys should not rely on him too much. The guys drilled into cooking. Aldred and Flora exchanged glances and began to smile. Toku looked at the thoughtful Aisha. The guys fried the meat, then sliced it, and vegetables were cooked in pots and pans. Aldred and Aisha started putting plates on the table. Flora and Toku were standing at the kitchen tables. Aisha picked up a piece of meat with a fork and put it in Aldred's mouth. Then Aisha held up her finger. Aldred chewed the meat and said it was pretty good. Toku looked at Aldred and said that maybe something had happened between them. Aldred replied that they were fine. Aisha was holding a plate of meat and turned away from the guys. Flora came up to the guys and put the plate on the table, then she smiled maliciously and said that Aldred had sauce in his mouth. Aldred was confused. Aisha started calling him names without turning to Aldred. Aldred looked at her in surprise. Smoke was coming out of the chimney that was on the roof of the house. The guys finished cooking the food. The guys sat down at the table. There were many different meat dishes on the table. The guys hovered over the table and admired each dish. Then the guys started discussing that there was more meat, but Flora and Aldred were constantly eating while cooking. Then the girls began to argue with each other. Aldred watched them from the sidelines in fear. The guys armed themselves with forks and Aldred said it was time to try the food. He hoped that everyone would like the cooked food. The guys took the meat with forks and began to eat it. Aldred closed his eyes and began to shake with pleasure. Then she began to praise the guys for their cooking skills. Flora closed her eyes and covered her mouth with her hand. Then she said that Aldred had done a good job too. Aisha's face turned red and she held up her finger. She agreed with the guy's words. Toku looked at the piece of meat and said that she had done her best. Toku looked away and said that the steak Aisha was making was a little overexposed. She replied that she was satisfied with everything. Aldred supported Aisha. Flora said that the wine drink should be accompanied by bread and salad. Toku ate with a fork and Aisha made herself a sandwich. Aldred repeated after her and said that it was really very tasty. Flora was smiling. Aisha started eating the soup and said it was also very good. The guys continued to eat and discuss recipes. Flora took a berry and put it in Aldred's mouth. He ate it sheepishly. Aldred's eyes began to shine. He realized that these were pico seeds, adding their own flavor. Aldred looked at Flora and thanked her. Flora held a spoon in her hands and stuck her tongue out at Aldred. The guys finished eating and a tea set appeared on the table. Aldred said that Flora's tea was very tasty and Flora thanked him. Aisha and Toku were enjoying tea with their eyes closed. Aisha turned to Toku and asked if she looked like a princess. Then the guys started discussing who drinks tea and how and further plans for the day. There were several empty cups on the table. The guys ended up on the street. The girls were running after each other and the boys were discussing the upcoming fishing trip which they went on. The guys ended up by the river. Flora stood behind everyone and tried to rest. The guys started discussing Aisha's stamina. Then the guys took off their shoes and left them on the shore. The guys dipped their heads into the river to cool off. Aldred smiled and pulled his head out of the river. Then he straightened his hair and looked at Toku. Toku looked at Aldred in embarrassment when he said that Toku had a strange hairstyle with wet hair. The girls were sitting on the shore with their feet in the water, and Aisha began to mimic Toku. Toku looked at Flora. She also said that his hairstyle was strange. Toku was offended and sat down on a rock. Flora offered to cheer him up. Aisha started laughing loudly and mimicking Toku. Then a jet of water splashed in her direction. It was Toku. Aisha was all wet and didn't understand why Toku did it. Aisha started spraying Toku and some of the water got into Aldred. The guys started furiously spraying each other and arguing. Aldred was dripping water. He looked ahead and saw Flora. Her face was red and she was stretching her hands towards the water. Flora's clothes were all wet. She and Aldred were splashing water and Toku and Aisha were splashing water on each other. Flora's hair and clothes were damp and her face was red. She was splashing water at Aldred and laughing loudly. Aldred put his hands in the water and said he was going to spray it too. Then he froze in place and blushed in an instant. Flora spread her arms to the side in surprise and looked down at her damp clothes. Then she began to scream loudly and embarrassedly. The boy's shoes continued to stand on the shore. Toku wrung out his clothes and said that Aisha allows herself a lot, although they are not a couple. Aldred was carrying a change of clothes and smiling. Toku took a towel and began to wipe his head. Aldred blushed and looked at the girls who were sitting on the log. Aisha looked at Flora and scratched her head. Flora covered her soaked body with her hands. Aldred went over to the girls and gave them each a towel. Aisha covered her head with towels and looked away while she thanked Aldred for his help. Aisha looked at Flora and praised her beautiful legs. Aldred was handing a towel to Flora at the time. Flora abruptly covered herself and started shouting that Aisha had much prettier legs. Aldred blushed and stared ahead in embarrassment. Aldred blushed even more and let out a silent scream, then he handed the towel to Flora. Aldred thought he was really looking at Flora's legs. Flora looked down sheepishly and thanked Aldred for his help. Toku was holding a fishing rod and said he was going fishing. Aisha replied that they would join the guys a little later. Aldred was worried about Aisha's condition as she was soaked through. Aisha smiled and said that Aldred shouldn't worry. There were a lot of rocks on the shore. After a while, the fish began to bite. The guys were standing on the stone bank of the river. Aldred shouted that he had caught a fish and it was already the 6th. Toku made a face and said that he had caught only 3 and it was not fair. There was a fish swimming in the water. Shoals of fish swam in the water. The guys stood on the shore and caught it. The river was wide, flanked by dense forest. Aldred started to bite again. Toku was outraged. Aldred looked into the bucket where the fish were swimming and said that they had caught enough fish to feed the whole village. Aldred was holding a bucket and said that he had caught a lot of fish now. Toku was angry and didn't want to answer. The girls came up to the guys. They expected that the guys had already finished fishing. The girls approached Aldred and began discussing his successful catch. Toku stood aside and was upset. Then his fishing rod started twitching and he started pulling the line. Aldred and the girls stood aside. They looked at Toka and encouraged him in every possible way. Toku began to jerk the fishing rod and shout loudly. A big fish jumped out of the river, but in fact when Toka picked it up it turned out to be small. The guys praised Toku's abilities. Aisha looked at Toku and said that the fish would slip out of Toku's hands and fall back into the river. Toku glared at Aisha and started threatening her. The guys got together and started discussing what they can cook this fish now. Aisha began to speak out about Toku's unsuccessful catch. Then the guys split up into pairs and started talking. Toku looked at Aldred and did not understand what he was doing with the fish. Aldred began to tell me how to cook fish properly. The guys looked at Aldred in surprise. He did not expect such attention and was a little embarrassed. The guys lit a fire and started cooking fish. Someone started calling Aisha from behind. The girl in the apron pointed her finger at Aisha and said that she was really shirking from work again. Then the girls started talking. The stranger looked at Aldred in surprise, then she bowed down in front of him and introduced herself. Her name was Aina and she was Aisha's sister. Aldred introduced himself to Aina. Toku said that Aisha needed to get back to work. Aina supported his words. Aisha looked at the fish cooking and said that as soon as she ate, she would immediately start working. Aina started asking for the guys. Meanwhile, in the kingdom of Avalon, in a large building with beautiful architecture, someone started shouting loudly. It was a blonde man. He was indignant about Aldred's disappearance. The dark-haired man listened to the king's screams and remembered how Aldred's companions had told him where he could be. The man continued discussions about Aldred's whereabouts. The king crossed his legs and menacingly said that Aldred's rest had come to an end. He must immediately return to the kingdom. The dark-haired man bowed and replied that he understood everything. Aldred, Flora, and Toku each took sticks with fried fish and began to eat it. The guys said with one voice that the fish was very tasty. The two sisters silently enjoyed eating the fish. Aina said that this time the fish is not bitter but delicious. Aisha started repeating Aldred's words about cooking delicious fish. Toku was surprised by Aisha's cunning. The guys were sitting around the campfire, and Toku said that Aldred should start selling fish. Then Toku began to treat the guys with fruits. Flora tasted the fruit and blushed. Toku squeezed the juice of the fruit onto the fried fish. The two sisters continued to enjoy the taste of fish. Aldred held the fish in his hands and looked at the happy faces of the guys. Then he thought that today was an amazing day. He would like the rest of the days to be like this. The guys were sitting on logs and eating leftover fish. There were backpacks and empty wooden buckets next to them, and behind the guys there was a beautiful view of the river and the dense forest. A large bird was flying in the air. An arrow hit it. The bird began to scream loudly and spread its large wings to the sides. A bird with an arrow will fall to the ground. Karina ran to the fallen bird, then she picked it up and said that Aldred was really a shooting master. Aldred held up his finger and said he just felt the wind moving well. Aldred reflected that he had a lot of life experience, but Karina probably didn't have much of it. Aldred said that only experience and hard work would help. Karina said she went to get some fruit. Aldred was hanging carcasses on a tree. The guys stopped at the bushes. Then Karina said that a good hunter will always be of interest to women because she's right. Aldred was embarrassed. Aldred smiled sheepishly. The guys were picking berries and started discussing love affairs. Then the guys returned to the village where they were met by children. The children were interested in who Karina had caught this time. She caught a rabbit. Aldred said that rabbits are very fast. Karina turned around and replied that it would be stipulated by the one who knocks down birds in the air. The guys were delighted. Then the children were distracted by the fruits they had picked. Aldred turned around and started walking away from the guys. On his way, he met a girl to whom he handed the collected herbs. The girl thanked Aldred for his help. The children moved away from the guys and started waving goodbye to them. Karina looked at Aldred and said that Aldred had managed to get used to the kids. Aldred waved back at the guys. The sun's rays fell on the village. Aldred opened the wooden windows and looked out at the beautiful view he had from the window. Aldred's room had a large bed, a closet, a bedside table, and a small chair. Aldred and the rest of the villagers were at the well and taking water. Aldred found himself at home. There were plates of various kinds of food on the table. Aldred ate the food and looked at it happily. Then Aldred found himself on the street where he met Flora. The guys greeted each other. The guys started harvesting and talking about vegetables, and then they started trying them. Aldred stood in front of Flora and they began to discuss further plans for the day. Aldred replied that he wanted to develop land near his home. Flora listened attentively to Aldred's plans. Then Flora blushed sharply. The girl raised her hands, clenched into a fist, and said that she wanted to help Aldred with cultivating the soil near his house. Aldred thoughtfully agreed to Flora's suggestion. Flora's eyes began to sparkle and she said that she would ask her father for tools and come back. Flora ran home. Aldred reflected that Flora was really amazing. The guys ended up next to Aldred's house. There were tools lying on the ground next to them. The guys started discussing plans for where they would start. The guys started putting on gloves and armed themselves with gardening tools, while they discussed that they could try to plant radishes first, and then carrots and cabbage. Flora was smiling sweetly. Flora squatted down and began to cut the grass. Aldred was nearby and doing the same thing. Aldred looked thoughtfully at the gardening tool and then at Flora. Aldred began to follow Flora's movements. Flora looked at Aldred and said that he was good with this instrument. Aldred looked away in embarrassment and thought that he had learned to use it by looking at Flora. The guys were collecting grass in wicker baskets. After that, the guys discussed Aldred's past life. Aldred alternated between smiling and nervously whispering under his breath about various monsters. Aldred thought nervously that he had almost blabbed about the fights and a lot more. Flora was behind Aldred, whispering to herself. Aldred turned around and asked if Flora was all right. Flora abruptly stood up and picked up another instrument. Then she said that if she saw a monster, she would run away in a panic. The guys got to their feet and were ready to start plowing the land. Aldred swung and started hitting the ground. The guys were nearby and continued to plow the ground. Aldred began to wipe sweat from his face. Aldred rubbed his face with his hand and looked at the plowed field. Flora was next to him, holding a small vessel in her hands and praising Aldred for the work he had done. Aldred started drinking from Flora's mug. She began to tell me how Aldred should use the plowing tool more correctly. Flora blushed and began to smile broadly. Aldred looked at her and thought that it would be nice to have such a girl next to him. Maybe he could still live a conscientious life. Aldred spent all his days hunting and working in the field, and after a while the fruits began to sprout. The guys continued to work in the field and fertilize the harvest. Aldred was looking at the sprouts. Flora said that this is a mandatory process. You need to delay harvesting. Flora had a basket of plants in her hands. Aldred was sitting in the field tending the plants. He thought he spent most of his time working on the field. Flora helped him in the cultivation of the field. They were having fun. After a while, they carried a basket of grass together. They harvested the first radish harvest. Aldred was working in the field. Flora came up to him. She held a basket in her hands and greeted Aldred. The guys started discussing the harvest and mutual assistance. Flora blushed. She looked away and handed the basket to Aldred. Then she said that maybe Aldred would like to have lunch with her. Aldred agreed to Flora's proposal. The guys decided to go to the flower field and have lunch there. The guys stood in the field and talked about the beauty of this field. The guys looked at the flowers and discussed them. Flora looked away and sat down by one of the bushes. Aldred looked at Flora. He didn't understand what she was going to do. Flora held several flowers in her hand and said that some flowers are edible and some are used in medicine. Aldred looked at the flowers and listened to what Flora was saying about them. Aldred put his hand to his chin and thought about something. Aldred vividly remembered the girl's legs and dress. Then Aldred said that 9 years ago someone had already told him about it. Then Aldred got scared because he heard a crash. Flora fell to the ground and started reaching for her basket. Aldred picked up the basket and looked at Flora's crying face. Aldred took a handkerchief and began to wipe away the tears that were rolling down Flora's face. Aldred said Flora needed to be patient for a while. Flower petals were flying around the guys in the air. Aldred looked at Flora's face in surprise. She looked at him with tear-stained eyes. Aldred studied Flora's face thoughtfully. Flora blushed even more. She opened her mouth and tried to say something. The guys stood and looked at each other. Flower petals swirled around them. Suddenly, Aldred's stomach began to rumble. Flora put her hand to her face and started laughing. Aldred blushed and began scratching his head thoughtfully, then he apologized for the misunderstanding. Flora started walking forward. She said with a smile on her face that it was already lunch and it was time for them to go. Flower petals were flying around Flora. Aldred followed her. Aldred looked at the petals and thought that just in time his stomach began to rumble. Flora wanted to say something, but he interrupted her. Maybe she would say a little later when the time came. Flora's face was red, her lips were shaking, she was about to cry. Aisha looked at her suspiciously and said that Flora hadn't told him today either. The girls were sitting at a table with a tea set on it. Flora lowered her hands to her feet and shrank all over. Aisha was sitting opposite. She put her hands together and looked at Flora with displeasure. Flora looked at the tea set and answered Aisha's question positively. Aisha thought that her best friend Flora had come to her for advice. Aisha introduced Aldred and looked at Flora's clasped hands. Then she thought that Aldred liked Flora, but because of her shyness she could not admit to him. Aisha looked at Flora's confused face and thought that Flora is always kind and attentive to others. She is very beautiful. Most likely she suffers from her personality, since she cannot admit her feelings to Aldred. Flora blushed even more and was embarrassed when Aisha said that she had liked Aldred 9 years ago. Aisha leaned against the table and sighed heavily. Then she thought that she did not know all the details of the past. But the guys had already seen each other 9 years ago. Aisha imagined how the guys interacted with each other. Then she thought that at that time Flora was 9 and Aldred was 18. That's when Flora fell in love with him. Aisha looked at Flora and said that Aldred himself remembered her from that meeting. Flora looked down and with a smile on her face began to fidget in her chair. Then Flora replied that Aldred remembered something from the events of 9 years ago. Aisha shouted in surprise that Flora understood this. Flora said that she had told Aldred about the flowers, and he replied that he had already heard this information from someone. Aisha clenched her hands into a fist and shouted that everything was going well. Flora put her hands to her face and enthusiastically said that when she realized that Aldred had remembered her, she was very happy and even cried. Aisha blushed and put her hand to her face. Then she said that Flora had really been thinking about Aldred all these 9 years. Aisha thought Flora was being very clever. Flora put her hands to her face and started turning her head. Then she said that she was very happy, so much so that she couldn't think. Flora looked at Aisha and continued to say that then Aldred wiped her tears with his handkerchief. They were very close, it was very exciting. Aisha's face twisted. Aisha covered her face with her hands and thought that Flora was really hopeless. Flora said in a frightened voice that she couldn't have done anything else. Flora put her fingers together and the girls continued to discuss the events related to Aldred. The cups that were on the table no longer had a drink. Flora held up her finger and said that she and Aldred often spend time in the place. Then Flora thought about it and looked away. Flora looked down in embarrassment and said that they accidentally touch each other while working. Aisha looked at Flora strangely, drooling from her mouth. Aisha slammed down on the table and screamed that Flora was still a child. Flora nervously asked if there was anything else she could do. Aisha put her hand to her chin and thought about it. Then she poked her finger into Flora's body and said that Flora should go up to Aldred and cuddle up to him, then tell him about her feelings. Flora covered herself with her hands and screamed in embarrassment that she couldn't do something so embarrassing. Aisha said that in this case, what can Flora herself offer? Flora put her hand to her face in surprise when Aisha said that if Flora didn't act now, another girl would take Aldred away. Aisha took a cup in her hand and the girls continued to discuss Aldred, that he was a very enviable groom. Aisha held the cup in her hands and said that Flora should confess to Aldred. Tears began to appear in Flora's eyes, and in a trembling voice she said that she was very shy. She could not lose even the current relationship. Aisha looked thoughtfully at the flowers and thought that there must be a way for Flora to express her feelings herself. Aisha had an idea and said that it was possible to express feelings with flowers, as Flora's father had done. Flora put her hand to her face and shouted enthusiastically that it was a good idea. Aisha began to cheer Flora up and remind her that other girls could take Aldred away. Flora's face turned even redder, and she replied that she understood everything. She was going to collect those flowers for Aldred and give them to him and then confess her feelings. Aisha looked at Flora with a smile on her face. Meanwhile, Aldred and Karina were walking through the forest. On the one hand, they were surrounded by lush bushes, and on the other by tables and tree stumps. The guys heard a strange sound and stopped. Aldred was looking ahead warily, and Karina was standing behind him. Aldred scratched his face and said that the forest was very strange today. Karina replied that the animals were too quiet. There was a clatter of hooves and Aldred became alert. Aldred took out his bow and arrows, and Karina repeated after him. The guys started aiming and discussing that 2 deer were moving from the west. Deer with branching horns ran out of the bushes. Aldred and Karina noticed them and fired their arrows. The arrows of the guys hit the heads of the animals animals collapsed to the ground. The guys lowered the bow to the bottom and looked at the bodies of the animals. The guys went to the bodies of the animals. While they discussed that they had a good catch today, now it's time for them to return to the village. Someone jumped out from behind the bushes. It was Karina's teacher. He was smiling broadly. And Karina herself did not expect his appearance and was very scared. Karina clenched her hand into a fist and nervously said that she thought the bear was moving towards her. The man scratched his head and said that Karina's fears were not in vain. The man showed the guys a piece of wool. The guys started discussing that they had found bear tracks nearby. They should gather other hunters and tell them about it. Karina nervously looked at the guys, who began to calm her down. The men looked at each other, and the teacher said that bears do not always enter villages, but they can get to the flower garden. The teacher stroked Karina's head. Aldred began to think that they needed to call helpers to deal with the village. But the guild is far away, so Aldred himself should be more wary. The teacher stroked Karina's head and laughed. Aldred imagined a flower field and looked away. Then he thought that he had to protect the villagers from the bear by any means. Aldred stared warily into the forest. Then he thought that he would have to pick up the sword again. The guys decided to return to the village. Karina's teacher shouted that he would dissuade the elder. Karina should notify the south, and Aldred would warn the people in the flower field. The guys started running in different directions to carry out the orders given to them. Aldred quickly ran past the vegetable fields towards the village. The children were harvesting. When they saw Aldred, they began to greet him and ask about hunting. Aldred excused himself and ran past the children, dust rising into the air from Aldred's fast running. Aldred approached the man and said that a monster had appeared in the mountains, and Aldred had come here to warn the people in the flower garden. The blond man screamed. Then he and Aldred began to discuss the monster and the danger it could cause to the villagers. Aldred ran to look for other villagers to warn them of the danger. The blond man was telling the residents about the monster, and Karina's teacher was doing the same. The villagers were scared. Aldred found himself in a field. He met a woman with children and informed them of the danger. Then Aldred started shouting loudly and calling for people who might be in the flower garden. There was no one in the flower garden. After a while, the guys found themselves at Toku's house. Toku was holding a bow and aiming. The guys were discussing the red bear. Aldred watched Toku practice with a smile. Toku was shaking with tension. Toku said he can make bows, but he's still bad at shooting them. Toku shot an arrow at the target. The arrow that Toku fired hit the trunk of a tree. Toku froze in one position and did not move. For a while, the guys looked at the steel and were silent. Toku squeezed his eyes shut and exhaled heavily. Then he said that he was already better than before. Aldred stood aside and was sweating profusely. The guys looked at the target and discussed archery skills. Aldred was talking to a girl and an elderly woman, and Albus started running towards them and shouting that he couldn't find Flora. There were no people on the streets of the village. Albus and Aldred discussed that they had not seen Flora for a long time. Perhaps she was now in the vineyards. Albus looked down in frustration and said that he really hoped that Flora was in the vineyards. Albus's face became even sadder. Albus looked down and said he hoped the same thing wouldn't happen as 9 years ago. Aldred wanted to say something. He abruptly began to be known by someone. Aisha was running to the guys. She was crying. Aisha grabbed Aldred's hands and tried to catch her breath and say something. Aldred realized that something had happened to Flora. Aisha clung to Aldred. Aldred tried to find out what made her so nervous. Aisha couldn't calm down. Her face was red and tears were flowing from her eyes. She only said the name of Aldred and Flora. Aldred stared at the girl in fright. Aldred began to shake with fear. He looked up in fright. Aldred held the hands of a tearful Aisha. Albus stood next to her and tried to calm her down. Beyond the lush crowns of the trees, there was a view of the high mountains. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of hooves could be heard. Several deer, one of them did not have one horn, were running from someone, jumping from stone to stone. The deer's mouth was drooling. A deer with one horn fell from a high stone to the ground. The stones began to shake. Then they completely split into small pieces. A huge monster jumped out from behind the rocks, with its mouth open and its fangs sticking out. A monster with an open mouth was chasing a deer with one horn. The monster raised its clawed paw and struck, its jaw snapped shut. The deer began to run between the thick trunks of the trees. A loud sound rang out throughout the area and a column of dust rose into the air. The deer began to fall, and around it in the air there were severed tree trunks and stone boulders. Fervor and fragments of stones filled the area. The deer was lying on the ground, with tree trunks and rocks cut up around it. Drooling from the monster's mouth, it gradually began to open its mouth. Someone was walking through the forest. The monster became alert and sharpened his hearing. The monster got up and began to inspect the surroundings. Drool and blood were flowing down his muzzle. The black monster appeared on a large boulder. He clung to it with his claws and looked around the area. The monster noticed someone not far from him. The monster looked down. Flora was sitting at the foot of the cliff where he was standing. The girl was sitting on her knees and picking herbs. There was a small basket next to her. Aldred found himself in his house. He was wary. Aldred opened the door and looked at the bandaged sword. Then Aldred said that he did not think at all that he would ever use a sword again. Aldred remembered how he met Aisha crying. She screamed that Flora could be in the place where the red bear appeared. Aldred gritted his teeth and began to unwrap the ribbon that wrapped his sword. Aldred was running through the forest and through a flower field with a sword hanging on his back. Aldred was running and thought that his body was so heavy, although he ran through the mountains while hunting, but this does not compare to those trainings when he was an adventurer. He needs to hurry. Aldred was running through a flower field. Flowers were breaking under his feet. Aldred's face was red, and he was running with his teeth clenched. It began to get dark around Aldred, and light flower petals were flying in the air. He was running and thought that he wanted to avoid fighting the monster. He came to this place to retire. Aldred stood with a sword in his hands, his cloak fluttering in the wind, and he thought that before he wanted to live happily and carefree. Having received what he wanted, he lost the reason to fight on. Aldred was still running, with a sheathed sword behind him. A flickering light appeared. Aldred thought that now he was holding a sword in his hands as before, but what was he doing it for now? Aldred remembered Flora looking at him with a smile. Aldred thought he was fighting for a priceless place in friends. He also wants to protect a loved one. He wants to protect Flora. Aldred recalled the different expressions on Flora's face and thought that he had fallen in love with her as soon as he met her, so he had to protect her by any means. Aldred stopped abruptly and started gasping for air. Aldred stopped and looked at the dark forest thicket. There was a sheathed sword on his back. Aldred tried to catch his breath and began to move through the dense shrubby plants. Beads of sweat appeared on Aldred's face, and he began to look around nervously. There were thick growing bushes around him. Aldred heard a heartrending scream. He imagined a frightened Flora who froze in place with several flowers in her hands. Aldred blushed with fear. A clawed monster with an open mouth ran after Flora. He swung his paw at Flora. The girl fell to the ground and covered herself with her hand. Aldred appeared next to him. He ran at the monster and shouted that Flora should duck. Flora obeyed Aldred. She fell to the ground and covered her head with her hands. Aldred got between Flora and the monster and dealt a crushing blow to the monster. Aldred's punch hit the monster right in the neck. The monster was disoriented, drooling from its mouth. Flora was lying on the ground, and Aldred, armed with a sword, and the monster were away from the girl. Flora kept her hands on her head, then she sat up and looked at Aldred. He was standing in front of her. The monster began to grin and get angry. Aldred asked about the girl's well-being. Flora uttered Aldred's name in fright. She continued to sit on the ground. The monster became even angrier. He began to bare his mouth and look at the armed Aldred. Flora's face was all in tears, and she was looking at Aldred in fright. He looked at her and said that it was very dangerous here and Flora needed to leave. Aldred's face was red. He froze in place, and looking at Flora's tear-stained face, he remembered a little tear-stained girl who looked like Flora. Aldred remembered how a blonde girl stood in front of him and thanked him with a smile. Aldred carried the girl in his arms across the field and remembered her story about flowers. Aldred looked at Flora sitting on the ground in fright and wondered if the girl he had saved 9 years ago was Flora. The monster opened its mouth and wanted to charge. Flora looked away, startled. Flora screamed Aldred's name, and the monster's clawed paw hovered over him. Aldred managed to dodge and put his sword in front of him, which was struck by the monster. The monster was holding onto Aldred's sword with its paw. The monster stood on its hind legs and held onto Aldred's sword. Aldred restrained the monster and began to shake with tension. Then he said that Flora needed to leave and he would be fine. Flora tried to contradict Aldred. Aldred looked at Flora and said with a smile on his face that he was sure he would not lose to the red bear, because she remembers that incident 9 years ago. Flora stared in front of her, mesmerized. After saying Aldred's words, Flora's face changed, she blushed, and tears of joy appeared in her eyes. Flora was holding flowers in her hands and started running away. Aldred and the monster held each other back. Aldred gritted his teeth and said that he finally felt his sword. Aldred waved his sword and the monster stepped back. The monster started walking in circles and baring its fangs. Aldred pulled aside the hand that held the sword, then a bright light began to emanate from the sword. Aldred was standing in a fighting position, and his sword was getting brighter by the minute. Flora hid behind a tree and watched in amazement. The monster rushed at Aldred, and Aldred in turn began to attack the monster. The monster gritted its teeth and attacked Aldred with its clawed paw. Aldred began to swing his sword, and after his attack, the monster's paw crumbled into pieces. The monster looked at his paw in surprise, its parts began to fall to the ground. Aldred stood in a fighting position with a sword in his hands. Flora's mouth dropped open in surprise. Aldred took a fighting stance and began attacking the monster. Bright lights began to appear around, and the monster began to make loud noises. After a while, the monster collapsed to the ground. Tree trunks and leaves fell next to his body. Aldred stood in front of the monster with a sword in his hands. Aldred's sword gradually ceased to glow, then Aldred sheathed the sword behind his back. Aldred thought that if mana was poured into the sword, it would improve its characteristics. It could pierce a dragon and the hard scales of a giant. Aldred blushed slightly and Flora rushed into his arms. Flora's face was all red and there were tears in her eyes. The guys were facing each other. Aldred asked if she was okay. Flora replied that she was a little scared, but Aldred saved her. The guys walked through the flower field in silence. They were confused. Aldred looked at Flora and thought that the girl he had saved 9 years ago was Flora. It was amazing that he remembered that day. Aldred's face was very red. He thought that Flora was more than a friend to him, but how to tell her about it? Flora stood to the side and stared in front of her. Flora stopped at a tree that was in a flower field and stared at it in fascination. Leaves and petals were flying in the air around the girl. The guys stopped in a flower field next to a tree. Flora remembered an incident 9 years ago. Aldred said that he only just remembered about it, for which he apologizes. Flora closed her eyes and began to tell how she tried to forget that incident, but she couldn't do it. Aldred wanted to say something, but Flora interrupted him. Flora's face turned red. She smiled and thanked Aldred for saving her. Aldred laughed and rubbed his nose. Aldred looked in surprise at Flora, who was standing in front of him with a flower in her hands. Tears appeared on Flora's face, and the wind blew her hair. Flora smiled and said that she had loved Aldred for the past 9 years. Aldred's face turned red, and he opened his mouth in surprise. Flora closed her eyes and stood smiling. Aldred began to rub his crying eyes and wondered if Flora's words could be true. Aldred took the flower from Flora's hands, and she said that if you give this flower to a person you like, then you will definitely be together. Aldred smiled and looked at Flora, then said that he loved her too. Flora blushed and tears appeared in her eyes. Aldred held the flower Flora had given him in his hand and started hugging her. Flora looked in front of her in surprise and then started hugging Aldred too. The guys stood and hugged each other for a while. Tears were streaming down Flora's face. Flower petals were flying around the guys in the air. Flora touched Aldred's smiling face. Aldred touched Flora's red face, then the guys started reaching out to each other. The guys started kissing each other. At that time they were in a flower field next to a large tree. Flower petals and tree leaves were flying in the air. The guys ended up in the village. Flowers were planted near low-rise buildings. Flora and Aldred were greeted by the villagers. They were glad that the guys were unharmed. Aldred and Flora walked hand in hand. Albus turned around in fright when he heard one of the villagers. He said that the guys had returned. Albus, his wife and Aisha ran to meet the guys. Aisha beat Albus to it. Aisha hugged Flora. Her face was tear-stained. Aisha did not stop calling Flora's name. Albus looked at the girls in surprise. Aldred looked at the fallen girls in fright. Flora and Aisha were sitting on the ground. Aisha was fearfully interested in Flora's condition, and Aisha apologized for her act. Then the girls joined hands and began to rise from the ground. Flora was standing next to her parents. Albus said that apparently Flora really wasn't hurt. Flora agreed with Albus. The rest of the villagers began to approach the guys. Everyone was happy to see the guys back. Flora hugged her mother. Albus stood and looked at the girls with a smile. Aisha stood aside and wiped her face with her hands. Aldred stood to the side and watched the scene with a grin. The inhabitants of ancient times came up to Aldred and began to slap him on the back. Everyone said with one voice that if he really went into the danger zone for Flora, only Aldred could decide on this. Aldred thought that the people around him didn't know about his past. Toku put his hands together and said with a smile that everything was safe thanks to Aldred. Aldred thanked Toka for the praise. The girls stood aside and talked about the monster that attacked Flora. As soon as the villagers realized that Flora was really attacked by a red bear, everyone fell into a stupor and silence hung in the air. Flora remembered how Aldred had fought the monster with his glowing sword. Flora began to tell that the bear attacked her, and Aldred protected her from the monster. The villagers began to fearfully discuss the history of Flora. Flora told them that the residents had nothing to worry about since Aldred had dealt with the monster. Toku and Aisha looked at the guys in surprise. Aldred closed his eyes and started rummaging in the back pocket of his trousers. Aldred said he was a former adventurer after all. Then Aldred took out and showed the inhabitants the fangs and claws of the defeated monster. Karina's teacher took the monster's claw in his hand and began to examine it. Then he said that did Aldred cope with such a strong monster alone? No one knew that Aldred was so strong. Aldred wondered if he was that fated. The villagers were silent. They looked at Flora in fright, who waved her hands and told how Aldred fought the monster. Aldred stood to the side, his face red with embarrassment. Toku and Aisha were standing next to Flora. Karina held up her finger and said that Aldred was really amazing. Her teacher supported Karina's words. Aldred was scratching his head nervously, and Karina began to swear at the boy. Karina's teacher said they needed to go get the body of the red bear. Aldred said he would go with them too. Karina's teacher winked and said that Aldred should rest. They would take care of everything themselves. Aldred needed to stay close to Flora. Karina was standing next to me and smiling sweetly. Aldred looked at Flora's flushed body. The teacher and Karina decided to move out. The rest of the residents decided to help them. Aldred and Flora's family bowed slightly in front of the residents in honor of gratitude. Toku invited Aisha to come back. Flora was encouraging Aisha. Toku turned away and started making fun of Aisha. Aisha looked at him menacingly and said that Toku should shut up. The girls joined hands and began to cheer each other up. Flora's face turned red. Then she smiled and said that if it wasn't for Aisha, she would have kept everything to herself. Aisha and Toku looked at Aldred with a smile and said that Flora would have to tell the guys the stories in more detail. Aisha and Toku left the guys. Flora's parents stayed with Flora and Aldred, and they decided to leave too. Flora looked at Aldred thoughtfully, his face turned slightly red. And he thought that today had been a hard day. Flora had better spend time with her family. Flora's mom put her hand on her shoulder, then she smiled and said that Aldred should take care of their daughter. Albus smiled and supported his wife's words. Flora's face turned red after she heard her parents' words. Aldred looked at Flora in surprise and began to smile. Flora turned to her parents. She spread her arms out to the sides and screamed that she did not understand what the parents meant. Aldred stood aside. Flora's parents looked at each other and said through laughter that Aisha told them that Flora went to the forest for the sake of that very flower, as well as this flower sticking out from behind Aldred. Aldred and Flora jumped back in fright when they heard the words of Flora's parents that the confession was successful and the guys became a couple. Flora couldn't say a word out of embarrassment. Aldred looked fearfully at the flower behind him. Flora's mom put her hands together and said with a smile that the guys had a hard day so they could stay at Aldred's house. The guys were shocked. They looked at Flora's parents in fright. Startled, Aldred asked Albus what their words might mean. Tears of happiness flowed from Albus's eyes, and he said that his girl had grown up and would soon become a bride. Aldred stood aside and turned even redder from embarrassment. Flora's parents approached Aldred and said that he would not mind if they called him father-in-law. Flora tried to calm her parents down. Aldred began to shake. Flora and Aldred were red with embarrassment, and they looked at each other. Then Flora's mom pushed her with the words that Aldred should take care of their daughter. Flora found herself in Aldred's arms. The children stood next to each other and looked confusedly at Flora's parents, who waved at them and held each other's hands. Aldred and Flora stood in place and hugged each other, their faces red with embarrassment. Low-rise buildings and shrubby plants were located behind the children. Flora and Aldred looked at each other nervously. Aldred broke the silence and said that then they could go home. Flora agreed with Aldred's suggestion. The sky spread over the village with fluffy clouds floating on it. The boys walked side by side to Aldred's house. It was quiet around the house. Aldred opened the door to Flora with a smile on his face. She stood quietly and stared in front of her. Aldred, before entering the houses, looked at Flora and said that from now on his house is always open to Flora. She cannot hesitate to come to him at any time. Flora's face turned a little red. She was looking at Aldred. Flora's face was slightly red. She smiled and replied that she understood everything. Flora and Aldred went into the house. Aldred was holding the door handle. Flora looked at the room. There was a wooden table with chairs in it. Sunlight filtered through a small window. The girl said that soon this house will belong to both of them. Flora looked at Aldred and said with a smile on her face that she could make tea for them, and Aldred could start resting for now. Flora took off her outdoor shoes and put on her slippers. Flora went into the kitchen area where there were pans and pots. Flora took a clear jar of dried leaves. Flora went over to the teapot and there were several more jars of food next to it. Flora closed her eyes and continued to make tea with a smile on her face. Aldred sat down on the chair opposite Flora and began to look at her with a smile on his face. The kettle on the stove began to boil, and Flora continued to mix the ingredients for the tea. The girl took the dried fruits and began to break them into a glass teapot for brewing tea. Flora took a kettle of boiling water and began to make tea. Then she threw mint leaves into the water. The smell of tea reached Aldred. He closed his eyes and enjoyed the smell. Flora smiled and said she was almost done. Flora took a paper bag and put sweets out of it on a plate, then she strained the tea and poured it into cups. Flora put the tea set on a tray and brought it to the table where Aldred was sitting. Flora said she made tea with apples and mint. Aldred thanked Flora for the tea, then he took the cup and started drinking from it. Aldred's face turned red with pleasure. He began to glow with happiness and said that the tea was very tasty. Flora sat down opposite Aldred. She was smiling shyly and holding a cup in her hands. Then Flora closed her eyes and brought the cup closer to her mouth. She began to enjoy the taste of tea. The tea was steaming because it was hot. Flora took the tea in her hand and offered Aldred a refill. He held out his cup and agreed to a refill. Aldred held the cup in his hands and looked at Flora with a smile. Flora said she might be doing something wrong. Aldred blushed and replied with a smile that she was doing everything right. He was just very happy right now. Flora smiled and looked at Aldred. Aldred's ears turned red with embarrassment. There is some tea left in the cups. The guys continued to cook together in the same kitchen. There were several plates with different dishes on the table. The guys spent all the time having fun. The guys talked until sunset. Flora was holding a fork in her hands and laughing loudly with Aldred. Then they started washing the dishes. It became completely dark outside, and bright stars began to appear in the night sky. Aldred and Flora were sitting at an empty table. They looked down in embarrassment and were silent. A ribbon with flowers was tied on Flora's head. Aldred looked up and looked at Flora. The girl did the same. They continued to be silent for a while. Then Aldred smiled and sighed heavily. Some time later, Aldred called Flora. She was scared. Aldred started to say that he would like to take a bath with Flora. She got up from her chair and screamed that she understood everything and would sleep in the bedroom. Flora froze in place. She kept her hands on the table. Then she repeated Aldred's words about the bath. Aldred replied that he was sweating today and therefore wanted to wash himself. After all, the body needed to be kept clean. Flora said she would go to the bathroom after Aldred. Aldred held out his hand to Flora and said no, they would go to the bathroom together. Flora's face turned redder. The guys ended up in the bathroom. Flora embarrassedly started shouting that the bathtub wasn't even ready. Aldred held a basket in his hands and replied that with the help of his magic it would not take long. Flora put her hands to her red face. Aldred put his finger to his face and replied that he was also embarrassed, but if two people took a bath separately, it would take much longer. Flora looked at Aldred in surprise. Flora had her hands on her chest, and Aldred came up to her. Flora silently lowered her gaze to the bottom and turned away from Aldred. Flora then looked at Aldred and said that she agreed with Aldred's words. Flora's face was still red. Flora had her back to Aldred. Aldred reached for Flora's corset and pulled the thread. Flora blushed even more. She turned to Aldred and started shouting his name. Flora kept her hands on her chest and looked down. Flora closed her eyes and began to gradually stretch the button on her dress. Flora was very embarrassed. She unbuttoned her corset and found herself in only a shirt. Her face was a bright red color and her hair almost completely covered it. Aldred found himself without clothes. He turned around to look at Flora. Flora kept her hands on her chopper. One strap had slipped off her shoulder. Aldred approached Flora. Their faces were red with embarrassment. Aldred smiled and asked if Flora was all right. She didn't look at Aldred, but she nodded back. Aldred reached for Flora's shoulder. He brushed another strap of his shirt off her shoulder. Flora squeezed her eyes shut in embarrassment. Then she lowered her hands to the bottom. Flora's shirt slipped off her body and fell to the floor. She began to cover her body with her hands. Flora looked away and said that Aldred shouldn't stare at her. Flora was covering her body with her hands. Her loose hair was developing. After a moment's thought, Flora looked timidly at Aldred. A girl named Flora is surprised to talk about the fact that magical objects are incredible. And thanks to them, you can quickly fill a bathtub with hot water. A guy and a girl are sitting in the same tub together. They are completely submerged in water and confused about being next to each other. The main character notes that it is quite convenient and inexpensive. Besides, he still has a lot of such things in stock. And then Flora says that she would be ready to take a bath at least every day. There was no response to this. The young man, still sitting in the bathroom, blushes not only from being in hot water, but also from embarrassment. His cheeks turn red. He directs his gaze towards the girl sitting next to him. Flora stares blankly into the water, thin strands of hair falling over her face. The girl's cheeks are red, drops of water are dripping from her face and hands. She's embarrassed to sit so close to the main character, doesn't say a word. Both characters are incredibly worried sitting next to each other. The guy looks at his companion with a confused look, opens his mouth slightly, wanting to say something. The guy asks Flora, turning his body in her direction, if the girl would like to sit closer to him. She immediately begins to tremble noticeably, changes her face and is even more shy, pretends that she did not hear the young man's proposal at all. Then the main character decides to take active action himself and sits closer to the girl. She instinctively tries to pull away while Aldred smiles contentedly. It's clear from his grin that he won't let Flora go. The guy grabs the girl by the right shoulder and abruptly pulls her closer to him, telling her not to be so timid. Flora squeals but still clings to the boy under pressure, shouting that she is too close to Aldred. She's still uncomfortable and uncomfortable. The main character takes the girl by the hand, gently holds her, asking a rhetorical question that it's time to wash off all the foam and soap. The girl does not resist, gives her palm to the man. Embarrassed by the events taking place, the girl clenches her hands into fists, closes her eyes, and her cheeks turn redder than ever. In a trembling voice, Flora says that she will then rub the guy's back on her own. Aldred doesn't resist, just raises an eyebrow questioningly. After getting out of the bath, the guy and the girl sit next to each other. The young man sits on a stool and turns around, looking over his shoulder at Flora. Picking up a towel, the girl begins to rub the guy's back. The guy bends his back slightly, while Flora unknowingly rubs the young man's back. The guy's cheeks turn redder, but the girl doesn't see it. She smiles contentedly and diligently foams the main character's back. The girl's eyes light up joyfully. She carefully examines the guy's body. Now she looks like a kitten, feels Aldred's shoulders and says that Aldo-san is so muscular. Flora suddenly moves closer to the guy's back and touches the soft skin, rubs against it, but does not say a word. The guy makes a sound through his teeth and his eyes widen more in surprise. Aldred is embarrassed by what is happening because Flora is snuggling up. She rubs her back harder and harder, and maybe she doesn't even do it on purpose, she just doesn't know about the hero's reaction. The boy squints hard at his eyes, trying with all possible efforts to force himself not to look at Flora's body. My own thoughts make me feel awkward. The girl sees a large tremor in Aldo's body and smiles, looking at his soapy back, asks if the main character really feels so good. He replies that it is, trying to hide his flushed cheeks but also his face. The girl picks up a basin standing next to her and pours water from it onto the guy's back, washing off all the soap and foam. After that, having finished with her back, the girl asks the hero to stand up and turn to face her. The young man gets up from his stool and lets the girl rub his body. Flora carefully passes a towel over her chest, and the hero's whole body turns out to be in foam again. With her thin hands, the girl moves the towel up and down her chest. The foam becomes stronger, bubbles form. It flashes through the young man's mind that he is very pleased with the contact with a soft towel. The guy feels awkward, drops of sweat appear on his face, and he already assumes what to expect next. Removing the towel from the area with a soft spot, the girl looks in surprise, lowering her gaze. The young man immediately shudders and asks to stop. Flora opens her eyes wide in surprise. This makes her shudder and scream, her cheeks turn red, and now she understands everything. Jumping away from the guy, the girl screams, looks at him and apologizes. Her face is blushing, she wasn't thinking about anything bad at all. The guy makes excuses that this is a natural reaction of the body and this happens. Pursing her lips, the girl gradually calms down and replies that her mother told her about such things. She is still confused, but now she realizes what she has to do. From such words, the main character is embarrassed and looks at the girl with a confused look. Everything is going too far. He assumes what Flora will do now, but does not stop her. Kneeling down, the companion of the main character looks confused. She's uncomfortable and confused, but she doesn't stop because she's already gone too far. The guy calls the girl by name, probably trying to stop her. But she says that it will be quite problematic to wash further if she does not help a little with the problem that has arisen. With both hands, the girl holds and presses, which immediately causes the guy to tremble all over his body. The main character closes his eyes, drops of sweat run down from his cheeks and his forehead turns red. Flora leans a little closer. The guy clenches his hands into fists, while the girl in front of him is on her knees. Quietly shushing, the main character purses his soft lips and brings his eyebrows closer to the bridge of his nose. It's hard for him to endure. Aldo-san notes that the sensations from the girl's touch are completely different than from his own hands. The hands are still making movements, moving from the beginning to the end. The hero exhales in embarrassment and opens his eyes, directing his gaze at the young maiden. He asks Flora to tighten her grip on what she is currently holding in her hands and make all the movements a little faster. The heroine stops and looks up at the guy. There is a slight blush on her cheeks. She nods her head and says that she has figured out how to act now. Clutching the long part of her body tighter than before in her hands, the girl moves her arms intensively. I don't have the strength to control myself. While all these actions are going on, the guy thinks that he should definitely try the idea that appeared in his head. The main character squeezes his once relaxed hand into a strong fist and turns to Flora. He wants the girl to take this part in her mouth. She opens her lips in surprise like a duck and looks with glowing eyes. Opening her mouth slightly, Flora scorches the already hot part with her breath and looks carefully. After that, the girl opens her plump lips. The image of a guy appears in the head of the companion of the main character, the way he looked at her earlier, still with the same awkward expression on his face. The girl has the idea that she loves Aldo-san. Flora has an image in front of her eyes of how the main character giggles with some little things, how funny he looks with wet, disheveled hair, and how he smiles brightly, giving her flowers. The girl is trying to find the reason for her love for the hero. Aldo, in turn, also has flashbacks of how he first met a little girl named Flora. She smiled at him so brightly and squinted at him, standing in her magnificent dress. He remembers that the girl liked him at that moment. The hero remembers how he saved Flora when he saw her and sees her more adult image in front of his eyes. She was standing with a basket and wiping sweat from her forehead. He also remembers her tears of joy when she received flowers, and the guy realizes that he loves her. The young man realizes his feelings for Flora. Squelching sounds and grunts can be heard in the bathroom. The companion of the main character is breathing heavily, and in order not to fall to the floor, she holds herself with her hands. Her body trembles with sensations because now she gets even more pleasure after the guy's praise. He says that Flora is simply incredible. The young heroine is doing a great job, and hearing that the guy is already on the way, she only accelerates and prepares to accept the fruits of her efforts. The girl mumbles and continues to move her head quickly. You don't even need to order her to do this, she knows how to behave herself. At one point, Flora stops. There are tears in her eyes. She hums questioningly and feels warmth in her mouth, but does not pull away and swallows wave after wave. The girl feels liquid dripping from the corners of her mouth, mixed with saliva, and buries her nose in a soft place. The man makes no effort to get her to move away. The heroine's hands tremble noticeably, and if she did not restrain herself by leaning on the floor, she would probably have already fallen off. Tears fall from her eyelashes, she mumbles softly and squints, bringing her eyebrows to the bridge of her nose. Finally, when it's over, the girl doesn't speak after that. The guy directs his gaze at his companion, still confused and slightly blurry after the enchanting completion. Flora looks attentively at the main character while he gently touches her cheek with his palm. So they look at each other without saying a word because everything is clear without them. The silence is interrupted by the guy's quiet voice. He thanks the girl for the help she gave him. This only pleases the young maiden. A smile appears on her face because she was able to please the one she loves. The heroine takes the man's hand and presses it closer to her hot cheek. She closes her eyes and her smile widens. At this moment, Aldo thinks that this night is going to be very hot. The guy and the girl move from the bathroom to the bedroom. The hero presses Flora to the bed and kisses her passionately. Their fingers are intertwined together, and there is not even an inch of free space between their bodies. A soft mumbling can be heard around the room. Pulling away, the main character touches the tip of his nose to someone else's and exhales into the girl's parted lips. The kissing moment is interrupted by Flora. The man exhales raggedly and closes his eyes. Flora immediately screams that the main character and his unrestrained touches are to blame for everything. Suddenly, the main character grabs the girl by the inner thigh and with one jerk turns her over from her stomach to face him. Flora ikes and blushes harder, colliding with the young man's gaze. Aldred calms her down, saying that this is normal and there is nothing to be ashamed of. After that, the girl's body shivers, she moans sweetly, covering her eyelids. Opening her eyes, the girl feels that she is close to the end, and tells the guy that if he continues at the same pace, she will finish her job. The heroine clutches the sheets tightly with her fingers. Her hands and whole body are shaking. Screams and grunts echo around the room from the walls. The girl opens her lips slightly, trying to catch her breath after experiencing pleasure all over her body. She curls the fingers on her left hand and looks away with moist eyes. The main character asks if everything is okay with Flora. She replies that yes and is ready to continue. The girl reaches out with her hand to the guy to touch him. Then Aldo-san announces that he will enter. The young man opens his lips and stops for a moment. The girl screams shrilly and tries to crawl up. She says it hurts her and squints. She hadn't expected such a sharp jolt. Her mouth opens in a silent moan. The guy looks at Flora and stops for a while because he does not want to harm his companion, but she takes his palm in hers and weaves her fingers together. There are tears in her eyes, but she still asks Aldo-san not to stop, despite the pain. The heroine wraps her arms around the man's neck, hugs him with both hands and presses him closer to her. Flora squints and makes soft moans, brings her eyebrows to the bridge of her nose. Opening her eyelids, the girl opens her mouth slightly and looks confusedly into the eyes of the young man opposite. They've gone too far, but it's too late to stop. Both want to achieve pleasure. Both hands are intertwined. The man tightly squeezes the girl's hand and presses her to the bed. The room echoes with grunts and screams of pleasure, wrapping both of them with their heads. Flora wants to call the main character by name, but she can't because instead of an understandable word, articulate syllables come out. Her hair fell over her face, covering it. Aldred approaches Flora's flushed face and exhales directly into her lips, looks into her clear eyes and does not utter a word because they would be superfluous here. Both already understand how much they love each other. Flora and Aldo seal their feelings with a kiss, soft and gentle, which makes the blush on their cheeks even stronger. The guy and the girl cover their eyes and mumble softly into each other's mouths. The companion of the main character lifts her leg and, pulling away, feels the man picking up speed again. The girl grabs the crumpled sheets with the fingers of her left hand and screams uncontrollably. Flora, no matter how embarrassed she is, says that there is something big and solid in her, and she likes all the sensations she has experienced. The heroine's gaze is directed at the guy's face. She looks at him with reddened cheeks. Her hair was tangled and hung over her eyes. Aldo informs Flora that just a little bit and he will be ready to finish. The guy closes his teeth and exhales raggedly, moving all the way, wanting to reach the end. With a trembling voice, the companion of the main character agrees that the young man can finish and promises that everything will be fine. The man squints and hisses, saying that he is almost ready. After finishing the process of exchanging emotions with each other, Flora and Aldo look at each other admiringly and then both laugh. They are embarrassed, their cheeks are red, and there are drops of sweat on their cheeks, but they did it. Flora tilts her head to the side and kisses the man, playfully biting his lower lip. The guy leans his strong arms on the bed and also covers his eyes, gently touching someone else's lips. The next morning, when the first rays of the sun make their way through the glass windows of the house in the fields, the main character, lying in an embrace with his companion, gradually wakes up. They were both covered in a blanket at night and slept on a soft bed. The guy sees the sunlight illuminating the room and sleepily opens his eyes while Flora is still dozing on his chest, tired after a hard and stormy night. The main character turns his head towards the sleeping young maiden and looks at her with his eyes still squinted and not used to the light after the night. Flora's eyelashes tremble slightly, she sniffs softly, does not open her eyes yet, basks on the warm chest of the main character. Aldo-san stretches his hand towards the heroine and touches her face with his fingertips, removes the hair hanging over her eyes while she is still having sweet dreams and does not feel the guy's hand. Flora hums softly. The young man opens his eyes and looks surprised. Now, it seems, understanding how to wake up his sleeping and unwilling companion. The main character gently touches the cheek of a sleepy girl with the knuckles of his palm, stroking her while she mumbles softly, still sleeping and does not feel anything. She purses her lips into a thin line. The young man decides to take even more active action. With his index finger, he pokes at someone else's cheek and repeats this action several times. Aldo holds back his laughter and continues to touch his companion's hair. It doesn't help, the girl just buries her face in the pillow, trying to get rid of the guy like an annoying fly, and seeing no other possible options, Aldo gets up to Flora's ear and bites him. She opens her eyes wide and screams in surprise. The guy giggles, saying that now the girl has finally woken up. Flora immediately asks if the main character saw everything. A man is only touched by such a reaction. He gives the girl his bright smile while she is more nervous. Feeling uncomfortable, the girl jumps under the blanket and pulls it up to her nose, saying that in the morning she looks just awful. But the man gently touches the sharp chin with his hand and pulls the girl to him. The young man says that he saw only a sweet sleeping face, and after that gently kisses Flora on the lips, still sleepily, lazily, but so carefully and gently. Both cover their eyes and, despite the past night, are embarrassed in front of each other. At the same time, two cooing owls are watching the two lovers in the window. They smile and quietly crouch down to look at the main character and his companion. Aldo and Flora touch foreheads, covering their eyes with relaxation. The young man says it's an incredible feeling to wake up next to someone you love. The girl stretches out her hand and touches the guy's cheek. He opens his eyes in surprise and looks at the heroine questioningly. Flora runs her fingertips over the young man's skin. Smiling brightly, Flora squints at the hero and now offers to cook together, have fun, meet guests. But the main thing is that now they are not alone. The main character presses someone else's palm closer to him and remembers how he looked like, being a knight in a dark cloak and with a sword. After a short silence, the guy nods his head in agreement. The young man agrees that now, from this moment on, he and his companion will do everything together and suggests starting by cooking breakfast together. The girl smiles, closing her eyes. She is pleased with this answer. Getting up from the pillows and removing the blanket, Flora agrees and asks if she and Aldo will cook breakfast from radishes that he has grown himself. With her fingers, the girl squeezes the blanket and directs her gaze at the guy. When the girl gets out of bed, her previously covered curvy forms become more clearly visible. The young man opens his eyes wide and blushes with embarrassment, shouting loudly. The action shifts to the vineyard. Two people in hats are standing with baskets and harvesting large grapes hidden in a vine. The sky is bright, not a single cloud is visible, foreshadowing rain. Iana has been listening to her sister and friends' stories since the morning about how Aldo-san defeated the Red Bear alone. She opens her eyes in surprise and squeezes one hand into a fist. Aisha nods her head and asks if she expected something like this from the young man Iana. The white-haired guy says that he is glad that the main character has arrived from Norland. Iana thinks Aldo is very cool. All three of them are sitting at a table in a clearing and telling interesting news. Toke chuckles. He says that when Flora was in danger, Aisha panicked a lot. The girl next to him folded her arms over her chest and pursed her lips in displeasure. She stares blankly ahead. At the same moment, without letting him finish, Aisha hits the bare leg of the young man with her heel with all her might. He screams in pain, but does not say another word so as not to discredit the girl's reputation. Toke buries his face in the table, trying to hold back the moans of pain. The girl turns her head the other way, pretending that nothing happened, and says that everyone was saved thanks to Aldo, and it's hard to imagine what would have happened if they had relied on an idiot who couldn't even handle a bow. Irritation and anger appear on Toke's face. When Aisha asks if she is wrong about something, the guy does not answer anything. The guy gets up from the table, turns around and leaves, leaving Iana in the dark. The girl silently looks after the departing boy and then turns her gaze to her sister, frowning with displeasure. Aisha looks away and says that everything is not as it really was. Iana tries to object because Toke said something completely different, but Aisha immediately gets up from the table and closes her eyes, saying that everything is as it is. After that, she leaves and stretches lazily, as if after a dream, and the sister does not have time to say anything. Laughing awkwardly, Iana says that her sister will never become a sister at this rate, but she no longer hears this phrase. The action is transferred to the village. Residents stand and look at the beautiful garden, at their children frolicking among the flower bushes. At the same moment, the main character and his companion are standing on a hill and looking at the village from a bird's-eye view. They see wooden houses, plowed fields. The guy puts his arm around Flora's shoulder, and the girl holds one hand behind his back, puts the other on his chest, and looks into the distance with a soft smile. Aldo says that the view is very beautiful. The young man remembers that he came from Norland, remembers those days, and is now glad that he no longer needs to be in the royal capital. The main character in his memoir sees pictures of how he returned to the capital, how he was greeted with honors, applauded, and rejoiced. But he himself did not feel any happiness then. Turning his head towards his companion, the young man calls Flora by name and confesses his love to her again. He looks with burning, joyful eyes, with love and tenderness. Standing in the middle of the clearing, the hero says that he has never felt anything like this before and thanks Flora for the opportunity to feel new emotions. The girl whispers with her lips that she didn't feel like that either. Tears appear in the heroine's eyes, they flow down her cheeks, but this is not from sadness at all but from joy. Flora says she loves Aldo-san too. She looks at him with joy. The guy pulls the girl closer to him and hugs her tightly with his hands behind her back, covering his eyes while she buries her face in his shoulder and cries with joy. The hero calmly pats his beloved on the head, calms her down and closes his eyes, smiling happily. Flora grabs the young man's shoulder and cries into him, unable to contain her feelings. Both now think that the legend of the paired flower turned out to be true. The action shifts to a heroine with long hair named Kurun. She is an A-rank adventurer and a former member of the Black Silver Squad. At the moment, the girl is a teacher at a magic school. She has dreamed of this profession since childhood, but there is one catch. A girl with a high tail walks into the office of the headmaster of the School of Magic, to a woman with glasses and painted lips. Facing her, Kurun informs her that he is quitting, after which he leaves. The director does not believe the words of the teacher and jumps off the table, asking Kurun-san to wait and promises to deal with the problem. But she does not want to listen to anything and just leaves the office. After leaving the building of the school itself, Kurun, clutching her magic wand in her hands, turns around and blinks for the last time, after which she goes straight where her eyes look. It turned out that the School of Magic was not the place his girlfriend had imagined. An image pops up in the heroine's head of how the headmistress and two other teachers gathered around her. She recalls that class discrimination reigns at school, with constant noble formalities at every meeting. Deciding that she doesn't have to put up with it, Kurun leaves the School of Magic. Not without regret, but it's better to do so than to be around such people. In addition, the fame of one of the dragon slayers attracted aristocrats who wanted to marry Kiruna, no matter what. Walking down a long corridor, the girl notices a white-haired guy coming to meet her with flowers in his hands. The guy stops in front of the girl, smiles and clutches a rose flower in his hands and greets Kirun-san. This is the head of the Raymond family, Earl Clark Raymond. The young man comes closer and gives a flower to Kiruna. Although it is awkward, she accepts this gift but does not answer anything. The girl just looks at this flower and thinks what to do with it. The guy in front of her is a royal knight who asks Aldo's location every time and simultaneously tries to propose marriage to him. Kirun realizes that Earl Clark Raymond's smile is another fake. Even now, when he lifts the corners of his lips and looks straight at her with a face that inspires confidence, the girl thinks that she is tired of tolerating the aristocracy. When Kirun found out that Aldo was going to leave the team, at first she didn't even understand him and was just a little bit offended by him. But now the heroine understands him well. An image appears in front of his eyes, where the young man smiles brightly and informs his companion that he is going to Norland, because he finally wants to live a calm, measured life. The girl walks further down the dark alley, holding a magic wand and a bag of things in her hands. It flashes through the heroine's mind that Aldo of course said where he was going to go. It was a small village in the countryside. Seeing a bright light at the end of the transition, the former teacher of the School of Magic thinks that there is nothing really wrong with living quietly surrounded by ordinary people, simultaneously teaching them magic and passing on her knowledge. The action is transferred to a sunny city. There is a lot of life around. People walk, communicate with each other, and go about their business. Horses carry sleds with goods, shops open, and people invite customers to themselves. Exhaling heavily, the girl closes her eyes and quietly says that perhaps everything that is happening to her is actually for the best. The little boys and girls in the villages that Kirun walked past were more interested in magic than the noble children. They had a bigger sparkle in their eyes. Perhaps this is what the teacher of the School of Magic dreamed of, becoming a mentor for them. Standing in a crowd of people, the girl thinks about how Aldo is doing now. After all, he mostly did nothing but wield a sword. He really knows how to hunt, but he can hardly grow vegetables himself. Sitting in the cart, the heroine thinks about Aldo again. He wasn't interested in courting girls, so she doesn't think the main character will be able to get a girlfriend anytime soon. He's probably lonely right now. A smile involuntarily slips across Kirun's face when she thinks that she may one day become the bride of a young man, but still tries to discard these thoughts, despite the joy they bring. The action is postponed for several hours ahead. The royal capital is shrouded in dark clouds, pouring torrential rain. Almost nothing is visible because of it. The hero in black robes is heading somewhere, walking through puddles. He is wearing a dark hood covering half of his face. The man's lips are closed, he doesn't say a word. A stranger in dark clothes stops at the Raymond's house, a magnificent mansion, and looks at the windows from which the light is burning. Knight Zoke takes off his clothes, his hair is soaked, as is the whole suit. He clenches his hands into fists and asks the prince why he even came here in this weather. In front of a middle-aged man sits a young prince, who briefly and clearly conveys information to him. It is necessary to return, on the orders of the king, the killer of the dragon Aldred. Zoke asks if Aldred's men are looking for the king. An image pops up in my head of the ruler of the kingdom, sitting on the throne in his expensive robes and talking about something. Grinning, the prince says that it is. But in fact, only Zoke is able to cope with this difficult task. Realizing that everything is not just like that, the man asks if Clark is up to something again. Chuckling, the young man sits more impressively on his couch and asks if the dark-haired old man is in a bad mood right now. It occurs to Clark that Zoke is still obsessed with Aldred and the idea of revenge. The man's face immediately darkens, his lips tighten into one thin strip. There was no answer. Noticing the change in mood, the Count asks what kind of creepy face Zoke has now. The question remains unanswered. The man turns his back and says that he will find Aldo. The Count adds that, according to recently received information, a certain suspicious person left the kingdom and went to the west. Zoke attentively listens to all the information collected. Clark reports that most likely the Empire of Vespania or the Kingdom of the Sylphs is not behind this. The witness's information coincides with the time of his disappearance. Most likely, according to assumptions, the wanderer who went to the west was Aldred. This is also evidenced by the words of the farmer, whom the guy helped along the way. Sighing, Zoke notes that the main character still continues to poke his nose into other people's business and help will come to him sideways this time. While the man is still in the room, the Count assumes that he wants to ask something else. He agrees and clarifies whether it is possible to collapse Aldred in any available way. Looking directly at the mercenary, Clark says that he can do whatever it takes, but the most important thing is not to kill him, The main character still needs to be alive. The Count crosses his legs and looks after the dark figure retreating. Zoke goes out into the rain at night to do his job again. With his mouth closed, the man looks ahead as raindrops run down his face, and thinks that this time he will not let Aldred escape. The action is transferred to the garden, where the main character and his companion Flora are now sitting. The young man looks at the radish sticking out of the ground and asks if he can pull it out. The girl, bending down slightly, agrees to the guy's question. Aldred wraps his fingertips around a radish and, shouting "Go ahead," pulls it out of the ground with all his strength. Seeing this, the girl smiles happily because the boy did it all right. The young man admires the perfectly round radish, saying that it is simply wonderful, and now he finally understands what joy Flora was talking about from harvesting. Clapping her hands, the girl says that she understands Aldo-san perfectly and felt exactly the same as he does now, picking her own vegetables in the garden with her own hands. The guy offers to pull out the next one to Flora. Because both he and she grew this crop together, it would be unfair to give all the honors to only one person. Suddenly, the girl flinches in pain and falls to her knees, trembling slightly. The young man leans closer and anxiously asks what is wrong. Flora replies that everything hurts after that very night because that time was her first. Realizing his guilt, the hero apologizes for overdoing it. The companion says that everything is fine, it's just a little uncomfortable for her. With the tips of her fingers, the girl pulls a radish, another one just as delicious in the opinion of both. The guy offers her to try the grown crop. The hero and the young maiden are biting into freshly picked radishes. Chewing and crunching the vegetable, Aldo says that it tastes quite sweet and a little spicy. Flora considers this combination to be ideal. He starts arguing that it would be possible to eat a whole mountain of radishes, but the guy thinks that this is impossible. The heroes decide to make a radish salad and put together as much as possible for breakfast. Holding the baskets in his hands, Aldo finds out if it is impossible to plant radishes in the same place. Flora says that first you need to harvest all the old crops. Only after that, as she says, you can think about new plantings. Returning together to the house with large baskets of crops, the main character says that it would be possible to try to expand the field, then the harvest will be even bigger than before. Stepping onto the threshold of the house, Flora apologizes for disturbing her, and only then it dawns on her that this is not someone else's house. The thought of this is embarrassing, and she does not respond to Aldo's quiet giggles. Holding the basket in her hands, the girl is embarrassed and says that after yesterday there is nothing to be done. Laughing kindly, the main character apologizes for his behavior. Flora then asks Aldo if he can enter her house as if it were his own. The main character replies that it would be impossible for Elga-san because it is too much for him. Picking up the basket from Flora, the guy wants to help her, but she replies that it's okay and it won't take much time. Besides, she wants to cook food for the main character herself. Aldo no longer resists and confusedly thanks the girl, allowing her to carry out all her plans. Picking up an apron, Flora asks if it is possible to put it on, and the main character agrees with her, watching her companion tie a bow on her back. Turning to face the young man, the girl asks the guy to wait a little while she prepares food for them. She stands with an apron tied, which will not allow her clothes to get dirty, with a wreath on her head serving as an ornament. Aldo's cheeks are blushing. He can't take his eyes off the heroine and thinks she is very cute now, in such an outfit and an apron. After a while, Flora sets the table and apologizes for the long wait, but the guy doesn't even pay attention to it. He is interested in the red color of the dishes. They became like this because of radishes. The girl believes that now the dishes look even more appetizing. The main character looks at every meal prepared for today with admiration. The young man offers to start eating as soon as possible, and Flora holds onto a chair, pushes it back to sit down. But she is still uncomfortable and in pain because of the events of last night. Squeezing her hands into fists, the girl suggests that the guy should start eating because she wants to see his reaction. The hero wishes you a pleasant appetite and brings a spoon of soup to his mouth. After that, he chews everything carefully to taste it and notes that the food is simply excellent, especially the aftertaste from radishes. The main character notices that Flora is not eating anything and asks what is the matter. She replies with a smile on her face that she just wants to see how the guy will eat, because she has always dreamed of cooking for a loved one. Clearing his throat to cover his embarrassment at what he heard, Aldo asks if Flora really looked at him all the time when he was in her house for the first time. Starting to justify herself, the young maiden says that she couldn't help herself, because as soon as she accepted that she would never meet a man she liked again, Aldo himself showed up on the doorstep of the house. This only amused the guy. Seeing the smile on the young man's face, Flora asks if what she said is really funny. She looks at me with a pitying look and takes a little bite of the food she has prepared. Lighting up the girl with a bright smile, The main character replies that he is just thinking about how an ordinary breakfast becomes special if his beloved Flora is next to the table. The idea slips through the hero's mind that living with a loved one at his side makes everyday things, the most mundane, much more fun and interesting. At the same time, the former teacher of the School of Magic got off the cart and headed down another path, in search of Aldo. The mercenary Zoke also follows. He also goes in search of the main character but pursues non-peaceful goals, acting on the orders of the king and the count. The guy does not suspect any of this. He enjoys breakfast with his companion and hopes that such a quiet time will last forever. After a few days of living together with Aldo and Flora, the girl will have to return home. She lays out things with her lover, and he is surprised by the heroine's statement. Putting the laundry and all the other things in a neat pile, Flora says that mom and dad allowed her to stay in this house, but she would really like to visit them because she missed them so much. And to make everything right, Flora looks at the hero with hope in her eyes, wanting to see him next to her during the trip. She doesn't want to leave alone. A little embarrassed by such an unexpected offer, the hero informs that of course he will go with his companion because they have become a couple, which means that he needs to pay a visit to Elgis and Fiona, the parents of his chosen one. But that's not all the guy wanted to say. He hesitates a little while his companion looks at him with all attention and interest, waiting for what he will say. Rubbing behind his ear, the main character awkwardly gives out that he would like to ask Flora's parents for her hand in marriage. Usually the form of the marriage ceremony varies depending on where the couple lives, in the city or in the village. But if there is a church in the place of residence, then the vow of a married couple is given in it. Otherwise, this could be announced at a crowded meeting, for example at a harvest festival. If it is a small village, then such holidays do not exist there, and then it is necessary to obtain the usual consent from each of the parents. After that, Flora falls silent and presses her hands to her chest. The main character looks at her attentively and also does not say a word, fearing that something has happened. The guy goes down a little lower to look into the girl's face, covered with hair. And just as he begins to ask a question, suddenly Flora cries bitterly and presses her hand to her lips so as not to sob. This behavior puts Aldo in a stupor. He freezes in shock, looking at the girl's tears and does not even know how to behave with her now. The young man decides to ask if he did something wrong, maybe he is rushing things a lot, but through tears Flora replies that he did not. The reason for the tears is different. She raises her head and smiles brightly, wiping her fingers with her own, and saying that she was just happy after what she heard and she was sorry if she scared the guy with her crying. Probably at this moment the main character realizes that he was not mistaken in choosing his companion. He smiles brightly and stretches his hand to the girl's cheek, strokes it, and wipes away the dripping hot tears. The characters stand in the center of the room and hug each other tenderly. Flora buries her head into Aldo's shoulder, and the main character thanks his companion for accepting him for who he is. As soon as Aldo's lover calms down, the guy suggests that she finally go on business, but that was not the case. Karina meets the guy and the girl on the threshold of the open door. No one expected this visit. The man stands in a small stupor, but still greets the unexpected guest and hopes that she will not say anything superfluous. Giggling, Karina gets in with her conversations and not the most appropriate ones. The girl says that Aldo and Flora finally got together, but she thought it would take longer because the main character is a complete incompetent in love affairs and Flora is a late flower. All this starts to anger the guy. He hits the girl and tells her to shut up. Karina immediately screams, does not understand why the main character did it, but the guy replies that it was for prevention purposes. After cooling down a little, the girl says that Flora and Aldo are a very nice couple, and then corrects herself, saying that they are no longer just lovers but the bride and groom. The young man loudly says that right now he and his beloved are going to get official permission, but Flora is very embarrassed, saying that it is not worth shouting about such things like that. For Karina, this is another reason to be embarrassed. She says even louder that news about them will spread throughout Norland. The girl hides behind the shoulder of the main character, and in order to somehow fix the situation, he asks Karina what is there about the situation in the forest. She chuckles but answers the question because that's what she came for. Throwing up her hands and actively gesticulating, the girl says that the red bear was delivered, and after that she and her squad collected all the meat and materials that could be used. Karina remembers how she and her companions collected materials. Many small monsters flocked to the smell of the red liquid, but there were enough hunters to repel their attack without injury, and she is glad that everything ended without unnecessary problems. The girl thought to bring meat to Aldo yesterday, but the teacher told her to leave the guy and bring jerky next time. Clearing his throat, the hero decides to ask when it will be possible to enter the forest. and Karina believes that if no other dangerous monsters appear, then most likely in 4 or 7 days. The young man thanks for the help and now goes with Flora to the house of Elgus. Karina wishes good luck and advises the heroes to be careful on the road. They hug each other and move on. After a while, Flora and Aldo reach the beautiful house of the girl's parents. The two heroes are immediately greeted by Mom and Dad, who say that they were waiting for them too and congratulate them on their return. The girl's father actively shakes the young man's hand. He is friendly and smiling. The main character wishes a good day and examines the man. The girl's mother suggests continuing in the living room. Flora comes closer to her mother, and she notes that her daughter has become even happier and more beautiful than before, and suggests that she hurry along until the food gets completely cold. The table in the house is generously set. There are various dishes on it. The guy notes that the dishes are very appetizing. Fiona thought that if her daughter came with her lover, then it was not worth holding back in cooking. Sitting at the same table like a real family, all 4 of them clink glasses and celebrate the formation of one family. Flora's father smiles brightly, and then the girl asks what's wrong with his face. The man holds a glass in his hands and looks happy. The man says he is very happy about this event because Flora has stopped being just a friend to Aldo and has now brought him to the family home as her boyfriend. The young virgin is very embarrassed, and she asks Dad to stop. But Fiona, on the contrary, supports her husband, saying that she has been watching with him since the arrival of Aldo-san from Norland and wondered when they would become a couple. The woman is touched by her daughter's behavior and her red face. Elgus, swinging his glass from side to side, says that every time Flora invited Aldo to lunch, he and his wife wondered if there had been any progress in the relationship. The main character lowers his head and apologizes for his weakness. Jumping up from the table, Flora screams that Aldo-san is not really a weakling, and she wants to protect him now. Continuing to speak, the girl explains that the main character never immediately noticed the desperate hints and barely remembered the events of 9 years ago. Flora's parents are interested, so they ask to continue the story further. At the same time, Aldo does not understand whether his beloved supports him or humiliates him even more. Continuing her story, Flora says how well the main character took care of her and how he fought the monster to save her, so she asks not to call Aldo a weakling. The heroine's father smiles softly after listening to her speech and closes his eyes, giving out a quiet and meaningful "I see." Addressing the guy, Elga says that if it wasn't for Aldo, then their daughter wouldn't be in this room right now, and he and his wife really appreciate it. As a sign of respect and gratitude, Fiona and Elgus bow to the hero, but he stops them, saying that this is not necessary. The guy explains that this is natural for him because he wants to save the person he loves. But the head of the family explains that even if Flora is his beloved person, not everyone would be able to fight a monster and go through their own fear. Flora and Aldo look at each other, smile and nod. Thus, the girl hints that the guy can make an offer which was discussed in the morning. Interrupting all the thanks and honors, the guy turns to the surprised head of the family. Aldo is very uncomfortable, shy and uncomfortable right now, but he decides it's time to pull himself together. Getting up from the table, the main character looks around at his parents and his beloved. It's obvious from him that he's nervous before his next words. Aldo loudly pronounces the names of Elgus and Fiona. The companion of the main character looks at him, holding her breath and pressing her hands to her chest. The wife of the head of the family raises her hand to her mouth in surprise, exhaling. The young man loudly declares that he wants to marry Flora, so he asks for approval and blessings from the family. Flora looks with bated breath at the hero, then at her parents. She waits for an answer as much and with the same trepidation as her loved one. Aldo-san, as a sign of honor and respect for the family, bows low and closes his eyes, hoping in his head that he will get consent and be able to marry a girl. He doesn't see it, but Elgus and Fiona look at each other with a smile, and these looks already mean a lot. The girl seems to understand this but does not say anything. Flora's mother gives her consent, asks to marry their daughter. The father, Elgus, says that there is no reason to object if Aldo-san is the intended. He suggests announcing the wedding at this year's Harvest Festival. Both parents are positive. The guy gets up and looks with a look that does not believe and does not fully realize. He hears that Elgus gives permission and even agrees to support the marriage, after which the main character turns his head towards the future bride and joyfully calls her to him. Aldo and Flora, who were allowed to get married, are now wrapped in happiness. The girl throws herself on the neck of the young man, hugs him tightly and cries with happiness, blinks away tears. Flora's parents are watching with the same joy, and Fiona wipes away tears herself. Suddenly, a new life begins. When talking to the head of the family, the guy asks in surprise if he really will become the next elder of Norland. Rubbing the back of his head, when asked by Elgus if the main character did not know about this, and forgot that Flora was his daughter, Aldo confusedly mumbles an answer similar to yes. Realizing what's what, the man asks if the guy has forgotten that Flora's father is an elder of the village. The boy is embarrassed. He apologizes and says that all the time he considered Elgis as Flora's father. The man is not angry at all, he just laughs, saying that Aldo-san can sometimes be very absent-minded. Elgis's wife, turning to Flora, asks her to take good care of her betrothed. The girl rolls her eyes in embarrassment and nods. After the conversation, it's dessert time. Over tea and delicious cheesecake, Flora and the main character are talking about something of their own, laughing and looking very happy. Elgis interrupts the silence. He decides to say that when he sees his daughter with the young man, he can't help but smile. After that, the man asks if Flora's long-standing wish has come true, and this question makes the future newlyweds uncomfortable. Fiona reveals her daughter's secret. She says that 9 years ago, Flora cried very much after Aldo left the village. The girl is trying to stop her mom from telling stories. Recalling the days when Flora cried into her pillow for hours, the girl's mother explains why this is necessary. She wants Aldo to know at least a little about the difficulties that an adult woman went through trying to calm her child. Flora covers her red cheeks while the main character looks on with a soft smile. With a weak giggle, the guy turns his head towards his betrothed and thanks her, because he is glad that he has a man who thought about him all the time. Not knowing what to say, the girl says that she is happy about it too. Her cheeks are covered with blush after all these stories and words. Aldo decides to find out the rest of the story from Fiona. And then, not knowing where to put herself, the girl covers her face with her hands and makes a strangled mumble of discomfort. The father of the family continues for Fiona. He says that his daughter was so upset that even her favorite food could not bring her to her senses, let alone parental efforts. The girl looks at her parents in fright, thinking that they will still blurt out. Elgis's wife says that Flora was disappointed that she could not answer the question about the flowers from the main character. So she asked her mother to tell absolutely everything about them, and it was very sweet. Finally noticing that Flora blushed like a tomato, the girl's mother laughs and asks if it's worth continuing. But the young maiden asks to stop because she is very embarrassed. The girl's father adds finally that Flora was determined then, and the girl is already screaming that it's time to finish. At this point, Aldo begins to tremble and tears run down his cheeks. He cannot control his feelings and emotions. At the table, everyone starts to worry. The beloved of the main character immediately asks what happened and worries about him. In a trembling voice, the guy replies that he is sorry that he did not have such a family, and therefore he is simply delighted with what he has seen and heard now. Fiona and Elgis exchange worried glances. Trying to somehow calm down and bring the hero to his senses, the man says that now the four of them are one family, so he cannot hesitate to rely on them. Fiona adds that she is happy to see such a son-in-law. The main character begins to apologize, but then Flora abruptly runs up to him and hugs him tightly, hugging him to her chest and covering her eyes. There are tears in her eyes, but she still supports her loved one, says that everything is fine now, and Aldo is confused. He doesn't seem to understand how to react now. But still, the main character squeezes the girl's palm tighter and allows tears to fall from his thick eyelashes. Flora says that now they have each other and there is nothing to worry about, for which the guy thanks her. Going out into the yard, the girl looks at the trunks with things standing and says that they need to be transported first. The young man nods, agreeing with this, and is ready to help. Elgis pulls a cart with wheels behind him and suggests that Aldo use it so that it won't be so hard. The main character thanks for the care shown. The man decides to help Aldo so that he alone does not carry the weight home, and so they drive the cart together. Elgis pushes from behind, the guy goes in front. The man sticks his head out and addresses the guy, saying that his words about becoming an elder of the village are not related to the near future. Now the main character does not need to become an elder. The head of the family also clarifies that he is not old enough to leave his post. First, the guy will need to get used to life at his own pace. Exhaling heavily, Aldo agrees and thinks about why he decided at all, why he needs to become an elder right now. When he gets home, the young man thanks the man for his help and says that he will do his job on his own. Elgis says that Aldo has worked hard today and therefore advises to have a good meal at dinner. The action shifts to Karina, two sisters and their friend. The girl tells all the details that she herself learned about Aldo and Flora, and all with one voice ask if the main character is planning to get married. Karina shrugs off all the questions. She awkwardly informs them that they were going to get official permission or something like that. After that, the girl wishes good luck and leaves to cook red bear meat, and then asks if she can help. Aisha is surprised. She does not believe that two people who could not even really talk to each other recently form a stronger union than just a couple or friendship. Toke assumes that in this case the newlyweds will need furniture, and he thinks that Aldo will have to expand the house for Flora's room. Aisha covers her face with her hand, grumbling about how the girl recently went to her for love advice because of her inexperience, and now she is going to get married. Horror appears on the girl's face, because soon at this rate Aldo and Flora will have children and they will call Aisha aunt. Toke doesn't understand why his girlfriend reacts like that. Toke scoffs at the fact that Aisha will become an aunt, and she in turn begins to resent because she has more chances for this than a guy. He begins to say that he will make furniture for a couple, because if there is a demand then there will be an offer. Iana just silently watches what is happening. The dispute continues, gaining momentum, because he believes that no one will agree to spend their whole lives with Aisha. The girl believes that it is impossible to imagine a guy with at least someone, and this conversation is not about children yet. They take turns insulting each other. Sighing, Iana silently watches the couple and wonders when they will finally start dating. Fiona helps her daughter with packing. She carefully puts each bag or jar in a box while her daughter is passionate about something else. Turning her head towards Flora, the woman sees a long-haired girl holding a painted plate in her hands. Coming closer, Flora's mother says that she can take the plate with her. The girl turns to the voice and asks if she is really allowed, because this plate is the most favorite in her mother's collection. In response, the woman carefully puts the dishes in the girl's hands and says that the plates can help create new good memories with Aldo. Holding Flora's hands, the heroine's mother asks not to forget that the girl always has a place where she can return, and this is her native family home. The girl has tears in her eyes. She does not break eye contact with her mother and squeezes her hands harder. After saying goodbye for the last time, mother and daughter hug each other tightly and do not hold back their tears and feelings for the last time. The head of the family is standing around the corner of the room and is crying himself, covering his face and not interfering with the farewell. Aldo and Flora are pushing a cart with things together. The guy is walking in front and pulling a heavy load behind him. At one point, the girl slips and screams. The unpleasant incident has gone away. The main character asks what happened, and the girl looks out from behind a pile of things, saying that she just stumbled. Suddenly, a voice calls out to the heroes, asks if they are all right, and each of the residents offers their help if the cart is too heavy, but Aldo says he did not want to bother. One of the residents asks Flora if she is all right, because she heard that she was attacked by a monster. The girl replies that she is not even injured and the unpleasant incident has passed. Then there is the question of why such a young girl went to a deep part of the forest at all. Flora is wondering what to say to her now. Another resident intervenes in the conversation. He reports that the girl then left for that very special paired flower. After a while, the villagers help to push the cart with things to the house of the newly married couple, and Aldo thanks everyone for their assistance. A voice is heard from the crowd asking what happened to the flower in the end, and someone replies that everything is already clear after Flora moved to Aldo. Smiling brightly, the main character approaches his beloved and gently takes her hand in front of the assembled people. Flora screams in fright and turns her gaze to the guy, covering her mouth with her hand. At the same moment, the main character says that he and his beloved girlfriend want to get married at the Harvest Festival. The crowd cheers delightedly, cries with joy, and one of the people shouts that he will deal with Aldo if he dares to offend their Flora. And so it goes on all day. Each of the crowd hurries to approach the heroes, ask them more about this decision about their wedding. Sisters Aina and Aisha meet the main character and congratulate the guy on the future wedding, saying that they are also glad to be recognized by Elgus and the others. The young man thanks the girls for their congratulations, justifying that he wanted to tell them earlier himself, but was busy with other things, so he decides to tell everything now. At the same time, Aldo notices Toke and comes closer. Putting his hands on his hips, the young man asks if he really decided to get married after all, and the hero's question is alarming. Laughing, the protagonist's friend says that Flora is very shy, and Aldo is insensitive, and no one would ever have thought that they could get together so soon. The young man begins to regret that he came to talk about his relationship. After getting rid of the jokes, Toke begins to reason more logically. He believes that the newly minted family will need new furniture. The main character thinks about it, but his friend does not understand what else needs to be thought about. The guy comes up with a proposal to expand the house, and the main character comes out of his thoughts, wondering what it means to expand and why it is necessary. Toke explains that family quarrels are common, and in this case separate rooms may be needed. It didn't even occur to the guy that quarrels are a common occurrence in couples. Changing the subject from quarrels, the protagonist's friend suggests that when the couple has a child, he will still need a separate room. It scares Aldo. Does he really have to show up so soon? Taking advantage of the moment, a friend suggests that baby cots are always in use. This behavior only angers the guy. He asks if Toku is having fun, but he does not understand what the question was about. Abruptly, the main character starts running after the blonde guy to hit him, grumbles that he will still dance when he decides to get married too. Hearing the words about the wedding, one of the sisters wonders if Toke has finally thought about marriage and now thinks it's time to offer him his older sister as a bride. Standing aloof away from others, Aisha thinks that Flora has come very far during this time and still the girl remembers those very love tips. Smiling with his friends, Aldo thinks that he would hardly be able to live in peace while continuing to be in the royal capital, and he did not even dare to think about what is happening now before. The action is transferred to the capital Avalon. The king shouts at Barak, calling his name. Jumping up from the throne, the old man asks when he will find Aldred already. The man mutters to himself that the guy moved carefully, left almost no traces, and therefore it will take some time to find him. This answer does not suit the old man. He screams more loudly than before, asking what will happen if another kingdom or some aristocrats find Aldred first, so he demands to move. But none of those gathered in the throne room, except for the count, knows that one person is already on the way and very close to his goal. The action shifts to Kuruna, who is on her way to Norland. She examines the map in her hands, realizing that she is moving in the right direction. The sorceress has an image of the main character in front of her eyes. She thinks whether Aldo will be surprised if he meets her again, whether he will be so touched and hugged, but after all these thoughts are confused by a short laugh and a return to reality. This, of course, is impossible. But nevertheless, Kurun would obviously not mind. With the same thoughts, she sets off back on her way, humming a tune to herself. The main character is on his way home. He climbs the mountain and looks at the house, in which he is not the only one living now. Opening the door, the guy smiles and informs that he is at home. His eyes widen like the first time he sees a girl. Flora is standing at the kitchen table, laying out all the things, including the plates handed over by her mother. Noticing her lover at the door, the girl smiles. She gets distracted from her business and rejoices at the return of Aldo-san, because now they can be alone with each other and take a break from all the fuss. The main character puts his hand on his heart and blinks away tears. The girl asks what happened to Aldo-san, and he replies that he is very glad because he is more and more convinced that he is in his place. Wiping other people's tears with a handkerchief, the girl smiles because she also thinks so, because she has been waiting for the return of her loved one all day. Sitting down next to each other on the same sofa, the characters hug and Flora thanks Aldo for helping her move all her things to her new home. The young man says that there is nothing special about this, and he will always be ready to help. Smiling brighter, the girl adds that in this case she relies on her lover, and he says in response that he will also rely on Flora. After making eye contact and pausing in conversation, Flora and Aldo reach out to each other to give a long-awaited kiss. Finally, the lips of the girl and the guy merge together. They give each other all the tenderness and care that has been so lacking these days. Flora mumbles softly into the kiss and gradually breaks it up. The girl says only 2 words, asks to take her to the bedroom, and the main character understands everything without any explanation, does not tease, because he wants the same thing as his future bride. Lifting the surprised maiden in his arms, the young man carries her into the bedroom. This moment is very embarrassing for both of them and at the same time memorable. Flora snuggles closer to the hero's shoulder, and he only tightens his arms around her. Moving to the bed, the young man puts Flora on soft and clean sheets. She turns her gaze to the bottom of her trousers and looks questioningly. As soon as she wants to ask a self-evident question, the guy awkwardly explains that the embarrassment happened only because of a small kiss. In order not to put pressure on the heroine, Aldo says that she does not have to interact with him in any way today and help relieve tension, because for sure the girl still feels pain because of that very night. Despite this warning, Flora says that everything is fine and Aldo helped her a lot with the move, so she wants to thank you properly for your help. Rubbing the back of his head, Aldred wants to object, but the girl stands her ground, because if you can't do this now, then she will surely be able to help in some other way. Still, the young man gives up. He has an idea that he really wants to try out. The girl gradually takes off her clothes, remaining in a tightly tightened corset. She is very embarrassed and asks again if he really wants to do what he has planned with her curvy forms. Leaning back on the bed and holding himself back with his hands, the young man says that he is absolutely sure, and after that Flora will be able to touch his muscles as much as she wants. As soon as the Virgo reaches for the bow on the corset and wants to untie it, the guy asks her to stay in her clothes. Clasping her curvy forms with 2 hands, the heroine places a solid dignity between them, creating a kind of friction between the parts. The girl notes that it is very hot between them, but at the same time she still creates more heat, starting to move soft roundels in her hands and grind them together. From such actions, the guy sighs and shivers violently, wraps his thin fingers around the sheets on the bed and turns his head to the side. To make sure that her actions are correct, Flora clarifies whether it is necessary to do exactly as she is doing now, and with a ragged exhalation the man replies that yes. He is really pleased and really likes it. Looking down at the dignity between the forms, Flora continues to move as she was asked, and the main character begs only not to stop. The actions become even more intense. The girl screams that something is going to happen to her forms now, but she does not have time to finish. Her clothes are tearing from such a quick interaction with her. Exhaling warm air from her mouth, the heroine says that she is very hot, especially after the clothes have torn and Aldo has finished. Exhausted after a new interesting experience, the guy lies on the pillow with his head and rests, almost asleep. Flora, propping her chin on her hands, looks at him with interest. The girl remembers the promise made to her, so she unties the knot on the main character's shirt and begins to feel his muscles with her hand. Touching her chest, Flora almost squeaks with joy. The only thing Aldo doesn't understand is whether his beloved is so strongly attracted to muscles. The question remains unanswered, and the girl continues to explore the muscles, touches them, and lies down on her chest. Flora decides to lift someone else's hand in order to lie down next to the guy and fall asleep in this position. She is very happy about the events that have happened recently and what happened last night. The next morning, the young man notifies the girl working in the kitchen that Aisha and Toke have arrived. Flora tries to finish as soon as possible, and out of curiosity, the hero looks over the wall. In front of him, he sees very appetizing lunchboxes with various sandwiches and snacks inside. Smiling, Flora says that she overdid it a little, because she had not been to a picnic for a long time and did not know what exactly to cook. Collecting baskets of food, the guy tells how much he is happy about his planned first picnic, and his beloved shares the same joy with him. Aldo's friends have been waiting at the entrance to the house for a long time. The main character comes out with a hat on his head and greets everyone. Toke notes that the young man is all glowing with joy. Approaching Toke and Aisha, Flora whispers that Aldo is going on a picnic for the first time, so he is very excited. For Aisha, this seems strange because the four of them have already chosen together. Meanwhile, the guy just looks into the distance and enjoys the good weather. Resolutely, the young man declares that it's time to hit the road, and Aisha interrupts the idol, reminding him of the primary task, collecting the fruits of the eco. The heroes come to the wheat and corn field. The bright scorching sun is shining, wheat sprouts are sprouting up to the sky, and there are incredibly many of them. All four of them are walking together, chatting and laughing about something, about to start working in the field. Flora looks very light and cute in her new summer clothes on this day. The compliment was very pleasant to her, she smiles happily. In response, the girl compliments the hero's clothes, because in her opinion he also looks great and fresh. Compliments and questions continue. Flora learns the hero's opinion about her hat, and he replies that it looks very beautiful and fits perfectly. Smiling, the girl promises to make an even cuter straw hat next time. Being blinded by the happy couple and their joy, Aisha does not notice how she stumbles and slides down. At the same moment, Toke manages to grab her by the waist, after which he immediately asks if the girl is okay if she is hurt. Aisha embarrassedly turns around and walks in the other direction. Because nothing special happened, she just slipped, it happens. All four friends reach the tree with the fruits of the eco. Flora asks where they can be used and is told that a very tasty jam is made from the fruits. Raising her head, Aisha looks at the tree, wondering if there is anything left there. Toke doubts this because the villagers also want to collect more fruits for themselves. Leaving all the baskets with food, Toke suggests spreading out and looking for more trees with the necessary fruits. All four look around, looking for fruits, but only the main character thinks about something else and does not join them. Aisha notices this and therefore turns to Aldo to find out what he is doing. The guy calmly explains that he is now checking to see if there are any dangerous animals nearby. Chuckling, the girl notices that before that the hero was so cheerful, and then abruptly changed at the click of his fingers, so she asks him not to make this frightening face so suddenly. To draw attention, the main character points to a hollow tree, saying that there are ferrets there. Aldo and Aisha come closer to him to make sure of this. A small ferret comes out of the hollow and looks at the guests who have come to him. The young man explains that the sounds came from the tree and the habits were similar to those characteristic of this type of animal. Aisha asks why the hero focuses on such a thing. The main character says that this is a skill from his days as an adventurer, and therefore you don't have to worry about anything with it. From looking at ferrets, the girl and the guy are distracted by a voice announcing the found tree. All four of them stand up together and watch. After analyzing the situation, Toke believes that the fruits are indeed in that place, but they are quite high. Flora thinks it will be difficult to collect them, and Aisha agrees with her. On other trees, Toke believes the situation is exactly the same. Then the beloved of the main character asks what to do now, whether it is worth looking for fruits somewhere else. The hero comes up with a solution to the problem. He is going to climb a tree and collect fruits, and asks the girl not to worry about it, because he is very good at such things. In the days when Aldo was an adventurer, he had to climb tall trees. Aisha believes that Flora has nothing to worry about in vain. The guy is a former adventurer, you can rely on him. The young man asks for a favor. He needs the girls to show the location of the fruits on the tree, and they agree to help. Climbing a tree, the hero informs that he will throw off the fruits, and then he must catch them with his shirt. So the hero reaches a high branch and thinks how long it has been since he climbed the trees. He decides to admire the wonderful view for a bit. Gathering his strength and thoughts, the main character approaches the first fruits and throws them to Toke. He catches them with his shirt without any problems, lifting it up. The boy was worried that he might not catch those very fruits. He thinks his reflexes are not as bad as Aisha thinks. To interrupt the argument, Flora takes the fruit and puts it in the basket. Aisha also indicates the direction of the fruits. There are 3 pieces that are on the left. The hero finds them, but because he is now hidden in the bushes, he worries and is afraid not to catch them. Flora reports that on the other side there are 2 more and maybe even 4 pieces. The young man deftly runs over and plucks the fruits. In fact, there are still some fruits at the top, but everyone decides that this will be enough and it's time for the main character to descend from the high branches. In addition, there are other trees that need to be examined, so you should not stop at just one. Toke notices that from such a height he will not be able to catch Aldo if he suddenly falls. Finally climbing another tree, Aldo also deftly and masterfully climbs all the branches and throws the fruits first into a friend's shirt, and then they fall into the basket to his beloved. At first, everyone thought that it would not be possible to collect anything in the forest, but now, thanks to Aldo's skills, the fruit baskets were filled to the brim. After hard work, all 4 spread a blanket and sit down on the ground, starting their long-awaited picnic. Aisha notices that Flora was very nervous, and she tries to justify herself because she worries if her boyfriend would fall. But over time, she got into the taste and even gave instructions herself. Looking away from her friends, the girl says that Aldo moved very quickly and nimbly, so she even had a little fun. Toke notices that from Flora's instructions, the main character also cheered up and became more lively. Turning her head towards her lover, the girl asks him if he is angry. The young man smiles because he has nothing to be angry about. The hero also finds the naughty side of the girl very cute. She covers her cheeks in embarrassment and doesn't answer. A friend of the young man begins to ask if such mischievous behavior of the girl is related to her heredity, but she screams that it is possible, but she is not at all like her mother. Aisha abruptly jumps off the blanket, stands on it with bare feet and turns to her friend with a serious face. She says it's all really great. After that, Aisha rushes to hug Flora with tears in her eyes, asks if the 9 years of waiting were worth it, and the first thing that comes to mind is that the girl is drunk, because she drained a whole bottle of wine alone. Turning her head towards the main character, Aisha warns the guy to be careful with Flora, otherwise she will not forgive her friend's shed tears. This is very surprising and embarrassing for a girl. Smiling softly, Aldo convinces the drunk girl that nothing will happen, and he knows how important it is to protect his beloved. A young man with white hair licks his finger, asking a girl pressed into Flora why she is crying and does alcohol really affect her sensitivity that way. The girl kicks him irritably with her foot. The boy tells her not to be embarrassed, and Flora and Aldo are watching this whole action without interfering with them in any way. Toke drags a drunk girl on his back who can barely hold on, clinging to his shoulder. Aisha has wrapped one arm around him while the other hangs limply down. Aldo watches this unexpected picture with surprise and amazement. Throwing the girl on the sofa, the guy asks her to calm down and exhales heavily, tired after carrying her from the forest to the house. Toke puts his hands on his hips and persuades the girl to calm down, but she only shouts something incoherent louder, clearly pleased that she managed to drink so much. Nearby, Flora notices with a slight grin that Aisha usually drinks in moderation and rarely allows herself to overdo it. This is very rare. The irritated man clicks his tongue in displeasure and, scratching the back of his head, notices that Aisha has been acting suspiciously lately, especially since she learned about Flora's upcoming wedding. Aldo casts a thoughtful glance at his already peacefully sleeping girlfriend, wrapped in an intoxicating sleep, and notices that when his best friend is getting married, strange, confusing thoughts involuntarily begin to swarm in his head. Toke, noticing that Aisha has fallen asleep, irritably begins to call her loudly, demanding that she wake up, but she remains completely indifferent to his screams. Flora just laughs awkwardly at this, and trying to defuse the situation, says that maybe it's worth giving the girl some more sleep. Aldo distracts Flora by turning his head in her direction and asking if it is possible to eat eco fruits raw or if they are suitable only for jam. Flora turns to the guy and with an approving smile assures him that they can be eaten like this. Fruit and custard sandwiches are neatly laid out on the table, the same fresh fruits are in the tray next to it, and several mugs of steaming tea are lined up in a row. The hero loudly calls everyone to join the treat. Toke, sitting at the table with his arms crossed over his chest, smiles, while Flora stands next to him. Aldo, carrying a tray with teacups, enthusiastically declares that the tea is ready. The man at the table salivates at the sight of the abundance of food, and he exclaims with delight, unable to hide his admiration. Aisha, mumbling something in her sleep, suddenly caught the attractive aroma of tea, which made her jump instantly, covered with cold sweat. The girl turned her head to the dining table with displeasure, outraged that the treat had started without her. She asks why they didn't tell her anything and started eating goodies without her. Getting up from the sofa, she walked to the table with a slight hangover, holding her head, and was surprised to see eco fruits on a plate. Still holding her hand to her head, Aisha began to complain of migraines, and turning to her, Toke rebuked her, saying that it was her own fault, because it was she who alone emptied an entire bottle of wine. The hero enthusiastically announces that they have prepared sandwiches with steward and custard, offering everyone to enjoy this original combination. He then points to the fresh sliced fruits, offering to dip some of them in a variety of floral syrups, hoping that the girl will be able to find something to her liking. Soon Aisha adds that she made syrups from different colors herself. Ren, Cassia, and Marie, proudly demonstrating her culinary achievements. She nods, showing understanding on how to properly consume these fruits, and shares her thoughts. Aisha gets up from the table, confidently holding a fork in her hands and lifting it up, to which Toke and Flora smile approvingly. Aldo, exclaiming with delight, announces that it is possible to start the meal, and a chorus of wishes for a pleasant appetite sounds at the table. Aldo, carefully rolling an eco on a fork, looks at it admiringly before putting it in his mouth. Flora, with interest, bites off a custard sandwich with both hands, trying to savor every detail, while Toke, without holding back, puts a whole piece in her mouth and chews thoroughly, enjoying. Aldo, with his mouth full, is pleased to note that various syrups give fruits a rich taste, especially when sweet syrup is harmoniously combined with sour fruit. Toke, closing his eyes with pleasure, adds that even fatigue recedes from sweets because he carried quite heavy things on himself. To this, he receives a request to be silent. Aisha, biting off a piece of fruit, confidently declares that the jam has a completely different taste. Flora, with a blush on her cheeks from surprise, strongly recommends always combining sour eco with sweet syrup to achieve maximum pleasure. Aldo looks at it admiringly, noting that the taste also changes with different syrup. Aisha says, looking at the mug, that she likes how the syrup from the Mari flower gives a sweet and sour taste. A friend of the main character says that Aldo has a wonderful wife and drinks some tea from a mug. Flora looks at him and is confused. The girl immediately asks to stop embarrassing her because she just got married with the main character, but this reaction amuses Toke. The boy notices that his girlfriend Aisha is not very well, so he offers her to eat the syrup from the ran because it helps well with a severe hangover. You can immediately hear the question about this syrup. The young man explains that the effect of the syrup is strong, it gives strength. It also helps with coughing, as it is not a bitter medicine, it can be easily drunk. Of the species that Flora has prepared, this has the most beneficial properties. Flora is surprised by Toke's knowledge of such things. Aisha looks at the guy and says that she really feels a little better, but how does her friend know about all this? Toke recalled that during the period of joint activity with his friend who was engaged in beekeeping, they worked together on collecting honey. In the course of this work, not only driving away persistent bees, but also diving into the subtleties, he shared interesting facts with him. There is a loud knock on the door of the house. Aldo turns his head and says that he will open it himself. At this time, Aisha asks Toke to take her to the same friend from the apiary, but the friend refuses to do this. Aisha's sister Ina turns up on the doorstep. She puts her hands on her hips in displeasure and screams, asking if her soulmate is skipping and shirking work again. The girl gets an even more severe migraine. She asks her sister to stop screaming so much. But this makes Aina even more furious and asks Aisha if she really got drunk again. Continuing to get angry, Aina screams, "Did her sister not come to work because she got drunk here?" The girl holds her head as if she is ill. Flora looks on anxiously and tries to smooth over the situation somehow. Toke adds that Aisha is not always in this state. Aldo says that Aisha's friend is getting married, so she was overcome by a storm of emotions of joy and sadness, and because of this she got so drunk. A friend of the main character explains that if she had said everything honestly and immediately, then everything would not have turned out this way. Attempts to shield Aisha from the current situation only make her angry. To distract from these conversations, Flora comes closer and asks Aina if she will taste the fruits of the eco that they have gathered together. The girl asks again about the fruits. At this moment, a girl with her hair pulled up sits her sister on a chair and brings her a sandwich with eco fruits on a plate. She is skeptical, but still wraps her arms around the food and takes a bite. You can see from her sister's eyes that she liked it very much, and Flora smiles, rejoicing at this. Aina says that Aldo is lucky because he can eat such delicious food every day. The younger sister's plan was a success, because now Aina's ardor has cooled, and all thanks to the economy with whipped cream. The girl holds out another plate with a sandwich, saying that Aldo helped to collect a whole bunch of such fruits so her sister can enjoy them to her heart's content. She also thinks that the main character is very cool. Everyone is sitting at the same table. Flora admires her husband, saying that he is good, and Toke does not miss the opportunity to jokingly call a friend a monkey. The hero believes that compared to past times, it was not difficult and there is nothing special here. The guy remembers that earlier on missions, he had to climb to a much higher altitude than at the moment when he took the fruits of the eco from the trees. I have an image in my head of how Klein helped him with magic. At the very times when the main character slipped and fell painfully, it was always his companion who came to his aid, using skills in magic. Now she is wondering what kind of a wedge is in the role of a teacher. Even in the days of adventurism, she was on the same wavelength with children, and even more so now. Images of old friends, Keel and Elliot, pop up in the young man's head. He wonders where they've gone and what they're doing now. The action shifts to the northeast of the Empire of Vespania, to the village of Legacy and the hotel where the former magic teacher is now located. While sipping her tea at the table, the girl hears other people's voices of adventurers at the next table. The guys discuss that monsters have ruined the grain fields in the neighboring village, and therefore they definitely need to complete the task there. Klein looks at the men at the table with a smile and remembers how once she was with her squad and discussed all the same issues. Where to go, what task to complete, what will be the reward. Getting up from the table, the girl goes to the reception desk and calls the old lady to her. She asks how long the road will take according to the map. The woman replies that it is about a month, and if just a person goes, then even longer. This scenario does not suit the sorceress. She thought that the path would be faster than to Nordende, but there is nothing to be done and she will have to go to achieve her goal. Leaving the hotel, Klein smiles and thanks the hostess of the establishment for her care, and she says goodbye to her. At the same time, the Count's mercenary is watching the sorceress. He stands behind a wall, hiding his face with a black hood. He wonders where Aldred is, who killed the dragon. That guy suddenly disappeared and is now wanted all over the kingdom, and Zoke is just on a mission, the purpose of which is to spy on one person. To catch Aldred, Zoke must keep an eye on his former squadmate, the magician Kurun, who is unaware of anything. The man remembers the moments of surveillance, and judging by the route the girl moves and what she does, there is a high probability that she is heading specifically to her former companion. Coming out of the shadows, Zoke stands behind Kurun, keeping a distance from her and smiles slyly, not at all kindly. While the girl does not suspect anything, the mercenary is already looking forward to the moment when he finally reaches Aldred and deals with him on orders. The next morning, Flora starts hard work in the garden. She pulls out the grass plants, concentrating on her business. The main character slowly approaches her from behind, almost inaudibly. A young man matures an insidious plan in his head, from which a smile appears on his face by itself. The guy stretches out his hands to the unsuspecting girl while she is just harvesting from the beds. Covering Flora's eyes with his palms, the guy asks who it is, and she gets scared, screams and falls right on top of the man. Pouting her lips and cheeks with displeasure, the girl asks not to sneak up like that. Aldo laughs because he just wanted to see the girl's scared face. Realizing this, Flora turns away from him, looking displeased, and the main character is only more amused by this behavior. He apologizes to his beloved girl and takes her hand, helping her up. With his other hand, he holds her straw hat, hiding it from the sun in the shade. The characters look up at the sun and squint slightly at its brightness. The guy says that when he first arrived here, it was spring outside, and life is so fast that it's hard to notice its course. Once at one of the beds, Flora and Aldo hold hands. The girl says that there are very few left, and soon they will be picking beans and carrots. The guy nods and agrees with her, thinks that there are about 2 weeks left. The girl points to other beds, saying that in 3 weeks the harvest of herbaceous plants and onions will begin, and then other species. The man adds that a change of season will follow, autumn will come. Flora is embarrassed by this thought, squeezes someone else's hand tighter in her own, and says that a long-awaited event will happen at the Autumn Harvest Festival. The main character finishes her thought. In the autumn at the holiday, they will finally become officially husband and wife, and this cannot but rejoice. The girl collects food for the guy to hunt and wishes him good luck. She holds a small bag in her hands, hands it to her lover, and he thanks her. Aldo is about to leave the house, when suddenly the girl reaches out to his cheek and kisses him loudly, with cheeks red from embarrassment. The guy is surprised by this. The young man touches his cheek and recoils in surprise. Flora is only amused by this reaction. She closes one eye and sticks out her tongue. Laughing, both look at each other, and Aldo grumbles jokingly that his beloved stole one kiss. All this time, a friend of the main character is standing outside the door. He complains about the terrible heat in the morning, and after that his attention is attracted by the picture at the door of the house. Aldo and Flora are standing at the door, hugging and kissing, and this only angers Toke. He's yelling that there's nothing to be nice about and it's high time to go. Clenching his fist in displeasure, Toke says that this couple always behaves like this. The guy remembers what happened to him a few hours ago when he was having breakfast at his place. Taking a bite of a bun, the guy thinks about how delicious the eco sandwiches were and how cool it is to have a wife. Now he also wants to find someone like Flora, kind, economical, and sweet. There is only one image in front of the guy's eyes, and that is Aisha, his girlfriend. The boy's eyes widen, he chokes on his food and tries to get away from this thought. Toke runs away, accusing a couple of newlyweds of making him like this. The main character's friend runs away while Flora and Aldo look at him in confusion. At the same time, Aina tries to wake up her sleepy sister, shouts at her to get up faster, shakes her by the side, trying to convey that everyone has already gone to the fields, only she is still sleeping in her bed. And it seems that Aisha only opens her eyes, saying that she has already got up, when suddenly she falls asleep again and lies down on a soft pillow, the more annoying her sister is. The younger sister grumbles with displeasure, does not want to get out of bed, telling her sister that she cannot leave her and go without her. Aina screams that then Aisha won't show up for work at all today. Still, after dragging the girl out of the house, the older sister dials water into a wooden basin and demands that her still sleepy sister wash up as soon as possible. Aisha, with her eyes half closed, takes out soap and tries to rub her face with it, grumbling that it does not soap. The sister screams that the youngest is putting tooth powder on her face. Trying to help, the older one wipes the girl's face with a towel. The younger sister tries to get dressed and puts on an upside-down apron with pants. Aina screams that the opposite is necessary. The girl is trying to have a quick breakfast while her older sister is yelling at her. It doesn't work well because the eyes are still half closed due to drowsiness. As a result, the younger one falls face down on the table and falls asleep again. Aina has to slow her down again and demand to gather her strength. The action moves into the forest. There are 3 wild deer standing by the foliage. They do not suspect that they will soon become prey for the hunter. At this moment, the main character pulls the bowstring and aims an arrow at one of the deer. Releasing the tips of his fingers from the arrow, the young man hits right into the bullseye and knocks down his target. Sinking down in front of the dead animal, the guy thinks that it has been a whole month since Flora was attacked by a red bear. At first, all the animals ran away, but later they returned to their habitat. Small magical creatures came with them, but this problem was quickly solved. Aldo thinks it would be nice if the red bear didn't show up anymore, and after that he moves on. At one point, the guy notices that his girlfriend Karina is hiding in the bushes. Being revealed, the girl grumbles that she tried to hide her presence, and the main character only grins because this trick will not work on him. Pouting resentfully, the girl says that the young man is using his strong instincts again. Karina moved 30 meters away, but it still didn't help. The main character says that everyone will be able to distinguish between the presence of a human and an animal. Karina is still outraged. She does not think that Aldo is an ordinary adventurer since he was also able to defeat the red bear alone. Laughing, the hero advises the girl to hide against the wind, because you can easily find anyone by the smell. The girl is surprised by this. She asks again how this is possible, and peering into the depths of the forest, the guy says that, for example, Lauren is now coming from the north side. The guy smiles, his guesses are confirmed, and he says that Lauren is already here. Karina does not notice him, and then the main character offers to find the hunter hiding in the bushes on his own. Karina stands up in the direction of the wind and listens first to the sounds, and then tries to sniff out the smell. The girl succeeds, she asks where this smell comes from, and the guy suggests that she check her guess herself. Karina collects pebbles from the ground and is going to throw them at the intended place. With force, all 5 stones fly into the bushes, and it is from there that a man's loud scream is heard. It hurts him that the stones hit him. A hunter looks out of the bushes, looking discontentedly at a couple who high-fives each other because the prank was a success. Coming closer, Lauren asks if he really taught the girl this, but he replies that he was just giving advice. Laughing, Karina says that she found Lauren by the smell of ale. He was brought to her by the wind, and so she understood the location of the man. Realizing that he was caught red-handed, the hunter rubs his temple and admits that he ate ale and was very unlucky that the wind blew at that very moment. Karina looks admiringly at the main character. Thanks to him, she now has a new skill. The man strokes the girl's head, saying that when she wants, she can act, and she has a good nose. It remains only to graduate. After that, the hunter says that there are no problems in the north and suggests that the heroes go ahead. Abruptly, the main character stops. He does not feel a monster or an animal, but some very strong magic. Raising his head, Aldo sees Kurun in the foliage and looks at the girl in surprise. It seems to him that this is not real, otherwise where would the sorceress have come from here? The girl is embarrassed that she was discovered so quickly. She confirms the guesses of the main character, saying that she really tried to hide her presence, but it didn't work out well since she was found. The guy asks in surprise why Kurun is here, and Karina and Lauren look at the main character, then at the stranger because they don't know who is in front of them now. Kurun and Aldo stroll leisurely through the charming streets of the village, and delight overwhelms the girl's soul when she admires the atmosphere of this place. She stops, admiring the neatly stacked houses, while Aldo, standing a little behind, watches her joy with a slight smile on his lips. Together, they go deeper into the alley where magnificent flowers bloom, and Kurun, turning to Aldo, expresses a clear understanding of his choice to settle in this picturesque corner. Aldo nods approvingly in response. Finally, they come to a modest but cozy house, and the girl asks if this is the hero's home. The guy replies that it is. To the side, Flora, who stood with her eyes rounded in surprise, could not get rid of the disturbing thoughts engulfing her mind, feeling something amiss in the atmosphere. The walk was unexpectedly interrupted by Aisha's loud and indignant voice, who, without hesitation, told Aldo that Karina had mentioned the arrival of his former lover. Flora flinched in the face. A sense of tension gripped her, while Aldo looked more agitated than ever. Kurun felt embarrassed by this situation, and with slight excitement, waved her hand towards a group of puzzled guys trying to diffuse the atmosphere. She introduced herself and added that in the old days of adventurism she was in the same squad as Aldo, trying to distract attention from the growing tension. The sorceress asks if it is possible to find out the names of those standing here. Tok, taking a deep breath, introduces himself, mentioning that he is engaged in furniture repair. Aisha, smiling, puts her hand on her chest and says that she helps in her family's vineyards. Flora, restraining her excitement, approaches her husband and introduces herself, proudly announcing that her father is the head of the village. Aldo, standing behind, watches the girl with interest, feeling a slight excitement from what is happening. Aisha, crossing her arms over her chest, confidently approaches the young people and declares that Flora forgot to mention something important. Confusion reigns between Flora and Aldo, and there comes a moment when both, wide-eyed, freeze in surprise. The main character, embarrassed, looks at Flora, who in turn blushes in response, creating an atmosphere of awkwardness. Kurun, watching what is happening, freezes in a combination of expectation and bewilderment, unable to understand what is really going on between these two. In the end, Aldo, with an uncertain smile and a blush on his cheeks, scratches the back of his head, and at the same time as Flora, who, embarrassed, lowered her head, says that they are going to get married soon. The sorceress freezes in complete disbelief. She mumbles long, unable to contain her emotions. Tok explains that since then, the hero and his girlfriend have been living in peace and tranquility. Kurun replies that after the incident with the red bear, their relationship moved to a new stage, and it even came to the wedding. Recalling the old days, the sorceress says that before, when she went on missions with the squad, Aldo did not even talk. He was cold and serious. Heart-to-heart communication was not his. Aisha says that she cannot imagine her friend like this, and the main character replies with a smile that such conversations about his person are very embarrassing. Flora looks at her loved one, saying that he used to have an aura that brought trouble, but deep down the girl always knew that the man was a very kind person. Kuruna wondered if Flora and Aldo had talked before. The girl replies that she first saw him in this village 9 years ago. She was 9 then. The sorceress looks at her friend with displeasure, and he replies that her possible guesses are false. At this moment, the table is already set. There are various dishes on it, and all those gathered at the meal wish each other a pleasant appetite. Kurun takes a spoon in his hand and eats some soup. She chews the food with pleasure, and Aldo asks her how the food tastes. Smiling, the sorceress says that tomato soup and radish stew are simply incredible. There are no such fresh vegetables in the capital. Turning to Aldo, the girl asks if such a life change is not great. The main character believes that everything is thanks to his friends. Flora picks up a plate and hands it to the guest, saying that it is the meat of a deer that Aldo caught on his own in the forest. It is very tasty, so the sorceress should try it. Stabbing meat on a fork, the magician examines it with an appetizing, hungry look, after which he puts it in his mouth and chews carefully. Kurun grunts with pleasure, saying that the meat is very tasty, tender, and juicy. Flora is only pleased with such a review of the dish. She suggests that the girl eat even more. The main character dips his piece into some sauce and says that the taste will be even better if you use a sweet and spicy sauce, after which he also takes a bite, enjoying the food. Aisha comes closer, saying that if you make a sandwich from meat and sauce, it will be even better. Kurun believes that this method of eating is even more delicious. At the same moment, the girl, in front of others, bites off a huge piece of sandwich and swallows it. It was a big mistake. The girl chokes on a large piece and asks for water, but when she takes the glass, it turns out to be empty. Tok holds out a glass to the girl, who is squinting from a sore throat, but it also turns out to be empty, and this only amuses the guy more. So he wants to make fun of me. Kurun says he will help now and bring water. The sorceress conjures water, whispering a spell, "O purest water, appear on the tip of your finger." After a few seconds, Aisha's glass is filled with the necessary water. Finally, in one gulp, the girl drains a whole glass of water and puts it on the table with a loud bang, being angry at Tok's joke. Lowering her eyebrows to the bridge of her nose, the girl says that her friend is just terrible, but he just laughs because the prank was a success. Aisha says that Kurun is her savior, but the sorceress says she didn't do anything special. Aldo decides to ask Kurun what about her teaching at the magic school and whether everything will be fine, because she abruptly left everything there. The girl is embarrassed. She looks away and asks the guy to postpone this topic for later, because she does not want to stir up unpleasant events of the past in such an atmosphere at a table with delicious food. The main character agrees to talk about it not now. Aisha suggests that with the help of magic you can extract water, which means there is no need for a well. Now she's wondering if she can use magic. Flora smiles, saying that for this you need to have a special gift like Kurun. The sorceress explains that everyone has a grain of magic, so everyone can master it, and it does not depend on the influence of the family or other factors. Kurun asks if the girls want to measure their magic level, even if it is not entirely accurate, and they answer with great interest that yes. The sorceress starts with Aisha. She asks the girl to stand up straight and explains that Kurun's magic will probe someone else's, warning that it may be a little uncomfortable but you need to be patient. Everything starts to shine around the girl and she is surprised. Flora watches with fright. Kurun asks the girl to stand still. Aisha is a little afraid because it feels like something is touching her inside. The sorceress touches her shoulder and closes her eyes. Apparently the calculus process makes the girl feel good and she falls to her knees, shuddering and mumbling softly. Flora screams and her eyes widen in surprise. She immediately closes Aldo's eyes, asks him not to look and does not explain the reason. The sorceress makes a conclusion. There is very little magic in Aisha, unfortunately, and perhaps, after practicing, the level will not rise much but it will rise. Flora should go next, shrinking in fright but still decides to approach. Flora shows that she is terribly nervous. She asks everyone else sitting at the table not to look at her, because if the girl looks like Aisha, it will be an awkward situation. Aisha immediately feels uncomfortable, because it sounds like she did something obscene. Kurun hastens to reassure that there is nothing shameful here and everything is not so serious. Nevertheless, Aisha closes the eyes of the main character, and he in turn closes them to his best friend, which is why he is outraged, not understanding why he should not look. Aisha explains that when Kurun touched her, her body reacted naturally. The same thing is happening with Flora now. She clenches her hands into fists, grunts, and pulls her legs together with impatience. Flora's unrestrained moan is heard throughout the room from the manipulations performed on her during the magic assessment. Her cheeks are blushing. The sorceress immediately shuts the girl's mouth, asking her not to make such strange sounds. The guys in the room gaped in surprise but said nothing. Aisha chuckles and asks the main character if he wants to watch. Two voices are heard at once, from the guy and from Tok, but Aldo presses his hands even harder into his friend's face, saying that it is impossible. The young man's eyes open. He stares at his beloved. The main character sees Flora pursing her lips and closing her eyes while the sorceress's hand rests on her shoulder. The man opens his mouth wide, but all the pleasure of watching is cut off by his girlfriend, saying that this is enough. Kurun informs that the result is ready. She is happy to say that Flora is able to use combat magic because she has a large supply of mana. The girl does not believe her happiness like everyone else in the room. There is surprise on their faces. The beloved of the main character immediately runs into his arms, saying that perhaps she will be able to use magic. Aldo is very happy with this unexpected news. The sorceress says that if this is aerial magic, then she will be able to teach the girl of the main character, and for now she will be her teacher. It flashes through the guy's head that his girlfriend doesn't mind magic. Raising her puppy eyes, Flora blurts out that if she learns to use air magic, she will be able to dry her lush, beautiful curls faster. The guy laughs from this statement and pats his beloved on the head because this is quite in her style. Tok confusedly asks if this is not combat magic, if in this case it will be possible to use it in everyday life at all. The magician looks at the hugging couple and surprisingly smiles. does not feel any jealousy or anger towards them. The only thing she doesn't understand is this 9-year-long love. How could Flora have waited for Aldo at all, not switched to another person? Why are they together now? The sorceress now feels a little ashamed, because she used to imagine herself as the bride of the main character before arriving in the village. Kurun covers her cheeks and tries to get rid of these thoughts about the past. Clearing her throat, the girl turns to Aldo. She is glad that her former companion was able to find a good man and congratulates both on the wedding. I wish you happiness with a smile on your face. Having received the blessing from an old friend, both Flora and Aldo smile and thank them for their kind words and wishes. After that, the guru does not decide to move on to the next person, to the current, to test his magic, but he screams so that you can hear even outside the house. Competitions in cooking sweets. The girl was carrying a basket full of eggs. There were a lot of chickens with big long feathers around her. The girl asked in surprise if they were cooking sweets together. Two girls standing on the sidelines replied that it was so. They have a tradition in their village. A bride who gets married during the harvest festival must prepare treats for everyone herself. Today there will be a training session before the holiday. The girl was very confused and shuddered so that even the eggs in her basket jumped up. The girl Soku said that it turns out Kurun will be with them. The surprised girl asked herself again. All three girls came up to the house and opened the doors and told Flora that they had come. Someone from inside the house loudly thanked them for their help. There were two girls and two other guys in the room. The girls who came were surprised that Karina also came. The named girl briefly replied to them that yes. Another noticed that she was not very happy. Karina mumbled and replied that Aldo had told her to be more restrained and watch her tongue without causing trouble to anyone. She remembered the moment she ran up to everyone shouting that Aldo's ex-girlfriend had come to them. Kurun mumbled a little understandingly and added that it was her. The girl next to me sighed, adding that guys don't understand humor. Karina bowed her head and apologized humbly for what had happened. Kurun sighed with a smile saying that she wasn't worried. Karina's cheeks flushed when Kurun introduced herself to her. The girl looked at her with interest and also introduced herself, saying that she could call her Karina. It was nice to meet her. The girl approached Kuruna and said that she was very beautiful. The embarrassed girl blushed and looked at her questioningly. Karina looked at Kurun in shock and asked if she and Aldo had really had nothing. The angry guy with his arms crossed over his chest was already hovering over the girl. One of the girls excitedly called out to Karina, "She doesn't study at all." Aldo squeezed Karina's head between his hands that she had committed a crime and asked Kurun if she had visited Elga's. The girl said to forgive Karina already and replied that yes. Aisha saw her off and they got to know each other. She received a residence permit. Someone asked about the fact that, by the way, she was also staying at Aisha's house. I answered yes. Somehow I didn't want to burden the sweet couple. The two girls heard them and turned their attention. Flora, embarrassed, smiled and offered to start already. She's going to cook a lot today. The girl next to her said with a smile that she was already fired up. The embarrassed girl put her palms together near her face and quickly confirmed it with a flushed face. She had the feeling that this was not her first cooking as a wife. Her face was completely flushed and she closed her eyes. Aldo blushed all over. The girl next to her was embarrassed and told Flora with a smile that she was right into the role. The guy next to me said they'd go about their business. Aldo nearby agreed and asked if they really needed their help. He was worried. Flora smiled and replied that she did. Men are not allowed to participate. Kurun asked in surprise if this was true. The second girl confirmed by saying that this is a whole ceremony for the bride. The guys turned towards the door and walked away. Aldo turned his head back and said that still, if anything, they were calling them. The girls replied that it was fine. Karina looked at Flora and asked what they needed to do. Folding her arms, Flora replied that it meant Iana, Karina, Kurun, and she would make the dough. Flora called Aisha, saying that she would be preparing the baking. Sighing with displeasure, the girl agreed. Iana called out to her sister behind her. Flora turned to Karina and Iana behind her and said that she would leave the mixing of the ingredients to them. Flora handed Kuruna a bowl of eggs and a whisk, saying that first she needed to beat the eggs to a froth. Kurun awkwardly agreed, asking if it was white. The girl held out her hand with a whisk in front of her and awkwardly looked at him, wondering if this was the side. She began to knead the eggs that were broken in a bowl. The bowl was constantly flying off to the sides, splashing the contents due to Kurun's inept actions. Aisha, walking not far from her with logs in her hands, watched the girl trying. At this time, Karina, puffing and blushing, was trying to grind the ingredients in a mortar. Standing next to her, Iana looked at her with a smile and wished her luck, while she was cutting food with a knife. Flora came up to Kuruna and asked how the test was going. The girl was standing in front of her, covered from head to toe in the contents of the bowl. Flora, holding the groceries in her hands, looked awkwardly at the girl in front of her. Kurun hid the bowl behind her back. The girl was wiping the girl's dirty hair with a napkin. Kirun apologized, saying that she thought that just a little more and everything would work out. Flora told her not to worry. Kirun turned to the girl behind her who was wiping the top of her head. She asked Flora to listen and asked how Aldo confessed to her. The girl blushed all over as Kirun watched her with a smile. She just can't imagine him like this. Aisha, who was passing by carrying logs in her hands, grinned. She replied that Flora was the first to confess. Flora turned to the girl with wide eyes and all red. Kirun winked and gave a thumbs up telling Flora that she was brave. Flora started to stutter saying that she was just. A satisfied Aisha with a sly face said that they have a special flower symbolizing recognition. Kirun jumped up from her chair and excitedly screamed, asking in what sense. Flora was ashamed. She covered her eyes and shook her hands all red, asking the girls to stop. Aisha smiled and asked if it was a bad thing. As a result, they became a couple. Aisha winked at Kuruma and said she would tell her later. Flora was shaking with embarrassment and screamed, calling out to Aisha. The guys standing outside over the table turned towards the house, where screams could be heard even from the street. Kirun watched them with a smile. Kirun thought that life in the capital was completely different, and having arrived here, she couldn't even bake cakes properly. You can't make cakes with magic. The girls were having fun chatting with each other, happily spending time with each other. Kirun decided that she wanted to get back on her feet as soon as possible. Smoke from the fire was wafting down the street from the chimney of the house. Karina, clutching the cloth in her hands, drooled saying how delicious it smells. Iana behind her agreed with the girl. Two guys came into the house and the blonde said that you can't resist the smell. He asked the girls if it was ready. Aisha started when she heard them. The girl with her hands on her hips screamed that guys should not come in here. The blonde man asked if Mana was at least during training. Behind him, Aldo was scratching his head awkwardly. Flora answered them with a smile that it would not work right away because it needed to cool down a little. She asked them to wait a bit. Aisha looked at the guy with displeasure, saying not to spoil them. You don't even have to treat them. The guy asked her angrily. Flora, confused, said how so. They did a good job creating furniture today. Kirun looked at the guy in surprise and asked if all the furniture here was made by him. She noticed that it was very high quality. Kirun smiled, closing her eyes, and said that she wanted to order furniture from him. The guy, blushing, scratched his head and agreed, embarrassed. Kirun praised the table, saying what a quality job it was. The guy, embarrassed, stood next to her and listened to her. Aisha and Inna stood not far from them and watched in silence. Inna anxiously looked ahead and thought that Kirun and Toka were getting along well. What to do? My sister will definitely be against such a charming girl from the capital. The girl turned pale and pressed her palm to her face. Aisha, standing with her back to her sister, sniffed. Iana panicked, thinking to herself that her sister was in shock. Aisha herself didn't care at all. Rubbing her nose, she indifferently said that she might have a cold. Iana gasped and fell to the floor. Aisha headed forward past the others, saying that it smells delicious and she should go check it out. Iana, shaking on the floor, looked at her sister while the others looked at her in surprise. That's not what you need to think about right now. There were 2 pies on the table. On top of one of them were beautiful orange rings as decorations. Flora was holding a board with 2 more pies on it. Behind her, Karina looked at the treats with a smile. There were several whole pies on the table and pieces already cut, along with wrapping paper and ribbons. There were a lot of things on the couch in the living room. Various bags, packages, baskets, and aprons with fabrics. Aldo took a bite of the pie and thought it was delicious. Kirun happily ate her piece, telling Flora that she always cooks very tasty. Aisha confirmed it with a grin because it's all for Aldo's sake. The girl blushed at her words. Iana asked Flora how she felt. The girl, covering her mouth with her palm, stared intently ahead. Pointing with her fingers at the pieces, she said that there was not enough sugar. You can add more spices here, and that's a little hard. Kirun was surprised by this, saying that's how it is, even though it's so delicious. Someone said that then they need to practice more. Aisha was furious at these words. Smiling charmingly, Flora said that she was ready to move mountains with her cooking. Aldo ate in silence, thinking to himself that in the meantime, it would be their meal. Flora went outside with Om and looked around the yard. There is a herb that she would like to add and said she would go pick it. Humming a tune, the girl walked forward with a smile. Flora was sitting on her knees collecting grass in a basket standing next to her. Suddenly, behind the girl sitting on the ground, there were 5 people whose faces were hidden. The leaves of the trees soared into the air. The girl turned pale looking down. The people in the house heard Flora's shrill scream and froze. Surprised, Kirun screamed, asking what kind of scream it was. Aldo quickly ran past her to the exit. He ran outside and called out to Flora with a scared expression on his face. The uninvited guests were already leaving. Flora was hanging on the shoulder of one of them, which seemed to be unconscious. Aldo stared ahead, his eyes wide with fright. Flora was hanging off someone else's shoulder and didn't react. There was a powerful explosion and Aldo and Kirun covered their faces with their hands trying to protect themselves. Flora's basket, all cut up and battered, flew towards the hero. Bouncing off the ground, she landed to the side. Kirun ran, calling out to Aldo and asking what it was while the guy himself, battered from the explosion, looked ahead and trembled. The guy rushed forward while the girl behind him stretched out her hand to him. The basket continued to lie on the ground. Aldo grabbed her with both hands, starting to examine her. The guy was trembling, looking at the thing with wide eyes. His hands were shaking, clutching at the thing. Aldo clenched his teeth, shifting his gaze forward. He called out to Flora. Flora was kidnapped. There was a lot of smoke from the explosion. Flora began to gradually open her eyes, hanging upside down from her captor's shoulder. I sat up a little and looked at the man in surprise. She turned her head to the side with her eyes wide open. The trees were ablaze all around. Many of them were left with only charred stumps from which black smoke emanated. The 5 kidnappers in black suits moved forward, leaving nothing but destruction and fire behind. The girl turned back in fright, looking at what was happening. Trees were falling and turning black from the fire. Why would anyone kidnap Flora? On the horizon, between the dense forests, a high mountain could be seen, at the top of which a bright glow shone. At the very peak of the mountain, Kirun stood with a magic staff in her hands that emitted a bright glow visible from afar. The girl stood in place with her eyes closed and looked focused. Aldo stood behind her in a raincoat and asked if she knew where Flora was now. The girl said yes. They are very lucky that she has a high level of magic. It was only because of this that they determined her location so quickly. The girl became sad and hung her head down, looking very upset. She said there was one thing, but the guy asked her what it was. The girl held her magic staff in her hands and told Aldo that Flora was very scared. The guy clenched his teeth and closed his eyes, looking very sad. Kirun remembered and told Aldo that she had fought with this type before. He was a member of the guild of the Kingdom of Abalonia. I think his name was Zoke. Aldo thought about it and said that most likely they were hired by the kingdom to find him. But the only thing he doesn't understand is why they would kidnap Flora. They don't even negotiate with them. Behind them, Aisha and Toke were running towards them, calling Aldo. Aisha screamed, asking what was going on and why Flora. The guy turned in their direction. The guys looked at the hero and his clothes in surprise. Aisha trembled and screamed, telling him not to be silent. Toke put his hand on the girl's shoulder and exchanged glances with her. He nodded his head to the sides. Aisha looked at him in shock, while the hero, standing on the sidelines, continued to remain silent with his head bowed down. Turning back to Aldo, she said she understood. She trusted him. She called out to Aldo and he looked at her. With tears in her eyes, she confidently looked at the guy and told him to return Flora, definitely. Aldo didn't answer anything, just looking ahead with a wild look, as if he was ready to rush into battle. Toke pointed his fingers to the side and said that he had already prepared everything and told him to go there. While the girls went to get Toke, Kirun asked what was wrong with Ina, and Aisha replied that she sent her home so as not to interfere with her. The hero was left alone on the mountain watching the forest in front of him, from which black smoke was coming. The kidnappers made a stop. Flora was hanging in the air, tied by her wrists to a tree. A large bonfire was lit under her feet. The 5 people dispersed in different directions of the watchman. The girl looked ahead in confusion. As the fire burned more and more under her, she looked at the man who was sitting on a log sharpening his blade. A girl came up from the side and called out to Mr. Zoke, saying that Mr. Clark had ordered only Aldred to be captured. Then why did he bring this girl? The man, without turning in her direction, continued to sharpen the blade. Flora, having heard about Aldred, wondered if they were talking about Aldo. She was very worried. The man finally said with a smile that it was a decoy. This will make it easier to lure out an A-rank adventurer. Hearing his words, Flora opened her eyes wide, wondering in her mind about the A-rank adventurer. The girl standing next to him screamed, asking if he wanted to kill him. This will be considered royal treason. Flora watched them in shock. With the face of a madman, Zoke looks at the fire in front of him, saying that the main thing is to survive, isn't it? Magic will help him do what he wants. Flora trembled, looking forward with wild horror. Zoke's partners were alarmed by what was happening. The girl looked down, ready to cry. She wondered what to do. They want to kill Aldo. The girl did not immediately notice that Zoke was next to her. The man looked down at the girl with a furious look and put his sword against her. Zoke, smiling, pressed the sword to the throat of the trembling, frightened Flora. He said that instead of worrying about the beloved, wouldn't it be better to think about yourself first? He pressed the sword against her throat so close that she tilted her head back a little and trembled even more. She closed her eyes, from which tears began to flow. The man shouted that they had big plans for her. She was Aldred's bait. The girl screamed loudly in fear. A Zoke supporter was watching from behind, holding his sword in his hands. At one point, something pierced through the guy's chest and he fell back. The mage girl opened her mouth in shock. Zoke grinned, An arrow with a sharp tip was flying towards them at great speed. Many arrows struck Zoke's companions. The magician girl was able to put up a magical barrier for herself, but the guy in the hood next to her received an arrow in the chest that went through. The arrows continued to fly down from a height, hitting another adventurer who came with Zoke in the chest. Zoke took his blade away from Flora's throat and covered his head with his hand, on which the arrow that flew at him broke into two. The man pulled back and grabbed his sword and lifted his head up. Throwing back his bow, a shadow flew at him. Pointing his sword forward from the air, an enraged Aldo flew. Zoke, despite the threat, was grinning maliciously. With his hands holding the blade in front of his face, the adventurer stood still. The impact caused a huge explosion. From a huge gust of wind due to the collision of men, Flora's hair flew in different directions, which caused the girl to close her eyes. As the smoke gradually began to clear, two men could be seen crossing their swords with each other. The angry hero asked Zoke why he did it. The man replied to him that in order to fight him again. Aldo, having recaptured his sword from Zoke, raised his sword to strike, shouting that Flora had nothing to do with it. Zoke, with a wide smile, told Aldred that if he wanted her back, it would be over his dead body. Flora moaned as she hung from the tree. A mage girl appeared in the bushes to her side, holding her staff in her hands. Clenching her teeth, the girl began to use magic, and a black substance similar to slime began to appear from her staff. Flora, noticing this, opened her worried eyes wide, looking in her direction. The mage's projectile flew past her, in the other direction, rushing forward. The girl turned her head in that direction. The black substance was approaching Aldo, aiming at his back while he was fighting Zoke. Flora shouted loudly to Aldo, warning him of what was behind her. Gritting his teeth, the guy turned his head back. Not far from him, growing in size, there was a mass that radiated light, exhausting itself, as if it would explode soon. There was a loud explosion, and because of the smoke it was impossible to see what was happening inside the explosion itself. What happened to Aldo after that attack? A huge transparent dome formed around the explosion. Flora, still tied to the tree, was surrounded by smoke and rising dust. The girl was screaming with her eyes closed. The smoke began to take the form of a vortex, swirling in the very epicenter of the incident. When the smoke cleared, a huge magic circle could be seen protecting the two figures behind it. Flora opened her eyes in shock, looking ahead. She screamed, calling out to Kurun. A girl with a magic staff protected the hero's back. Aldo was standing with his back to the girl. While the magic circles protected the couple from all sides, Zoke hid behind the stones and watched them from the side. The man was thinking to himself about this woman. He looked out from behind the stone towards the hero and the girl. Zoke called out to the mage girl from his team and she flinched. He said that he leaves Kurun to her. The girl was clearly nervous, clenching her teeth. Zoke at that time ran past her somewhere ahead. While he was running through the trees, a hero jumped out of the foliage from the side, swinging his sword towards the man. Zoke grinned, seeming to expect this. The man released 3 sharp blades from his hands, pointing them at the hero. Aldo covered his face with his hand and the blades bit into it. The men flew towards each other, brandishing their weapons. At this time, the Zoka mage was releasing a large stream of magic from her staff. Kurun, using a protective magic circle, easily deflected her opponent's blow. The magician was nervous, thinking to herself that she was not Kuruna's opponent. The girl, closing her eyes, put her staff forward and whispered something. Realizing that the staff was up, she summoned many magic circles that hung in the air. A light appeared in the center of each circle, and huge light rays headed towards the magician, as Kurun pointed her staff at her. The hooded girl used magic to protect herself from being hit. She covered her face with her hand from the smoke around her. She abruptly pointed her staff towards Kurun and only then noticed that it was broken. Kurun, clearly pleased with herself, stood smiling in the light from the magic circles around her. Zoka's mage clenched her teeth, thinking that they had too much difference in strength. The girl's face was covered with a cloth, but her confusion was still visible. At that moment, Aldo was hitting Zoke, but he successfully dodged the attacks, saying that it was great. He asked the hero if she was so important to him, meaning Flora. The hero stopped with his back to Flora and put his sword to the side, protecting the girl behind him. With a look like a beast, the hero replied to the adventurer that he would not let anyone touch her. The hero's hand, which he gripped the hilt of his sword, began to sparkle. Zoke looked at her in surprise. Some kind of lightning-like magic began to swirl around the blade of the sword. The hero's body sparkled, and his sword with the help of magic lengthened many times, emitting a long stream of light. Zoke stared ahead, confused. Aldo struck the ground with his sword, saying that he would definitely protect her. The adventurer raised his head up, continued to stand still and looked up at the bright light above him. The impact was enormous. It spread further and further into the vast area in a straight line. Zoke's face was amazed as he watched, frozen, what was approaching him. Kurun and the magician Zoka watched this with their mouths wide open. A huge explosion swept away everything in its path. The trees that were hit by Aldo were broken and only charred trunks remained of them. Columns of black smoke were rushing up towards him. At the place where the hero's blow fell, a long moat formed in the ground. Zoke was kneeling inside it. The man stared at the ground in surprise. Lifting his head, he looked away while clenching his teeth. The impact was so powerful that it split the mountain behind them in half, leaving a scorched, deep, long pit in the middle. While Zoke stood and looked at what was happening behind him on the formed cliff, the hero was walking towards him. Zoke turned around, startled, looking up. He realized with horror that this was the strength of an A-rank adventurer. The hero looked down at him angrily. Ashes flew off from the burned mail and plants, scattering through the air. Aldo used a small blade to cut the ropes on Flora's arms. The freed girl cried, hugging the hero and calling out to Aldo. A worried guy with a sad look was calling Flora, grabbing her by the shoulders. The hero apologized to her for what happened. The girl immediately replied that everything was fine. She believed that he would save her. Kurun, standing next to them, exhaled, smiling slightly. The couple held hands while the guy asked Flora if she was injured. She replied that it was not so and she was fine. The three of them turned around and looked down from the cliff where they were standing. Aldo hugged Flora, who clung to him. From below, the remaining magician and Zoke ran away from them as much as possible. Kurun said they had escaped. The hero replied to the girl that this was not the case. He asked them to deliver a message to the king. Kurun looked at the guy and asked if he planned to negotiate with the king. The guy replied that he was, so that it doesn't happen again. A tearful Aisha was running towards them, followed by a worried Toke. The girl was calling Flora. Flora turned around, calling out to Aisha. The girls hugged and Aisha was happy, saying how good it was that she was not injured. There were tears in Aisha's eyes as Flora smiled. She was apologizing for making me worry. Toke stood behind and sighed, smiling. Aisha looked with displeasure at Aldo, who remained standing near Kurun and watched from the sidelines. Aisha squeezed her friend's shoulders and glared at the couple, telling them to explain what had happened. She called out to Aldo. Toke looked at the angry girl in confusion. The hero explained that they were thugs from the kingdom of Abalonia and they came for him. Toke cried out in surprise, asking again about Abalonia. They came from such a distance. Crossing her arms over her chest, Aisha asked them why they attacked. The hero looked at Flora standing in front of him and was silent for a while. Flora stood with her gaze down. The guy decided to tell them the truth that they had come to kill the A-rank adventurer Aldred. That's his real name. Shocked, Aisha asked if Aldo was really an A-rank adventurer. Toke fell into a stupor next to her, asking if it was true. They asked about Kuruna if she was also an A-rank adventurer and the girl quickly confirmed it. Aldo said that Zoke, the one who kidnapped Flora, they came here on a mission to return him to the kingdom. Aisha's face was dark and her eyes were not visible from under her bangs, but she looked angry. She asked if they had kidnapped Flora to lure him out. The hero replied that he thought they were using her as bait. The girl's fist tightened. Flying up to the hero, Aisha punched Aldo in the chin with her fist while the others watched in shock. She grabbed the guy by the breasts and shouted that since Flora was kind, she was unlikely to hit him. This is for him instead of her. An A-rank adventurer who killed a dragon, isn't it? But he failed to protect his beloved. Kurun started crying and wiping her tears with her hands said that everything was wrong. She said it was her fault. If she hadn't come to Nordende, nothing would have happened. The hero tilted his head down and said with a sad face that no, it wasn't her fault. He's to blame for everything. Toke scratched his head in confusion and asked if there was any benefit in returning a former A-rank adventurer. A tearful Kurum replied that adventurers of this level are praised by the people and also have influence on the government. Someone from influential people followed Aldo to hand over to the king, thus earning trust and authority. An angry Aisha said that Aldo was not some kind of thing. Toke looked skeptically at Aisha and grinned and asked if there were such people. He asked the guys who it was. The hero told the guys that it was Earl Clark Raymond. Of all of them, he is the most influential and powerful. Aisha crossed her arms over her chest and asked if that meant they could come here again. The hero replied that he had sent a message for negotiations, but if they tried to do something again then. The hero told her to worry about it, he would deal with it. He has no intention of going back. Flora stood with her arms folded behind her back and silently looked down. The wind was blowing her dress and hair. A little later, Flora and Aldo's house. The girl was standing behind the hero and said that when he came for her, it felt like he appeared out of thin air. She asked how he did it. Aldo explained with a smile that Toke had made a catapult and Kurun had helped with magic. The girl said it was great. She noticed a wound on the guy's arm and said he was bleeding. The guy looked at the torn skin in surprise. When the guy's arm was bandaged after a while, Flora said how nice it would be if she could heal like Kurun. The guy thanked her for the dressing. They sat on the bed in silence. The girl was looking at her hands lying on her legs and the guy was touching the injured hand. The girl spoke first and asked why he didn't tell her that he was an adventurer. The guy looked down guiltily and frustrated. He said that during the time of adventurism, he carried out many different missions, such as destroying monsters, catching bandits. Among them was working as a knight in the war, so he killed people. He wanted to start a new life without those memories, and he was also afraid that if she found out about it, she would hate him. The guy was sitting with his head bowed. The girl replied that she was also afraid that she would lose him. Aldo opened his eyes in surprise after her words. The girl bent down and the guy, turning to her, put his hand on her shoulder, calming her and calling her by name. He apologized to her. The girl added that today everything fell into place. She turned her head in his direction and tears could be seen in her eyes. She said that her first love, her wish for him to return alive and unharmed, was fulfilled. She wants to share her grief and joy with him. She wants to learn more about him. No matter what happens, she won't hate him. Hearing her fishing, Aldo's face turned red. She asked him to let her be with him. The guy with tears in his eyes quickly hugged the girl, calling out to her. Hugging each other, the couple cried. Hugging the girl tightly, the guy promised that whatever happens, he will protect her and the village for sure. They looked into each other's eyes, holding their hands on their partner's cheek, and continued to cry. While the flowers on the street were blown in different directions by a gust of wind, the lovers, sitting on the bed in each other's arms, kissed. The hero and Flora were standing near the door of the house. The hero's fists were clenched in tension. He looked ahead uncertainly. Flora's palm reached out to her lover's tense hand. The guy, embarrassed, shuddered in surprise and blushed. The couple looked at each other holding hands. Flora was smiling at the guy. Aldo hesitantly raised his hand above the door to knock on it. The girl is standing next to me holding a basket in her hand. A little bit later, 4 people sat silently at the table. The hero tensely bowed his head, not looking up at the girl's parents. Everything was clear to Flora's father now. It turns out that Aldo was an A-rank adventurer. The man looked calm after such news. The guy with the guilty face apologized for not talking about it for so long. If he hadn't been an A-rank adventurer, nothing would have happened to Flora. He apologized again. The man continued to silently watch the guy with his head bowed. The woman next to him looked worried. Flora also tilted her head down and was silent. The father looked at his daughter. Looking down, he began to think about something. Finally, the man told the hero something, why he didn't talk about it. There must have been a reason. Flora's father told Aldo to raise his head. Aldo guiltily looked into the eyes of the man in front of him. The man surprisingly smiled at the guy, saying that thanks to him and his skills, Flora had already been saved 3 times. The man didn't judge him. Carrying such a load, he probably doubted whether it was right to come here alone. Being an adventurer without expecting it, he was dragged into the maelstrom of events. But it was at times like this that he thought of the flower field in Nordende. The man is glad that he came here. The man admitted that he was scared by the incident. But Flora, he and all the villagers believe that he has done nothing wrong. The man's words moved Aldo to tears that gathered in his eyes. Flora's mother smiled and winked, saying that it was true, their family, so he just has to trust them more. The guy smiled and wiped the tears from his eyes with his hand. He agreed with them and thanked them. Flora watched the hero with a smile. Her cheeks turned a little red and tears of joy came to her eyes just like the guy's. The girl's mother said admiringly that it was still great that their Flora was marrying an A-rank adventurer. How honorable. The man laughed, saying that if he had known everything from the very beginning, he would not have been able to talk to him on equal terms. Aldo, embarrassed, asked to talk to him as usual. Flora clenched her fists and said a little indignantly, remembering how hard it was for Aldo. The girl's mother, moving closer to her husband, said with a satisfied smile to the man that he would look. She has already started talking like a real adventurer's wife. The man told her to keep it up. The girl blushed at their words. Embarrassed, Flora blushed all over and shouted, calling mom and dad, asking them to stop. A tearful Aldo was smiling at her. The woman called out to Flora, asking how the preparations for the holiday were going. The girl shuddered. She said that, to be honest, the final result is still far away. There's still a lot of work to do. The woman gasped, saying that's how it was. The girl put the parcels on the table. Today she brought them sweets and asked them to try it. Aldo handed the man a package of desserts, saying that he eats it every day. The man smiled and said that he had the same thing. The girl invited everyone to drink tea. Her mother was happily clapping her hands. A huge field with long vines of already ripe grapes. Iana was passing by, holding a basket full of ripe berries. She turned her head towards the voices. Someone asked Kurun if she would be walking around with such a sour face for a long time. Hiding behind a bush, she watched as the 3 sat at the table talking. Kurun apologized for that time. It's all because of her thoughtless act. Aisha told her not to worry and that everything was fine. An excited Kurun was worried about their friendship with Aldo. Tok smiled, reassuring the girl, realizing what she was talking about. He said she didn't have to worry, she didn't hit him out of hatred. Iana put her hand to her mouth in shock when she heard about the blow. Aisha looked at the guy skeptically and sighed, asking if he had decided to turn on best friend mode. If you think about it that way, Kernet was hurt too. She invited them to end this conversation. Kurun wanted to object, but at that moment Toke's hand reached out towards the girl. Putting his hand on the top of the girl's head, the guy smiled and told her that there was no need to worry so much. Kurun shuddered and blushed. She opened her mouth and eyes wide in surprise and embarrassment. Iana on the side looked scared because of this, looking questioningly. At that moment, Aisha looked angry. He stroked his head. The guy held the insect in his fingers, explaining that there was a fly there. Kurun looked at him, blushing. While Aisha was sitting with her head on the table and hiding her face, the couple turned in surprise to the side where Iana was lying. Toke asked what it was. Kurun was surprised that Iana was too. The girls started laughing. Toke helped Iana to get up from the ground and turned around to the girls' laughter, asking what was there. Aisha looked at Kurun in embarrassment. Clearing her throat into her fist and smiling awkwardly, Aisha said that if you think about it, Flora was very lucky. Married an A-rank adventurer, pretty good. She asked where she could find such a person. Toke looked at her questioningly. Kern looked at the girl questioningly and said that Aisha was getting married too. When she added what that was, the couple paled at the thought of it. Aisha choked, and the guy's face became like a dead man's. They were shaking. Making an irritated face, Aisha continued to ask her again. The guy, clutching his head, asked why he hears the sound of bells. Iana, sitting next to me, was moved to think that Kurun was doing well. The guy denied it and asked at the same time. He looked at Aisha and said that he thought Kuruna was better. Iana fainted when she heard this, while Aisha looked angry. She shouted that he said it while looking at the body. The girl asked Toke if he was really one of those. Someone asked Iana if she was okay. Toke shouted at Kuruna, asking for help. A little later, the house of Flora and Aldo. The guy thanked me for today. He had the courage to talk honestly, and it was all thanks to her. The girl denied it with a smile. A guy with a band-aid on his arm took a sip of water from a glass. The girl paid attention to him. She asked the hero how his wound was, and he told her that everything was fine. She asked if it was accurate and told me to let her see. She carefully examined the guy's hand, feeling the skin. She started groping further, and the guy started shaking and laughing, saying that he was tickled. The girl replied that she needed to check everything carefully. Light began to radiate from the girl's hair. The guy sniffed and turned his attention to it. Holding his hand, the girl was trembling. Suddenly, she started crying. The guy jumped off the chair, sat down on the floor with her, and holding out his hands to her, excitedly asked what happened. The girl was sobbing and apologizing for being so sudden. The guy held her face in his hands in confusion and was silent. Flora explained that by touching him, she realizes over and over again that they are alive. A guy with a sad face called out to Flora while looking at her. He wondered in his mind if she was really that scared. Continuing to sit on the floor, he hugged her tightly, saying that he would never make her fear for him or for her life again. The couple continued to sit hugging each other. Flora has been protected by someone all her life, but now she can be with a loved one. After all, he was the one who saved her. But for his sake, she might finally be able to become useful. However, from now on and forever, she wants to become his support. Holding hands, the couple left the house and walked forward, looking at each other with smiles on their faces. They were looking down from a high cliff. From above, the buildings of the house and a lot of people going about their business were visible. Aldo stared ahead with a peaceful smile on his face as the wind blew his hair and leaves from the trees. With a happy expression on his face, he said that he was like in a dream. Flora, standing next to him, looked at him with a smile. She turned to him and holding his hand said that this was not a dream. The guy turned his head in her direction and looked at her tenderly. He said that she would definitely become his wife. This makes him very happy. The girl, blushing, looked back at him. She hugged his hand, smiling contentedly, closing her eyes. Opening her eyes, she looked ahead, saying that it really looked like a dream. The guy stroked her head, closing his eyes and continuing to smile at her words. A wonderful dream for two. The girl said that she would start practicing for the festival immediately after arriving home. I need to go to Aisha's for raisins. Raisins are great. Karina, with a bow in her hands, ran forward between the trees around her. A huge and high cliff with trees inside. The girl's foot tripped over something hidden in the grass. Screaming, the girl began to fall face down, putting her hands forward. Karina and the fall into the pit. Landing on her knees, the girl with her head down moaned in pain. The girl looked up in shock. Karina stared dazedly at the cliff from which she had fallen down into a huge pit. The height was high. A huge monster appeared on the side of the girl, coming straight at her, from which the girl flew quickly to the side. She opened her mouth and eyes wide in fright and looked sideways. There was a huge boar-like monster standing there. Steam came out of the creature's nose when it exhaled. The boar thumped its hooves menacingly on the ground. The girl, sitting in a pile of leaves, covered her head with her hands out of fear. She was trembling, frozen in place and not moving. When nothing happened, she took her hands away in fright and looked ahead with fear on her face. Cabana stood still and looked ahead. There was a bright light on the cliff right above the girl from above. The monster with the arrow in its forehead looked questioningly at this light. This radiance turned out to be a lot of arrows that, flying past Karina, moved towards the boar. Many of them hit the monster directly. The monster, all wounded by arrows, fell dead on its side to the ground. Karina, with tears in her eyes, looked up while two shadows fell on either side of her. Two men were standing at the top of the cliff. Karina loudly called for the master and Mr. Aldred. Both men were breathing heavily, looking down with worried eyes. Aldo wrapped a bandage around Karina's ankle while she was sitting on the ground. Fiona's father watched silently from the sidelines. Clutching his head with his hand and closing his eyes, he said that he should have looked after her better and asked for forgiveness. Aldo turned his head in his direction and looked at the man. The girl, feeling guilty, looked down with round eyes while the man watched her. He asked if she had any idea how dangerous it was. He asked why she had gone so deep into the forest, and besides, alone. The girl guiltily bowed her head to the man's reproaches. The girl, continuing to sit on the ground, looked away, starting to justify that she wanted to catch prey with the help of the thing she had just bought. She was touching a broken stick with a rope with her hands. She was asked why she bought it in the first place, and she kept silent on this question, not knowing what to answer. Then the man asked her when she bought it. She replied that in the morning before the trip. Aldo looked at the man uncomprehendingly, and he looked scared. He asked why she looked away and asked about the morning. The girl said that using the tracking technique that Aldred taught her, she was watching. Upon hearing this, the man turned to the terrified Aldo. Both men turned pale, looking at Karina in front of them and thinking about the child. The girl's father sighed. He said that didn't she understand that hunting wasn't something you could do alone. Buying something from strangers is also dangerous. Who knows what they might slip her? The girl lowered her head down in confusion. The man added that it didn't matter what was at stake. Aldo believes she thought she could just shoot him with an arrow from a distance. She was told that when people approach wounded demons, they become extremely aggressive and very violent, like the boar that attacked her. And with her skills, it will be quite difficult for her to shoot them with an arrow. The boar she was fighting easily avoided her arrows and the traps didn't help. Aldo said that some demons would attack her from a distance. She must not forget that animals and demons can rush at her, not sparing themselves to get her out of their way. And then the fight will instantly turn into a melee. How then the girl ran forward from the demon approaching her. The girl, looking down, said that this was exactly what happened to her. She could only cowardly run away from the battlefield to save her life. Someone had set up tight ropes and she tripped over them and fell off the cliff with him. The girl remembered that she flew down the cliff into the pit with the boar. The men looked at each other in confusion. Aldo smiled awkwardly at Karina's father. The man closed his eyes and asked if she understood what he was talking about. She has to be very careful when buying anything. If he leaves his purchases unattended, an accident may occur. The girl continued to look down guiltily, as she had been guilty in front of the two of them and was clearly ashamed. The man awkwardly scratched the back of his head while looking at the child. He put his hand on the top of her head and added that in any case, he was glad she was okay. Karina, upset, said she was sorry and apologized for being so stupid. A little later, the men were sitting in the forest and packing the rest of the things in bags. Karina sat on the sidelines and silently watched them. Aldo, passing by her, said that everything was fine. Aldo told Karina that he was just as young and inexperienced, and he once couldn't catch a demon. When he was young, he wanted to defeat one monster, but he was not so simple. In his native country, he was considered a sacred beast. He craved it so much, but he attacked Aldo. The villagers found out that he was hunting him and almost burned him at the stake, but he managed to save it. They tied him to a tree and held torches to set him on fire, but his companions begged for forgiveness. Karina smiled, saying that it means he had failures too. He agreed with her, telling her that he had made many mistakes. He thinks that it is extremely important to learn from your mistakes, and the girl replied that this is true. The man, turning his head in their direction, listened with a smile, but did not interfere. He turned his head away again and sighed, relaxing. Approaching Karina and Aldo, he said that he would teach her how to hunt monsters. They'll have to start cooking before the harvest festival. Ask Aldo about cooking. Hunters participate in the harvest festival. It's a tradition for them. They cook only from those products that they have extracted themselves. Aldo understood what it meant that Lauren could cook. The man said that this is one of those things that hunters should be able to do. Aldo asked what they had here and the girl looked down. She told me that wild boar meat and mushrooms are in a pot. Mushrooms and rice cooked together are also in high demand. Roast beef with venison and stewed rabbit. Gut dishes are a good addition to drinks. Whole roasted hares cooked over an open fire are also very nutritious. The girl said that the smell there, of course, is not very good. Aldred advised that if so, then you can use an herb called sand soup to get rid of their smell. The girl said she didn't know that. One day, her master's wife cooked this dish for her. She cooked snow rabbit meat with jam. It was very tasty. The man corrected her that this was not a hunter's dish. The guy asked about the jam. He can't even imagine the taste. The man scratched his head saying it was too sweet. It is a local dish in the north. Karina happily said that she adored him. The girl looked pleased remembering him. The man also remembered that sometimes they also make dried meat. Karina said that you can make an unusual dish from monster meat. Aldo understood. That's why Karina tried her best today. The guy smiled. The men abruptly turned their attention to the girl, who again looked upset with her head down. She had always thought that her mentor was just annoying her with his importunity. But today she realized how important what the mentor says is. The man asked about the importunity. She promised to try her best, so she asked me not to leave her. Lauren didn't know if she was apologizing or trying to offend. Karina turned to Aldo calling him. She thanked him for always looking out for her and apologized for the trouble he caused. The guy replied that the main thing was that she was fine. The girl admitted that, to be honest, she was able to catch something herself. She reached back for her bag. Taking the bag in both hands, she handed it to the guy, telling him to hold it. It was her wedding gift. The guy looked at the bag in embarrassment, taking it in his hands. Lauren looked at him in surprise, saying, "So that's it." The girl looked very confused, and with her eyes closed, her face flushed, she bowed her head. Lauren and Aldo, surprised, looked at the contents of the bag with smiles. They asked if it was a turkey. They told Karina that she was doing great. Aldred smiled broadly, saying that he was very happy and thanked Karina. Flora will be happy too. The girl looked at him with admiring eyes. She also smiled broadly, pleased with his words and gratitude for the gift that she gave. Lauren said she had a sharp eye. It's not so easy to find a turkey in the woods near Nordende. Aldo looked at the man. The man began to descend, calling Karina, and she looked at him. He bent down, put his hands back, and told her to climb in. The girl looked at him in surprise. Aldo smiled as he watched them. Lauren turned his head back, stating the fact that it was difficult for her to walk. The girl stared at him with wide eyes. Karina said she wanted Aldo to carry her. Lauren, upon hearing this, was greatly amazed by her words. Bending down, Aldo picked up the girl on his back and walked forward. The girl was laughing contentedly as the confused Aldo looked ahead. Behind them, Lauren looked menacing, unhappy with this state of affairs. Karina called Aldo and asked him to listen. She asked if he would catch a red bear for her. Then the main dish of the holiday will definitely be hers. She'll make jam. Lauren was behind Karina, shouting, and wasn't she ashamed? But the girl was clearly amused, and she was not ashamed at all. Honestly, what a naughty child. Lauren looked annoyed. Karina laughed, saying that it had started, and pointing her finger forward told Aldo to go. He looked at her questioningly. After doing as the girl said, Aldred ran forward to the girls' cheers, until Lauren behind them also started running, telling them not to dare leave someone who is older than them. Aldo, Flora, Aisha, and Toke stood looking ahead with their mouths wide open in surprise. Aisha asked if it was too big, looking at the two-story house. Even the magic room wasn't that big. Kirun greeted them at the entrance, waving her hand and telling them welcome. She explained that this was because aristocrats used to live in this palace. Scratching her head in embarrassment, she thanked them for helping her clean up. Aldo said that cleaning the palace alone is quite difficult. Frola handed the bundle to the confused Kiruna, saying that it was a gift in honor of the move. Although it is quite simple, she told her to hold it. The girl thanked her. They came here to help anyway, so it wasn't worth it. Flora smiled and pointed to the basket in Aldo's hands, which the guy held out. She added that they also brought bento with them. Then they'll all eat together. Kirun moved away from the aisle, telling everyone to pass. The four of them followed her into the depths of the huge house. They enthusiastically marveled at the house from the inside, stopping at the long stairs in the corridor. Flora said it was big and asked how many rooms there were. Aisha also looked surprised and said he was cool. Toke, on the other hand, looked confused when he asked if they would have to clean it all up. After his words, everyone except Flora immediately lost their admiration for understanding the scale of the future work. Kirun screamed at the guys not to lose heart, because they hadn't even started yet. Kirun said that this mansion has a large bathroom. She asked how about washing up in it. That's how she'll thank them for today. Aldo started up and stammered about the bathroom. He remembers when he was looking for a place to live, all he wanted was to take a bath. Aisha shuddered looking at him. She screamed that she wanted to swim. Kirun smiled contentedly and said that they would have fun after cleaning and suggested that they start already. Aisha called out to Toke, saying, well. The guy, putting a handkerchief on his head, looked at her. She said, grinning, that the headscarf looked so good on him. She asked if he wanted to become a janitor. The guy smiled and said that, well, yes. It just doesn't suit her catastrophically. She looks like a grandmother working in the garden. While Toke and Aisha crossed their mops behind them, looking at each other with annoyance, Aldo stretched next to them, who absolutely did not care about them. Aldred turned his attention to looking ahead. Flora was standing there with her back to him, tying her long hair into a ponytail. She held her hairband with her lips while she tried to smooth and gather her hair with her fingers. She also put a headscarf on her head. Looking at her, the guy was embarrassed, and his whole face was covered with a thick blush. Flora turned to him and asked with a smile what it was. The guy was emitting hearts looking at his beloved and said what a cute hairstyle she had. Behind him, Kurun started shaking her tail, calling out to him and asking if she tied a ponytail, he would also find it cute. Ignoring her, the guy went ahead dryly replying that it suits her too. He talked about cleaning and moved on while an angry Kurun was walking behind. Aldo opened the window and looked ahead with a smile. Leaning his hands on the window frame, he admired the view from the window, where a beautiful landscape with trees and mountains stretched out. Flora walked over to Aldo, handing him the brush and marveling at how many windows there were. In addition, if all the rooms are as large, then they may have to stay here overnight. In any case, they need to clean up everything here to a shine. Kurun looked at the Toke standing next to her and asked that when they finished cleaning, they would think about where to put the furniture. The guy agreed with her. To do this, he took measuring instruments with him. Aisha, standing in the corner with a brush outstretched in her hand, called Kurun, saying that she could not reach her wand in any way and asked if she could not do this. Kurun replied yes and asked to wait a bit. Toka, who was standing next to him, said that he could. Going out into the corridor, Kurun called Aldo and asked if they had any rags. The guy turned to her and replied that there was. He asked her to wait a bit. The guy handed his girlfriend a stack of rags. Flora looked at them questioningly and asked how they could wash the ceiling with them. The guys stood in a circle and Aldo told them to watch. Kurun began to cast a spell saying that let her thoughts come to life and used telekinesis. The rags from her hands soared into the air. Everyone except Aldo, who was probably already used to it, looked in surprise at the rags flying up to the ceiling. Aisha watched this with skepticism and said what a surreal landscape it was. Rags began to cling to the dirty ceiling of the palace. The fabric began to move on its own, clearing the surface of dirt. Surprised, Flora said they were cleaning up. Toke looked at it and said that's how it was. If she has such convenient magic, then there was no need to call them here. The girl turned to look at him. She confusedly explained that she would be happy to clean everything with magic herself. But it is still difficult for her to control several objects at once, so she will not be able to thoroughly clean some places with her magic. And there are some things she can't do with magic at all. Someone agreed with her, saying that there are a lot of things that cannot be done with magic. Flora looked admiringly at the ceiling, saying how cute they were and how they looked like caterpillars. Aldo said that Kurun was almost finished and suggested that they continue cleaning. The rags continued to clean the ceiling of dirt on their own. Tying another handkerchief over her nose and mouth, Flora used a brush to clean the surfaces from a layer of dust. There was so much dust on the walls that Aldo, wrapped in a cloud of dust, did not feel very well. Toke, also surrounded by dust, sneezed violently. Clouds of dust flew straight through the open window like smoke. Toke held on to his forearms, kneading and saying that he had only worked with a broom, but his hands were already tired. Flora appeared behind them with rags in her hands and Aldo, who brought a couple of buckets of water. He said that now we need to clean the floor. Toke looked at him in surprise. Toke, resting his hands on the railing, looked down and called out to Kurun, asking if she could clean the floor herself with magic. The girl replied, annoyed, that no, she couldn't. Flora, smiling, told them to try a little more for the sake of the Kurun school. The last push. The touched girl from below called Flora to look at her with big eyes. The guy was walking with a rag along the railing of the stairs and looked ahead. Bending down, he asked if she thought she needed a sign so that people would understand that there was a school of magic here. Aisha agreed with him, saying that it was true. So far there was no feeling at all that magic was being taught here. Kurun asked if it was true. The guy started to draw something in his notebook and asked what he could come up with a sign for her. He showed them a sketch on his notebook and said something like this. The girls looked at it and immediately replied how bad it was. The guy made another option and showed them. Kurun narrowed her eyes and asked if she was there too, so no one will come to them for sure. In the end, she decided that it was too early to think about the sign. She asked him to think about where to put the chairs and tables. We need places for 10 people. The guy showed her another version of the sign and asked what she would do if 20 or 30 people came. She definitely needs a sign. The irritated girl suggested that everyone ignore him and continue cleaning. She listened to him, and he's a fool. Everyone continued to clean up in silence. Aisha washed the door while Aldo and Flora washed the windows and floor. Kurun watched her friends who helped her with cleaning in such a huge place with a smile. Kurun explained to Toku, saying that they would need to place chairs and tables for the students here. Aisha turned to the couple. Flora and Aldo, who were standing on the sidelines, looked at each other. Flora said they would need baby chairs soon too. The guy agreed, saying that there was also a children's room. Aisha watched them from the side. In one room, Toke said that some boards should also be hung, and Kirun agreed with him. In another room, Aldo was saying that they needed a baby bed before that, and Flora tapped him on the shoulder saying that he was in too much of a hurry. Aisha waved her hand to the side saying that Flora and Ard were already a couple, so everything was fine. But these two are also acting like a couple. The girl clutched at her heart, feigning an attack. Why was there something pinching in her chest? Blushing, she hid her face behind her palm, covering her eyes. Why, when she looks at them, her heart feels so heavy? She looked at Toke and Kirun, breathing heavily. Seeing how they were smiling, she realized for sure that it was a heart attack. The girl looked exhausted thinking about it. After a while, the stairs and walls of the palace were finally clean and shiny. The second floor was as shiny as new. Raising their hands in joy, they shouted that they had finally finished cleaning. Flora clapped her hands for joy. So drooling, that's okay, and now everyone in the bathroom. Aisha hit him, telling him to wait a bit. The annoyed girl offered to decide on a rock, scissors, paper who would go to the bathroom first. Aldo asked Flora if they would play with them before the first victory or just calmly negotiate afterwards. Flora replied that he knew her and she would not insist. They decided to do as she wants. Toke and Aisha put their hands up to start playing a game where the winner goes to the bathroom first. Flora stared ahead admiringly, clenching her fists at her chest. Kirun noticed how big the bathroom was. Aisha agreed with her, saying that it was possible to swim in it. Kirun said that it is necessary to have a good wash here. The girls began to douse themselves with water. Aisha looked away at Flora passing by. She began to pull the cloth off Flora, saying that she couldn't come here with a towel. When they took the cloth away, they began to look at the girl in shock. She started groping the girl, saying that they definitely got bigger. Surprised, Flora called out to Aisha. Aisha called Kirun, telling her to come over. She said, touching the girl, that they were soft and big. Flora said that it only hinders her. She would like to have a beautiful body like theirs. Kirun looked at her with displeasure, saying that she would like her problems. Aisha said she should be punished for her greed. The girls began to rage in the bathroom when Flora decided to take revenge on them with tears in her eyes from embarrassment. The guys were standing outside the door. Toke was drawing something in his notebook. Aldo, hearing sounds from the bathroom, turned sharply towards the door. After a while, the guys also went to the bathroom and came out of it satisfied. You said what a big bathroom. Aldo said that he immediately felt better. The girls were sitting on the floor waiting for them. Kirun thanked the two of them for today, and she apologized that they were the first to go to the bathroom. Flora offered them something to eat. Kirun also apologized for having to eat on the floor. Toke replied that everything was fine. Aisha said that she had a heart attack after the bathroom. Toke looked at her, wondering what she was talking about. Aldo, looking at Flora, saw that she had already dried her hair. The girl replied that Kirun had dried them for her with her magic. Kirun was watching the couple. Flora handed over the food. Today she made crispy sandwiches fried on both sides. Toke and Aldo ate with gusto. Aldo smiled and told the girl that the mustard oil spread on bread gives them a specific taste. Delicious. I also agree that it is delicious. Toke turned to Kiruna and said that he was confident that her school would be successful. The girl happily told me that several children had already asked about her. I'm sure that means everything is fine. Speaking of magic, Kirun thinks it can be useful not only in battles, but also in everyday life. Flora gave an example that you can use it to dry your hair. Aisha coughed into her fist. That's right, she sincerely made great progress to the new Kirun school. Lifting her glass up with a wide smile, she screamed to the laughter of her friends who also held out their glasses. Flora said with a smile that if she needed any more help she could just tell them. Kirun looked at her. Blushing, the girl tilted her head down. Then the girl asked if she could just call her Flora. And she will call her Kirun. Surprised, Flora blushed, looking at her with wide eyes. Aldo was smiling at them. The girl, smiling happily, said that of course. Kirun was happy about it. 5 friends sitting on the floor were smiling and laughing while spending time with each other. That's how they became best friends. Kirun called everyone, asking if they were ready. She pointed at a huge thick tree, saying that she would become their blackboard. Toke looked at her with eyes wide with shock and asked again. Aldo behind him looked on with delight. And this tree will also become furniture for their magic school. She asked why they thought she had brought them to the forest. Toke looked at his friend in confusion, asking what they thought he should do with him. Aldo was taken aback by his friend's face. Frightened, Kirun pointed to the tree again and asked if they couldn't make furniture out of it. Toke looked at the girl. Toke remembered that they were urban after all and said that the material for furniture takes several years to prepare. Otherwise, nothing can be done from this tree. She doesn't want the furniture to be cracked and crooked. The girl looked at him with puppy pleading eyes, saying that she thought she would just cut down the tree. Toke turned pale and looked at her strangely. Aldo had exactly the same look as the girl. Sighing, the guy put his hands on his hips and gave up under their pressure, asking if they wanted to try to cut down this tree. Going ahead, he said that he would bring the tools now and asked to wait a bit. In his mind, he wondered why these city people were so eager to cut down this tree. The two behind him gleefully raised their hands in the air, smiling happily. Then he remade the axe to the girl, telling her to hold it, and she thanked him, accepting the tool. Bringing her hands with the axe behind her back, the girl leaned back heavily under his weight while the guys watched excitedly. Sighing, she hit the tree with an axe, but there was no effect and she quickly tired of the weight. Behind her, Aldo was supporting her, telling her that she could do it. The girl swung her arms back, shouting about how heavy he was. The axe slipped out of her hands. The instrument flew at high speed straight into the standing Toke, who was watching with round eyes. When the blade was right next to his surprised face, the hero grabbed its handle, stopping him. Shocked, Toke, turning pale, stood motionless while the hero casually asked Kurun if she was exhausted already, and laughing said that now he was. He chuckled thoughtfully, standing near the tree and examining it. He gripped the tool harder with his hands and hit the target. The impact felt like lightning passed along the plant. A second later, the huge tree split lengthwise into two. The two behind looked on in surprise. The joyful girl praised him, saying that he was doing well. Toke next to her was trembling all over, muttering that he had broken a 60-year-old tree with one blow. Aldo confidently said that this would be enough for them to board. The evil Toke behind him shouted, asking what was enough. The indignant guy held out his palm, telling him to give him the axe. He'll cut it down himself. Angry, he clutched an axe in his hand when the girl asked him, calling him a carpenter Toke, if he would cut down a tree for furniture with them. Blows could be heard in the forest. Toke clearly beat the instrument in the right place while the couple watched on the sidelines. Swinging the axe and striking, Toke looked very focused on his task, clearly not doing this for the first time. His friends watched him with their mouths open with interest. The tree began to shake, and the guy put his hand on its felled trunk to push it aside. The friends raised their heads up, watching as the tree trunk fell to the ground, intact. The girl praised Toke, saying that he was doing well. Aldo joined him in saying that he cut down so quickly. Toke exhaled and was proud of himself, making a serious face. If he didn't know how to do it, he wouldn't have become a carpenter. He asked Aldo if it wasn't a simple matter for a former adventurer. He replied that he was not at all. He admitted that he bought all the furniture in the city. So when he cut down the tree, Aldo realized that he didn't even know what to do with it. Toke explained that if he wants to become a carpenter one day, he needs to be able to find and cut down trees suitable for furniture, and also sometimes grow, depending on the case. Although he thinks the city worker won't be able to learn it, probably. Kurun said that cutting trees and making furniture on his own, what a wonderful and interesting life he has. The guy looked away and scratched his face with his finger. He scratched the back of his head in embarrassment. Asked her if she thinks so. She looked up at him and asked what they were going to do now. He said that in order for this tree to be used, they should cut it and leave it to dry for several years. The hero asked in surprise about several years. The girl also clarified about the time interval. She was surprised that although they have a tree, it will only be suitable in 2 years. The guy said that then you need to get rid of the parts that are generated by insects, as well as level the boards in color and size. And only then will the tree become suitable for furniture. Aldo realized that Toke is very serious about creating furniture. The girl added that this is why the furniture is so expensive. A little later, they arrived at the workshop. Now they are going to choose the boards. The girl, thoughtfully mooing, chose the option she needed. Her eyes widened dramatically when she found something she liked. She grabbed one of the blackboards, saying that they would make a blackboard out of this one. This wood is also suitable for chairs and tables. Aldo smiled and said it wasn't a bad board, was it? Toke asked about the bulletin board, if they would make it out of the same material. The girl handed him the board, telling him to hold it. Toke looked at her strangely and Aldo asked if something was wrong. The guy ran his palm over the wood, saying that it was still wet. You need to try to dry it with steam drying. Aldo asked again about the steam drying. It will only make them wetter. Toke explained that they are wet not because of the water but because of the juice, and they will be able to vaporize this juice. Kurun thought about steam drying and said she thought she could create heat, water, and pressure. Toke was surprised and gasped, saying that for sure. He asked about magic and how long it would take to dry. The girl replied that quite a bit, but she thinks they will speed up the process if we put all the boards together. They dragged all the boards outside, piling them on top of each other at small intervals so that they did not touch. When everything was ready, Toke asked if it was okay. The girl was standing nearby, holding a magic wand in her hands. He replied that yes, it was fine, but if they made it higher, it would be easier to raise the temperature. Magic began to emanate from her staff. She began to cast a spell asking fire and water to obey and merge together. Her eyes were closed as she concentrated. Several large whirlwinds of elements rushed straight forward from her staff, hitting the boards in front of her. When they collided, they enveloped the materials. Steam was coming from them. Continuing to use the spell, she asked the guy how many of them should be dried approximately. He pointed his finger at the board, saying that when such cracks become twice as large, then it is possible to finish. She asked if it was normal for them to crack like that. He explained that the cracks determine the readiness of the tree. They only appear on the edges of the board, so everything is fine. The tree began to crack gradually, and at one point the crack widened. The guy said it was great and that it was enough. He told her to gradually lower her temperature. Clouds of steam began to emanate from the boards, soaring into the air. Toke lifted the top board, taking it in his hands. He pounded on the wood with his fist. As befits a first-class adventurer, this is perfect. The girl awkwardly replied that he told her what to do, so she did it. Aisha, who was waving at them, and Flora, with a basket in their hands, were walking towards the trio of friends. The guys turned in their direction. Aisha waved at them as she walked towards them, and one of her friends was surprised, saying that it was Flora and Aisha. Flora said they brought food. Kurun was delighted, saying how great it was. She was so hungry after the sorcery. Toke looked at the girl indifferently, asking why she had come here. Aisha told him to shut up because it was definitely not him to see. Flora explained that she helped her choose a dress for the Harvest Festival. A little later in the workshop, Toke was sitting at the table, drawing something in his notebook, and he looked thoughtful. The four other guys stood in the doorway of the room, silently watching the guy and not saying anything. Kurun was the first to speak, saying that Toke was simply incredible. Cut down a tree so fast. Aisha smiled skeptically, asking if felling trees seemed incredible to them. Kurun smiled awkwardly, covering her mouth with her hand, and replied that they could not cope with this task. Aisha looked at them strangely. The girl sighed, saying that he was the same age as her, and already he was working with his hands and trading. Does useful things. Aldo confirmed it. When he was looking for a place to live, he asked about the carpenter. Everyone talked about him. He is trusted throughout the village. And Aldo soon believed him. Aisha didn't want to admit it and praise him, so she briefly replied that it could be. Everyone looked at the guy again, and Aldo called him, asking if it was time for him to take a break. The guy replied that he understood and asked for a second to finish something and then rest. Flora and Aldo turned around and began to leave, leaving the two girls alone. They continued to look ahead. The guy in front of them was sitting with his back to them, continuing to work. Kurun looked at him with admiring eyes, saying that he was devoted to his work and it was so wonderful. Aisha was watching next to him with an impassive face. She looked rather indifferent as she continued to watch the profile of the guy who was working intently. At one point, her facial expressions changed, and her impassive face was replaced by eyes full of adoration. After a while, the admiring look had disappeared a little, but the sparkle was still present in her eyes when she drank tea that flowed past her mouth downwards. The couple looked at her worriedly, and Flora asked Aisha if she was okay. Aisha, hearing her friend's question, choked on her tea. She awkwardly wiped the tea dripping from her chin with her hand and answered a little nervously that yes. Deciding to change the subject, she decided to talk about the Harvest Festival. She asked who would be the main princess at this festival. The girl was embarrassed, continuing to wipe her face, which was flushed with embarrassment. Kurun giggled softly at her while Aldo looked at Flora questioningly, not understanding anything. Kurun said admiringly that the festival was only 3 days away. A wedding at the Harvest Festival is so romantic. Although this is her first Harvest Festival, so she doesn't know how much fun it is. Someone told Ard that he should participate in the festival as a hunter, but the guy immediately replied that he would be busy. Flora happily said that the sweets she had prepared for Kurun's help would be finished there. Kurun and Aldo froze, simultaneously thinking with horror that they had not ended. The guys at the table laughed and talked, while Toke continued his work in the next room behind the open doors. Aisha still looked embarrassed, sitting with her back to the guy. Kurun giggled softly while Aldo ate the sweets. The man on the stage was talking about how this year, thanks to everyone's help, they were able to hold a great harvest festival. They'll find anything in the tents. He invited everyone to have a lot of fun today. First of all, he suggested starting with a new gate where the grooms and brides stand. They give them good luck. Flora and Aldred were one of the couples who stood in wedding costumes. The happy people shouted blessings for a good harvest. They thanked and wished for a good harvest. There were smart girls in dresses in the crowd. Karina, Iana, Kurun, and Aisha, who clapped their hands with happy faces. Looking at each other in their wedding dresses, Flora and Aldred laughed happily. The people shouted their congratulations to the three couples and wished them fertility. Someone in the crowd shouted for them to seal their alliance now. The rest of the residents picked up on these words, also wishing the same. Aldo looked questioningly at the people and drew attention to what was happening on the sidelines. A couple on the side of them were kissing to the shouts of the crowd. Aldo started, looking at them in surprise. He turned to Flora, who was standing facing him, covering her eyes. Embarrassed, Aldo began to lift the wedding veil from Flora's face with trembling hands. His face was red from embarrassment. When Flora's face opened, it became clear how she was pulling her lips forward with her eyes closed, waiting for a kiss. The guy gradually began to approach her and kissed her to the enthusiastic shouts of the crowd. Flora's father said that together with these couples, the sun would now shine on them all. He thanked everyone for their support. Aldo and Flora stood behind him, their faces red with embarrassment. When the ceremony on stage ended, the couple walked around the festival. Flora's mom talked about how great it was that the two of them decided to attend this event. The woman smiled happily, saying that they were doing well, and added that now it was time for gifts. Karina, standing with the other girls, held up her basket of treats, saying that the sweets were here. There were a lot of people walking between the stalls at the festival. A couple of newlyweds walked in front, carrying baskets, while the other girls walked behind. Flora said that did Aldo know that all the tents are divided into sectors, in which everyone represents something different. She looked towards one of the tents, saying that the winemakers were located here. There were cheese makers on the other side. Aisha looked away and Kirun turned her attention to the girl. Aldo suggested going around each one, and Flora agreed. Friends were approaching the winemaker's tent. There were huge barrels full of fresh grapes and bottles of wine nearby. Villagers handed the couple their baskets of treats. Then they went to the cheesemaker's tent. Sellers also handed them treats in a basket. There were various cheeses on the tables to sample. Aldo and Flora took one piece each to try. They went through different tents all together. Aldo asked for forgiveness and a friend, recognizing him, called out by name. Approaching them, Toke said that today was a blessed harvest day and asked them to let him thank them for participating in this holiday. The couple thanked people for their gifts until the one standing on the sidelines turned back. Aisha was standing there, confused. The guy asked what kind of horse outfit it was. The girl retorted by asking what she thought he was or not. He always wears dirty rags. The pair looked at each other angrily as if they were ready to fight. Iana called her sister while Karina and Kirun sighed on the sidelines because the couple had gone back to their old ways. Aldo waved his hand, telling everyone to go. Kirun put a piece of food in her mouth, impaling it on a fork, and talked admiringly about the meat, which was soft. Lauren laughed, asking if it was true. This is his signature recipe, so she needs to eat faster. Lauren was so glad that he was able to catch such a rare animal, even though his meat was a little harsh. But he thought of putting it out with fruit and honey. The quality of the meat is excellent. He still can't believe that he got something like this. Karina looked at the man, asking the master if he was hurt. The man began to deny, answering that he had only cut himself. The man yelled, saying that he must have tired them out. Someone replied that he would say the same thing. Karina said that Aldo is the master for her. The angry man asked again, to the laughter of the others. Flora's mom, standing in front of the couple, said it looked like they had greeted everyone, and Aldo said yes. She was sorry, of course, but it was probably time for the two of them to get back. The bride and groom need to rest for the first night. Therefore, if they have finished going around the tents, she needs to escort them back. Aljo said, frustrated, that it was like that. Karina was eating meat behind, saying how delicious it was. Flora held out the basket, saying that before they left they could take it. Surprised, Kirun asked what it was all about. Flora owes them a favor. Aldo thanked them all for today. The girls told them to come back next year. Karina opened one of the bags and found a cupcake and cookies inside. If you get treats from a couple that was blessed on the day of the great harvest, then you will be lucky, especially for unmarried girls. Kirun sarcastically said, whatever they say. Aisha, looking at the bag, thought that whoever gets it will also be blessed. She remembered Toke and immediately, with a reddened face, began to deny it, pretending that she was disgusted. The couple climbed the hill further away from the festival. Flora stumbled suddenly, but Aldo held her back. He asked if she was wearing a strand, and the girl confusedly explained that her foot had caught on the dress. After looking at her, the guy lifted the girl in his arms. She confusedly asked him if she was heavy, and he laughed and replied that she was not. They finally came home. The guy continued to hold her in his arms. Once inside, he finally set her down on the floor. The girl smiled and thanked him, and they laughed. Flora called Aldo, and he looked at her. She hugged the guy tightly and, closing her eyes, said that she was insanely happy. The guy was embarrassed. Finally hugging her back, he said that too. He put his hand on her cheek and kissed her. When they pulled away from each other, the guy ducked sharply, climbing under the wedding dress while the girl surprised him. The girl looked down in embarrassment and screamed. She asked the guy to let her at least take off her dress.